Chapter 21, Chapter 21 Christmas with Carianites. She set aside the teacup and said, I'll prepare another place to have the book stored by the end of the week. For now, let it be known to others that the book was destroyed by the Mandarin's disintegration beam. Harry nodded and was silently happy that she agreed to go along with his plan. Harry asked, so, who is this Mandarin guy? The Ancient One took from her robes some items Harry recognized as the tech the Mandarin used to break the magic security. She said, place these in your inventory and pause so you can analyze them. Tell me what you have discovered first and I will tell you what I know of the Mandarin. Harry had no problems complying and did as she asked. He didn't know the Mandarin dropped them when Harry snatched the book from under his nose. Once paused, Harry quickly realized whatever this tech was, it wasn't Earth-based. Sure, it used electricity, but that wasn't all it used. Some of the materials seemed to use principles which Harry did even know those materials had. Harry would have to experiment with them later to learn more since they worked off logic Harry wasn't familiar with. Harry unpaused and said, it was built on Earth but it's not Earth tech. The Ancient One nodded and said, it is said that the Mandarin discovered an alien ship many decades ago and mastered the technology. He crafted the energy sources of the ship into 10 rings which have granted him great power as you know. Many know of the Mandarin as he is not afraid of showing off and many fear his power. His disintegration beam most of all. Decades? Harry asked. She nodded weakly. Yes. Though the source of his health at that age is not the rings. He is more than just a master martial artist. He has completely harnessed his chi, his life force and has strengthened it to the point where he can maintain his youth as he pleases. Harry read a few books about life force which mentioned the power of chi and the possibility of youth extension, but Harry didn't know anyone was actually capable of it. The quantity and quality of the chi required were not things that could be obtained in a modern world or so he thought. Thousands of years ago someone with that much chi would be called an immortal. But in this day and age, even the immortals had died. The Ancient One said, you're to avoid open exercise for 3 days to avoid suspicion on your recovery from fighting the Mandarin. That will be all and good work. Harry thanked the Ancient One and turned to leave, but before he got to the door she said, and Harry, do be careful. Some books are sentient and many such books will not have the best intentions of the reader. I do not know how your power will react to such a book, so in the future, be careful of what you place in your inventory. Harry felt the blood drain from his face for a moment before his mind automatically steadied itself. Harry could already think of half a dozen books that fell under the criteria the Ancient One described. When he placed a book into his inventory, it practically became a part of him. What if the book was already someone else? He didn't want to think about it. Secrets were not well kept in Camartage and eventually some details about what occurred came out. Harry bravely took the book that the Mandarin had come for and lasted long enough against him to use the book to block his disintegration beam. At least that was the story the Ancient One encouraged and she doubted the Mandarin would refute the details. Once Harry recovered, Mordo took him under his wing and began training him in earnest. There were several masters who often took time to personally teach disciples, but Mordo was considered the best when it came to combat. Caecilius was also very skilled but the man had a sadistic side that came out when fighting someone weaker than him which included much of Camartage. Few if any of his sparring partners didn't require some medical attention for cuts, broken bones, or concussions. Harry avoided sparring with him for that reason and Mordo never allowed it in the first place. After a year of crafting, Harry had successfully created bracers which increased the amount of momentum he needed to move. This did not increase his weight or make him fall faster as any sparring partner would notice such a thing, it simply increased the amount of energy and effort he needed to make any movement. In other words, he would have to go all out to fight someone at a lower fitness level and he would strengthen himself better doing it. Harry used these to spar with Mordo and train under him with everything he had, which from Mordo's perspective looked to be quite promising but still human. Harry finally used his long cutter sword while sparring which made Mordo very relieved he would not have to talk Harry out of using that ridiculous heavy sword. The sword style Harry used still worked with the longer than normal sword but Harry used more footwork variations to strike, dodge, and counter than before. Mordo also began training Harry with his insights into the Heart Palace. He said, you know Harry, I must admit some jealousy in how easily you achieved it. I was not so lucky. Harry could sense a story and asked, what happened? He smiled wryly and said, when the Ancient One knows you can succeed in a difficult training means, she won't let you use an easier means. Because of this, I didn't learn even basic control for some time. Many who came after me seemed to achieve results quickly, but not me. I didn't even know she had given me the training for the Heart Palace until later. He shook his head in reminiscence and continued, one day, I told her I just couldn't do it. She told me I wasn't surrendering to the energy and trying to control it instead. She opened a portal and told me to follow. Harry wondered where someone could be taken for that. Where'd you go? Mt. Everest. She took me to the top of Mt. Everest and told me someone without proper attire would likely go into shock in 2 minutes. She then re-entered the portal and left me there. He stayed silent for a moment before continuing. I understood then that what I had been trying to fight until that moment had never been an enemy. I had in fact wasted so much time fighting myself. I gave up the fight. You cannot win a fight against yourself. In the barren cold of Everest I felt the cold numb my flesh and bones, but in doing so, my other senses became more attuned. I felt the energy of space at the peak of the world and accepted it within me, changing it and changing myself. Once I had done this, the first stage of the Heart Palace had been completed and I could control the energy as if it were a part of me. I escaped Everest that day. The Ancient One guided me not where I wanted to go, but where I needed to go. And I have risen far since then. Harry wondered how the Ancient One would feel if she knew Mordo turned a lesson plan into a religious experience. Harry was somewhat thankful he was able to spend another full year of training under the Ancient One and Mordo before Mordo decided to take him along on a small mission. After 2.5 years of camartage, Harry's stats had gone through several breakthroughs. Harry Potter. Level 170 age 14. STR 235 AGI 267. In 355 WIS 350. Luck 20. Warrior Path rank 26. Scholar Path rank 38. Magic Path rank 36. Tech Path rank 23. Business Path rank 11. Crafting Path rank 15. First was Harry's martial technique. Though still leagues below someone like the Mandarin, Harry was at least as skilled as Mordo. Though since he still fought with the training bracers, from Mordo's perspective Harry was simply competent enough not to die pointlessly. The reason he reached Mordo's level was that although the man held back his strength in the spars, he did not hold back his skill to ensure Harry's technique was not lacking in any way he couldn't fix. Harry had fully memorized the content of every book in the library including the Ancient One's private collection. He asked permission once he comprehended the content of the Master's library and after she made Harry promise not to use any spells or rituals contained within for any reason without first consulting her, she agreed. The fact that Harry didn't summon any demons was good evidence he didn't see temptation in the same way most do. Harry did in fact come to her with 3 or so spells he learned and wanted to try out and she was willing to walk him through the dangers and supervise the practice. Harry's Heart Palace had accumulated large amounts of nature energy, strength energy, anti-magic energy, and illusion energy. He spent several months on each over the last 2 years and eventually synchronized the energies with his life force and soul, allowing him to control those energies as easily as he did dimensional energy. Each energy was from a specific dimension the Ancient One led him to in the astral plane. Strength energy for example can be easily found within the Crimson Cosmos, a plane of existence currently ruled by Sidorak. Usually to control strength energy one must invoke Sidorak's name, but Harry could bypass that requirement meaning he didn't even need to chant the spell. This was one of the great advantages of the Heart Palace method and Harry had surpassed Mordo in its usage since Mordo was still trying to absorb energy he couldn't even feel. Harry's scholar path increased when he learned something or comprehended something new so it increased suitably of course. The whole of wizard knowledge is only about controlling exotic energy. Sure, exotic energy is formidable, but it is still only one type of energy. Harry had been learning about dozens of types of energies, their uses, and their various permutations. He expanded his knowledge of those studies with what he knew of nuclear physics, theoretical physics, and astrophysics and merged them together. Harry now knew more of the science of magic than even the Ancient One, though she could mentally calculate it faster as she had better instincts from centuries of practice. Harry's tech path jumped when he finally cracked the secret behind the Mandarin's toys. Since they basically interfaced around magic Harry had a base to work from in figuring them out. What Harry found interesting was that they basically overloaded the security spells and were likely powered by the Mandarin's rings. No one else could use them which was likely why he didn't care if he left them. He probably didn't think a sorcerer in a temple would have any use of it. The business path increased slowly on its own with or without Harry's input, though it did increase faster when Harry participated in his business interests. The red-headed twins had opened their store filled with fun prank and gag merchandise and Harry would often head over to see what they had that was new. Sirius still ran much of it and was having a great time. He and Amelia got married a few months ago and Harry enjoyed the wedding as it was the first reunion he had with many of his friends. He still wrote Hermione a short letter every month or so and she would write back. They were still friends but she was getting on with her life. Harry realized at the wedding that Neville and Hermione sat very close to each other and he was happy for them. The other, larger part of his business interest was the Muggle bank that Gringotts had opened using computers. They named it P&G Bank and Trust, and hired squibs and Muggleborns to be the face of the bank as they continued to research Muggle companies and use them to gain more money. They would often give loans of Harry's gold converted into British pounds to up-and-coming businesses at a decent interest and were making long-term money goals from such. What was interesting was that if a business failed, the business would be forfeited to the goblins who would delegate Muggleborns to it to fix up the place using magic and make the business worth something, then sell it to someone else. This method required quite a bit of trial and error and more than a little help from Harry himself but eventually they figured out what to look out for when giving loans. If the company was any good, the goblins would also retain the rights to buy partial ownership of the company and in doing so, P&G Bank and Trust slowly but surely grew. As far as the world knew, P&G stood for Potter and Gold which were both old families of Britain which decided to open a bank. The government knew the truth of course, but when the royal family learned the Magicals were finally leaving the Victorian era, they had no problem approving it and the bank did in fact make a minor boost to the economy and paid their taxes properly as good citizens of the crown. Harry's crafting path improved from 2 sources. The first was the obvious, Harry would take materials and mold them with magic and intent and try to create artifacts. He was already considered a master of metallurgy, tanning, carving, and material physics and chemistry in general. The second source was unexpected but fruitful. Turned out cooking was considered crafting, so Harry started cooking all the time. The higher the crafting path, the easier it was to craft something, so even if Harry rose the path through cooking, it still made it easier to craft working artifacts. Harry would put every cookbook he found in his inventory, practice at least one sophisticated meal a day, and every once in a while he would find some cooking contest in Britain to participate in. So far the best he had done was come in third, but that was not too surprising. Cooking really was an art, and there were many geniuses who surpassed him. Although Mordo had no clue as to the depth of Harry's actual strength, he still requested Harry's accompaniment on a routine retrieval mission to show Harry the ropes. The Ancient One couldn't see Harry's future, so had no idea what would happen. She still agreed to the request and basically said, "Have fun." Another reason Mordo requested Harry was that the mission took place in London and he didn't want to ask Caecilius to join him, since most missions needed to, regardless of the difficulty or lack thereof. Mordo knew Harry often returned to London for various things, so Harry likely knew the layout as well as the sadistic jerk did. The mission itself was to find a specific item which had been stolen from Camartage long ago. It was a relic called the Visconti Sforza deck. It was apparently the very first tarot deck ever created and also the most powerful. It was gifted to Camartage in the 15th century but lost in the 17th century, and rumors of its reappearance had reached Camartage. Mordo had a few places he wanted to check out and explained most of them to Harry. Though it was late December, they both wore robes that kept them warm, so neither were bothered. Harry himself was wondering why he didn't receive a game-generated quest. He actually had no idea why a quest would generate for something or why it wouldn't for something else. He got a quest for making Hermione prank a teacher but didn't get one for protecting the Grand Grimoire from the Mandarin. It was slightly irksome, since if he got the quest he'd get a nice map pointer showing him exactly where the thing was. But then again, he didn't want to get spoiled. The search took 3 days and it was actually Christmas by the time they found it in a gift shop. Harry bought it since the man selling it had no idea it was real, and if Mordo tried to convince him it was, the seller was more likely to increase the price than give it to them. The relic itself seemed dormant to Harry. Mordo explained that relics would appear so until they chose the one they wished to wield them. The deck was actually a fairly powerful relic that, in addition to its ability to predict coming events, its cards could sharpen themselves and fly at the user's command like a swarm of blades. Rather than return, Harry said he would spend the day admiring the Christmas decorations around London, which Mordo was fine with. Not long after admiring the giant tree, Harry sensed something that was more than a little odd. Time energy, and a lot of it. Harry followed the source around a corner and 3 people ran straight into him. One of them, a man wearing a bow tie, said, "Oh hello, sorry about that," as he got up. Harry said, "What's with the rush?" The bow tie wearer Harry confirmed was the source of the time energy said, "Yes, well, we're being chased so got to run." A red-headed woman and a skinny man in a striped sweater followed him. Ping. New quest, rescue the Time Lord. Help the Doctor stop the Carrionites and find his way home. 3 shadow-like specters flew over Harry but almost immediately turned around. "Fallen before our eyes, a feast." One of them practically screeched. The other said, "Lead us to what we crave, our spell has done." Harry wasn't sure if that strange croaking sound was a giggle. The 3 looked like a cross between a Dementor and a crow, and Harry realized they seemed to have decided to eat him. The redhead shouted, "Doctor," when she realized their pursuers were more intent on eating Harry than following them. The spectral trio descended on Harry, and the 3 from before seemed to be yelling at Harry to run. One of the bird creatures moved to snatch something from Harry's head, a hair perhaps, but Harry ducked and kicked it back before sending a flying roundhouse at the other 2, sending them into a wall. Harry calmly approached the 3 he ran into earlier and said, "Those aren't friends of yours, I suppose?" The one he initially kicked recovered and shouted, "I shall drink from the blood of your heart." The group gave a look at Harry and grabbed him while shouting, "Run." Harry decided to follow along. While gaining distance, the redhead said, "Wait, kicking them works. Why can't we go back to that?" The man with the bow tie said, "They don't exist on our physical realm, kicking them only pisses them off." Harry wondered how much experience these people had at running while talking. Harry said, "I'm Harry, by the way." The redhead said, "I'm Amy, this is my husband Rory." The man in the sweater gave a small wave as they continued to run down the street. Harry figured the man must be used to being introduced by her. The bow tie wearing leader said, "I'm the doctor." Harry asked, "Of what?" "What?" he asked back. "What are you the doctor of?" Rory chuckled, which made Harry look to him. The man finally spoke up and said, "Most people say Doctor Who." Harry said, "What is far more interesting?" Amy said, "Come to think of it, what are you a doctor of?" "Is now really the best time for this?" he almost shouted. The 3 bird things were flying fast at them, and Harry said, "So do you have a plan?" The doctor said, "Not really, making things up as I go." "Do you want me to kick them again?" "What good will that do us?" the doctor asked. "Buy us some time to make a better plan. We need something to distract them and throw them off our scent." "Something I'll think of any second now." Harry felt them getting closer and casually took out a Patronus grenade. Rory noticed it in Harry's hand and said, "What's that?" Harry threw it behind him. After a moment of blinding light, the space suddenly contained a massive shining dragon that barely fit in the space between the buildings on the street. The glowing white construct took a look at the specters and roared. The ghastly creatures turned and flew away immediately, but the massive Patronus did not give chase. The trio stopped dead and turned to see the massive glowing white dragon that looked both real and illusionary. Harry noticed that all three of them could see it even though Muggles couldn't see exotic energy-based magic. Harry attributed it to the fact that even the two normal-seeming ones did have an excess amount of time energy which allowed them to see things others could not. The bird creatures also seemed to have a field around them which made them harder to notice, which explained the lack of shrieking on the streets from the ghostly specters flying down London. All the lights in the surroundings started going off and coming back on as the patroness faded away. This was a newer version of the spell grenade which had less exotic energy emission, but it still had some effect. The fact that the lights came back on at all was a good sign to Harry. The exotic energy hadn't done permanent damage to the lines in the area. Rory was the first to speak up. Barely. What? What was that? Harry shrugged. Dragon in a can. Useless in a fight but scary enough. Those bird thingies will probably figure out it's not dangerous soon, so let's go. The doctor led them down a few more streets and they stopped running when he felt they lost them. Rory and Amy looked decently out of breath but seemed to recover quickly enough. Harry took the moment to say, "So, what were they? Why did they talk about eating me? And what exactly are you a doctor of?" The doctor recovered after just a few breaths and said, "Carrionites. They feed off life energy and you look delicious to them. And everything." Harry frowned and said, "Wait a second." The doctor looked like he was about to try to convince Harry he wasn't lying about the Carrionites, but Harry said, "You're a doctor of everything." The possible not an actual doctor looked taken aback. Yes I am." He straightened his bow tie as if that proved his point. Harry asked, "So you've written a dissertation on every single subject that exists, and after a review by your peers it was accepted and published?" When Amy saw the dumbstruck look on the not a doctor's face, she started laughing hysterically, and Rory also seemed to have trouble keeping himself from joining her. "Well, I am." "Yes, well, shut up." This caused her to laugh even harder. "I'm an honorary doctor, okay?" Rory said, "So you never actually got a degree on Earth or Gallifrey or anything?" He shook his head and said, "It wasn't called a doctorate when I graduated on Gallifrey, but I was given the title, okay? I am the doctor." Harry said, "That's nice. Got a plan to deal with the Carrionites before they eat anyone? I doubt I'm the only tasty morsel in London." Amy looked oddly at Harry and said, "You're what, 16? How are you so calm about this, and why did you have a canned dragon?" "I'm 14 and a half actually. And weird things happen to me all the time. I'm used to it by now. And I have a canned dragon because I put it there. I like to make things like that." Harry had the doctor's attention at that point. "You made that? How? I doubt you'd understand if I told you." "Oh yeah? Try me." Harry smiled and said, "Magic." Amy said, "Wait, real magic? Are you a wizard or something?" Rory picked up on this and said, "I don't think wizards have canned dragons. I mean, why put it in a can?" Harry said with mock accusation, "Well, where else am I going to put it?" Amy stifled a laugh and said teasingly, "Yeah, Rory, where else is he going to put it?" The doctor shook his head and said, "Okay, Harry the wizard, we need to find some place safe. Carrionites are as picky as they are vindictive, so they won't target anyone else until they get to you." Harry shrugged. At least that was convenient. "I've got a place up the street." He rarely used it since Camartage was quieter and had more dimensional energy, but he needed a place for his mail to go when the Poe box complained about the smell of the mail he usually got. Chapter 22. Chapter 22 Harry Potter vs. Time and Space. Once they got inside, Harry said, "All right, pick something you want for Christmas dinner." Rory said, "Anchovy pizza." The doctor said, "Fish fingers, and custard if you have any." Amy sighed and said, "I'm not hungry." Harry set up a table and took some of the prepared dishes from him inventory. Plenty of meals were easier to make in larger servings than small ones, so he had hundreds of different dishes in his inventory. "Okay, dinner's ready," he called out less than a minute later. They came in to find a table plated with 3 slices of handmade anchovy pizza, a plate of hand-breaded beer, battered fried fish fingers and homemade from scratch custard, a bowl of freshly chopped Caesar salad and chips, and a plate of chicken Alfredo where Harry sat down. In the center of the table was a steaming teapot and Harry was pouring out 4 cups of tea from it. Amy said, "Okay, that was too fast." Harry shrugged and said, "Magic." When Amy saw that the place left for her wasn't empty, she decided not to complain as the salad did look delicious. Harry had enough experience cooking to know what "I'm not hungry" translated to when it came to women and food. The doctor dipped the fish fingers into the custard and said between bites, "So you live on your own?" Harry took a sip of tea before answering back, "That's right. I'm emancipated." "So you got a plan yet?" Rory said, "What happened to the TARDIS? I mean, I get that we crashed and those things started chasing us. But where did they come from and why did we crash?" Amy said, "The lights went off, right? Is the TARDIS broken?" The doctor gave a slightly pained smile and said, "Not broken, Amy, dead. The TARDIS will never move again." Rory said, "What? How?" The doctor let his head drop and said, "The TARDIS is powered by the universe it was built in. Those Carrionites shifted the course of the TARDIS into another universe. This is London, 2006, but not your London 2006. Amy said, "They shifted the course? But how can they do that?" "It's my fault," he groaned. "They were sealed in a magic ball when Shakespeare reversed the spell that was supposed to free them. I kept the ball in my TARDIS, but it was a ball they made. It's been about 200 years since then, and I suppose they came up with a way to not only free themselves but drag me down." Harry said, "So these Carrionites use magic?" "One of them said their spell led them to what they crave." Another tried to snatch one of my hairs. How does their magic work, and if they dragged you here, what is it here that they want? After finishing another fish finger, the doctor said, their magic works on quantum mnemonics, the right word in the right place at the right time. Harry said, sounds like hacking. Harry wondered if a hair from his head was like a password to access his data. The doctor nodded and said, a bit like that, yeah. Their whole species save those three were banished to the deep dark, the emptiness beyond the void. Harry thought that sounded exactly like the dark dimension. As for here, well, I'm not sure. I suppose there must be something here they really want. Harry said, well, this reality does overlap with a few others, and one of them happens to be a dimension beyond time and death called the dark dimension. Maybe those Carrionites came here because it would be easier to open a door here and free the rest of them. The doctor made no effort to hide his surprise. Well, that could be it, yeah. Harry set his cup down and said, and if the Carrionites are hackers of the universe, then we need to do something soon. Some computers are easier to hack than others, and I doubt this universe is harder to hack than yours is. Once they get familiar enough with the operating system of this universe, they could become very powerful very quickly. Oh, yes, that could be bad, he said as he pieced together the realizations. Amy said, if you're a wizard, do you have any ideas? I don't use hacks. I know how to write programs that affect the universe and how to overwrite existing programs. Unless you have a book on universe hacking 101, I wouldn't know where to begin. Amy and Rory simultaneously looked at the doctor, who said, well, there might be something in my TARDIS. But I don't think dash. Harry interrupted, I'm a very fast reader. Where is your TARDIS? Rory said, across from the intersection of St. Martin's Ave and Barking Road. Harry questioned, you parked a spaceship in the middle of London. This brought a smile to the doctor's face. Yes, I did. After finishing supper, Rory got up to head to the door, but Harry said, where are you going? To the TARDIS. Harry got up and moved to the living room and started circling his hand. A portal of rust-colored sparks opened and showed a blue police box on the other side. Harry asked, that's your TARDIS? Amy said, oh my god, that's real magic. Harry smiled and said, that's nothing. He threw the portal forward where it swallowed the TARDIS and vanished, but now there was a police box in Harry's living room. Harry sensed a large amount of dimensional energy from the box, far more than any artifact or relic he had ever seen. Amy opened the door to the phone box, revealing only a dimly lit space within. Come on, she said. Rory and the doctor walked into the box and Harry followed shortly behind. The space inside ended up being much larger than the exterior, but it was more than that. The space itself was different. Pocket dimension maybe? Nope, definitely. Harry said, nice pocket dimension. Amy saw the doctor frown at the lack of excitement and patted his shoulder. Not everyone is going to be flabbergasted, doctor. Rory asked, so where is the book? The doctor answered, in the library. And where is the library? Amy answered for him, next to the swimming pool. Right, of course. Next to the swimming pool. How could I have forgotten? Rory plainly stated. Harry felt the space change and the door closed behind them. The doctor comes for his TARDIS, echoed voices from the darkness. A constant of the universe it is, any universe it seems. So easy a trap to set. And you've brought dinner with you, how lovely. Harry paused the world and walked around a bit. He'd never been inside a pocket dimension, much less a pocket dimension created in another universe. The dimensional energy around him didn't respond to the energy in his heart palace, meaning he couldn't use it. The space itself was also clean of almost any other type of energy save time energy, which he still had a long way to go before he could use it. The witch things weren't in the room, they seemed to be echoing their voices from elsewhere. Maybe they wanted to direct the group? The honorary doctor said they didn't exist in the physical realm, meaning they were basically projections. Technically that's what a hacker was. A hacker didn't exist in the computer he was hacking, but usually somewhere else. Their presence in the computer was virtual. So how do you stop a hacker? Security, firewalls, and passwords would hold one back, but not truly stop them. The only way to stop a hacker was a counter-hack. That was going to be a problem. Sorcery didn't work here, and Harry already suspected using exotic energy magic in a pocket dimension containing what looked to be a spaceship that could travel through time might not be the brightest idea. Luckily he had lots of stuff in his inventory. Harry unpaused and took 4 swords from his inventory. All right, everyone gets a sword. Rory said, where did you get that? Amy grabbed 2 swords and passed one to him. The doctor said, swords, love a good sword. Not sure what good it'll do us though. Harry said, they're more useful than glow sticks. Let there be light. At the command phrase the swords started glowing, shining light all around the rooms. The doctor smiled and said, oh that's cool. Amy swung it around and said, I feel like a Jedi. Harry nodded, they were kinda the inspiration. Amy looked surprised and said, this Earth has Star Wars. Harry nodded and said, yeah, I wonder if it's different from yours though. Amy smiled and said, okay, we're so having a marathon once this is over. The doctor said, libraries this way, let's go. He raised his glowing sword and ran down the hall with the others following. The halls filled with chanting as they reached further into the ship. The same set of lines, over and over. Blood and magic leads the way. Darkness ends the final day. Twist and crumble minds shall fall. Bend and shatter mortals all. Amy said, Doctor, what are they doing? Nothing, let's go. He lied easily. Amy recognized the lie but didn't question it. Harry figured she was used to it. Harry knew what they were doing, of course. He could feel it. It wasn't even a bad idea. They intended to change the laws of the pocket dimension into a giant computer virus, then crack the whole thing open. The virus would infect the dimensional energy of the whole Earth faster than anyone could possibly stop it. The virus, or spell as it were, would strengthen their own power while driving mortals insane, all over the world, all at once. Of course, it would drive the mortals in here insane long before that point. Luckily Harry wasn't mortal. The others though. Harry said, "Honorary doctor, we have 15 minutes until saturation and an hour until critical mass." Rory said, "Saturation of what?" Harry answered, "The witches are filling the space with madness. As the saturation increases it will become harder to think logical and coherent thoughts. Once the space has reached complete saturation, any mortal within the space won't be capable of sane thought." Amy said, "Okay, that's bad." Harry shrugged. "Kinda. There are ways around it. Sane thoughts are not always the best. If you don't trust yourself, work on instinct and ignore your own thoughts." The doctor said, "Hang on, how can you possibly know that? I read a lot. And my mind is protected from mind magic, so get us to the library." He looked concerned and said, "Do you have a way to read really fast?" "I do. Why?" "Just making sure." "This way?" The chant of the Carianites continued to echo and they got more and more lost. Since this was a quest, his map did have a pointer, but rather than pointing to the library, it seemed to be pointing to areas of interest. Harry suspected there may have been several ways to succeed, but he could only think of one of them and hoped he knew what he was doing. To find the library, Harry occasionally used a non-verbal point me spell to check for its direction. Harry's map filled in as they went about, and using the point me spell for triangulation he figured out where the library actually was. When used wandlessly, the point me spell was a purely internal spell, so he didn't emit exotic energy. Sure, he could have ditched the group and went straight for the book, but he needed to get into contact with the space witches again to get a target lock on them, or he wouldn't be able to find them for the counter hack. They were luring the group into a trap to eat him, so they should be around somewhere. Probably one of those areas of interest. Each room of the TARDIS was unique, yet several rooms seemed to be repeats of others. Some were almost identical, but according to Harry's map they were in fact in different rooms. Rory started mumbling to himself and Amy told him to be quiet, seemingly unaware that she had been humming a catchy tune for the last 3 minutes. Amy said, "Doctor, we're going in circles. We should go in a straight line." She then used the sword to chop into a wall and slice through it. Harry's swords were enchanted with single-dimension edge magic that only turned on when used by him or someone he authorized to carry the sword for safety reasons. It could cut through almost anything that didn't have magic defense. The doctor said, Hey, that's dangerous." He then turned to Harry and said, "Do something." Harry asked, "Do you have a better idea of getting through a depot word door?" He lifted a small metal glow stick and said, "Yes, I have this." Rory and Amy were hacking through the wall and had just gotten through. Rory seemed to agree with Amy that this was the best idea. Harry turned to him and said, "All right, put your sword down." The doctor did so and Harry said, "Lights out." Amy and Rory dropped unconscious after being knocked out by their swords. "Better." The doctor confirmed they were both all right and said, "All right, now what?" Harry got a potion from his inventory and fed it to them both. "What's that?" A moment later Rory and Amy turned into stone. "What did you do?" he accused. Harry answered, "They'll be fine. We both know the longer they remain here the higher the possibility of permanent damage. The Carianites won't let us find them until after saturation. I'll turn them back after we're done. We still have a marathon to watch." The pair continued down the hall and the doctor quietly said, "Thank you." He was more than aware that the space was not safe for them and was getting worse, but he didn't have a better option. If they were stone however they wouldn't be affected. A few minutes later they came into an open room and one of the Carianites swooped down and tried to grab the doctor. He slashed his sword with more skill than Harry thought he had in him and the spectral crow flew to the side. "Sword and steel shall rust and burn. To the earth it shall return." With the call of the alien witch the space changed again and suddenly their swords turned to rust and dirt. Normally the swords would be spell resistant, but due to the saturation of the space their hack type spells could break Harry's enchantments. The Carianite cackled at the broken weapons and said, "And now for you, doctor. Bind his flesh and bones and hearts. End the fight before it starts." The doctor cried out in pain and dropped, grinding his teeth in agony. He wasn't dead but he could no longer move. The other two Carianites appeared and one said, "Powerful child, you shall not escape us." All three chanted, "Mortals rise and mortal fall." The doctor shouted, "No, stop." They continued, "None resist the Reaper's call." Ping. Instant death successfully resisted due to instant death immunity. Harry fell over like a puppet whose strings were cut. A bit theatrical but he wanted to sell it. The doctor shouted, "No, how could you?" The three creatures floated over to Harry. One said, "Freshly cut life force, my favorite." As soon as one got close enough Harry grabbed it by the arm and swung into the others. He then proceeded to bash it over and over into the floor and smash it into the other two Caronites like something out of a cartoon. Harry could tell it really wasn't doing anything to them but he used the contact he maintained to get a clear reading of their signature. Mordo wasn't the only one who could use physical contact to absorb or get a read on energy. Harry was tempted to try absorbing their energy but that trick had consequences and he already had another plan so he decided against it. Harry threw the creature into a wall and grabbed the doctor still struggling against the spell. He teleported them to the hall closest to the library they passed, and he lifted the man over his shoulders and ran to the library. His teleportation wasn't as bad as before when it came to emitting exotic energy, but it would still likely mess with the surroundings. Unfortunately, he didn't have time to wait as the clock was ticking. A few moments later they arrived at the door. The doctor said, "Oh, you found the library." Harry set him down and said, "Yes, now please open the door." He wiggled around a bit and said, I still can't move." Harry reached into his pocket and grabbed the glow stick and said, "How does this work?" "It works off a psychic command field." Harry wasn't great with psionic energy, but he was familiar enough to give mental commands. The glow stick glowed and emitted some type of autonomous molecularly synchronizing sound frequency. It sent a pitch at the door, recorded and analyzed the echo, then sent another pitch which matched the resonant frequency of the material to physically interact with it. It constantly recorded the echo and analyzed it to determine how the structure moved so it could change how the material was resonating to achieve a specific task. In this case, opening a locked door. The door opened a moment later and Harry picked up the doctor and set him in a beach chair which was next to the pool. The fact that there were bookcases in the same room as a pool didn't even faze Harry. He used point me to find the book from the shelves and pulled it out. Harry said, "Is this it, the big book of time and space?" "It's a bit thin." The book was thinner than most books in Hermione's library. The doctor shouted from the beach chair, "It's bigger on the inside," with just a little too much enthusiasm, as if he had been waiting to say that for some time. Harry flipped through the pages only to realize no matter how many he flipped, the number of pages didn't change on either side of what he was flipping through. He shouted, "Fingers crossed, doctor," and placed the book inside his inventory. The glow stick too. Yeah, he wasn't passing up a chance to learn how that thing worked. Harry paused and found another chair to sit down. Sitting while paused was uncomfortable as anything he sat on felt like stone. Harry immediately realized why the doctor had doubts on Harry's ability to read the big book. If the space the book took up was not folded in on itself, the book would be thousands of miles long. It was like someone took the full coding of a highly advanced computer's operating system, assigned each individual character a ideographic page and put them all in order in a book. Not surprisingly, the book was not in English or any language Harry had encountered. This was another reason Harry had been okay with wandering around the ship. He paused in each room to memorize the symbols and already had a decent grasp of the written language. The book itself was also similar in structure to an advanced math textbook or programming text. Full mastery of the language wasn't completely needed to learn the content. Years passed by in frozen time. Harry would often switch back and forth between analyzing the device he now knew to be called a sonic screwdriver and the big book of time and space. If translated to English, the math would be called block transfer computation. It was basically how to shift one space to another space and how to fit one space into another space through pure calculation. Simply calculating the process of the action would cause the action to happen. Up to this point there was nothing on time travel, but Harry had only gotten through the first several 100 million pages. That was a few tens of kilometers for a book that was over 4,000 kilometers long. Block transfer computation was funny in that it didn't use base 10 or base 8 math. It literally used dimensional energy for units and described how it behaved under different circumstances. Thanks to this, Harry was able to get the basics down and even figure out the language the rest of the book was in. A majority of the pictures resembled the mandalas one could create using dimensional energy, which Harry was already very familiar deciphering those using arithmancy. There was also a lot of crossover with sorcery magic, and the shapes and symbols reminded him of ancient runes, which were some of his better subjects. At some point Harry's mind lost awareness of the passing moments and simply continued grinding itself through the book. The book itself would be completely unintelligible to most, and the rest would burn themselves out trying to read it in a single setting. Literally. Harry, however, had an intellect and wisdom of 350 apiece, and his scholar path was at 38. With the necklace of the chosen path he wore, it was bumped to 41. Even the doctor himself only had a scholar path of about 32. That meant Harry was 4 times a better learner than the doctor was without the necklace of the chosen path equipped. Keep in mind that a man who had 6 doctorates would likely have a scholar path of 22. In the Richter scale-like path ranking system, the doctor was 10 times the scholar of such a man, the equivalent of 60 doctorates. On the planet Earth there were only about 50 types of doctorates, which showed how much knowledge a man like the doctor possessed. However, even the doctor would lose out when it came to studying before the Ancient One, and Harry had already surpassed her when it came to being a scholar. The doctor acquired his knowledge through experience and necessity, not through intensive, monotonous study. Not that Harry necessarily knew more than the doctor. The scholar path did not measure knowledge accumulated, but the skill one had to learn and teach. It simply meant that Harry and the Ancient One were more skilled at learning and teaching. In sheer volume, the doctor still knew far more than they did, as he was a curious wanderer, while the Ancient One was a protector and only concerned herself with learning what she needed to better protect the Earth. Harry lost awareness, his mind shut down all functions except the processing of the book. He neither breathed nor blinked. He had no awareness of the color or feel of his surroundings, he went completely into automatic pilot. Once Harry finished, the abrupt end caused him to wake up. He realized he had no idea how long he had been paused, but he now had full understanding of the book. Harry looked at a list of pop-ups that appeared while he was reading and realized his int and WIS both increased by 40 points and his scholar path actually reached 41. Harry took a few moments to collect himself and turn the rest of his brain back on. He wasn't sure what state he was just in, but he wasn't going to complain. He saw the doctor on the chair near the pool and remembered he was supposed to defeat the space witches. After figuring out a relatively simple plan, he unpaused and said, "Okay, I'm done." Was that a joke? The doctor cried from his chair. Block transfer computations literally could not be kept in a computer because it would change the computer it was a part of and break it, which was why it had to be written in a book to begin with. But this was still the science behind the power of the Time Lords, and very, very few ever truly learned it. The only reason the book was there was because a copy existed in every TARDIS to reference from if they broke it. Harry mentally calculated the paths of dimensional energy binding the doctor and snapped his fingers. The doctor found he was able to move again and said, "Oh, well, all right then." Harry felt the energies in the TARDIS. The spell the Carrionites weaved would reach critical density in 5 minutes and the pocket space would breach, spilling out into the Earth space. He could now feel how the Space Witch's magic worked through the dimensional energy. Harry almost wanted to laugh when he saw how big of a hole their own defenses possessed. No wonder their species was defeated. Harry focused his intent on the path of the witch's spell and after performing a brief mental calculation shouted into the space itself. "Light and hope shall seal the way. Dawn shall break the darkest day. Right and whole your foes shall rise. Lost eternal is your prize." The space itself shuddered and nearly turned in on itself. The echoing spell from before was replaced by shrieking wails. Harry's didn't just counter their spell. He took all the energy they put into it and reversed it back to the sender. He didn't close out the hacker, he caused their computer to explode in their face. The doctor felt the space change and cried out in relief. "You did it. You actually did it." Harry was then tackled to the ground. Chapter 23. Chapter 23 Time Travelers and Necromancers. Amy and Rory were restored from stone and the doctor asked if he could have some of that and the antidote. Being able to turn someone to and from stone could save from injury, poison, and even the vacuum of space. Unfortunately, Harry had to apologize and explain that he couldn't. The potion would expire in a day and a time-locked storage cabinet would fry if it was placed inside. Harry was moderately surprised that exotic energy was bad with frozen time considering his pause feature. This meant no one could freeze Harry in time. Amy and Rory weren't completely happy with being knocked out and petrified, but they understood the need. As a consolation prize, Harry let them keep the swords and a list of the command phrases. He wasn't going to tell them their original swords also broke due to the Carrionite spells, so Harry had to pull out 2 more. Once Harry stepped out of the TARDIS, he noticed something rather depressing. The method of block transfer computation he just learned was almost completely ineffective with dimensional energy of this universe. It worked in the TARDIS because the math matched the universe the TARDIS was a pocket dimension of. Harry would have to calculate block transfer computation for this universe on his own from scratch. He wasn't exactly happy about that, but at least it would be a good way to grind the scholar path. Amy said, "So, marathon time." Harry smiled but said, "Sorry, no marathon, I need to get you guys home." Rory picked up on that and said, "You can get us home." "Yeah. The path you traveled should still be open but will close in a few hours. The faster we get you back, the safer the ride." Now that Harry understood how the TARDIS worked, he knew how to get them home. The doctor asked, "How are you going to get us back though? My TARDIS is still dead." Harry held up the sonic screwdriver and said, "With this?" He may not have block transfer computation in this universe, but he did fully comprehend how the screwdriver worked. It gave him some ideas. Harry went to his computer and wrote up some very complex programs and loaded them onto some pre-designed transmitters he had. Harry used the screwdriver to alter the materials slightly on each to give them the properties he needed. Rory and Amy were doing their own thing and the doctor was trying to figure out what Harry was doing. Once finished, Harry opened several very small portals and attached the transmitters to what appeared to be metal towers on the other end, though he didn't let the doctor peek as he was still trying to guess what Harry was up to. Once done, he sent the TARDIS back to where it was after casting a simple Notice Me Not spell on the area, preventing people from realizing it wasn't always there. When the doctor saw it he said, "Ah, perception filter. Very retro." Amy said, "So what's the plan?" Harry smiled and said, "Well, did you notice how today is Christmas?" Rory pointed out all the decorations around the street and said, Yes, we did." Harry held his hand to his ear and the rest did the same. "Hark how the bells, sweet silver bells, all seem to say, 'Throw cares away.'" Rory said, "Christmas music." The doctor started looking around and said, "But where is the music coming from?" Amy said, "I don't know." The doctor cried out, "Resonance." "Oh, that's genius." He was smiling ear to ear. Rory asked, "What's happening?" Before Harry could answer, the doctor said, "Harry turned the radio towers around here into sonic screwdrivers and had them all play the same song at the same time. Each is playing with a specific tone, but here at the point where they all meet, the resonance achieved will dash." The TARDIS started making a wheezing noise and the lights within started going on one after another. Harry picked up where the doctor left off. "I widened the door and this spot now has energy from your own dimension. Your TARDIS should be able to get you back now." Amy hugged Harry and said, "Thank you, Harry." Harry hugged her back and said, "You're welcome. Best be off though, the song will end soon." Rory patted Harry's shoulder in thanks and entered the TARDIS followed by the doctor. Rory told the doctor, "Too bad we couldn't meet Shakespeare right." Amy slugged his shoulder in jest and said, "Harry was fine." The wheezing sound of the TARDIS started up again and the blue box began to fade. Harry said, "Sorry Rory for just being Harry Potter." Amy looked shocked at that statement and shouted, "Harry Potter," just as the sound faded and the TARDIS vanished. Ping. Quest complete, rescue the Time Lord. Reward, Ring of Recovery. Harry was pleased that his quest was over, but he did wonder why she reacted to his name like that. He hoped they hadn't heard of him. He had enough problems remaining low profile in his own dimension. The ring that appeared in his inventory would remove one status ailment from himself or someone he touched once a day. It would also automatically cure him of an ailment if he was incapable of choosing not to use it. That meant if someone got him with a sleep dart or instantly petrified him, this would help. Very useful. It was also bound to him so it could not be stolen or lost through death. He returned home and found out what Rory and Amy had been doing. There was a pile of wrapped presents on his table. Harry couldn't keep himself from grinning at the 6 DVDs titled Star Wars. Harry spent the next 2 days enjoying the marathon, which seemed to have different actors than the ones he was familiar with, and when finished he returned to Camartage just before New Year's. The Ancient One asked for a meeting and Harry was more than happy to comply. She didn't think Harry would have such a normal boring mission, and Harry was slightly embarrassed to give a 100% confirmation of that. Since Harry was involved, she didn't see the hole made in space by the Doctor's arrival nor the closing of the hole when he left. One reason Harry sent them home the way he did was to force the hole completely shut after being wrenched open. The Ancient One confirmed through her own means there was no issue with it now. She was interested in block transfer computation but insisted Harry not write down any progress he made on getting it to work in this dimension. Even should he master it, it was not something this universe was ready for, or perhaps would ever be ready for. Neither felt the details of Harry's adventures should be spread, though she did show interest in Star Wars as she never watched it before. She organized a movie night over the next few weekends where one movie would be played a week. Some hadn't even seen their universe's version of it and almost everyone liked it. Only Keselius left a few minutes into Phantom Menace saying he wasn't interested. Harry wasn't surprised. A few scenes with Jar Jar Binks drove him off. No one liked Jar Jar. Winter passed and spring began and Harry continued training. Harry successfully acquired and synchronized with a source of energy from Vulture's realm as well as Kraken's, giving Harry easy access to cloud, lightning, binding, and unlocking magic. As long as Harry was not in an isolated or pocket dimension, all forms of energy existed in nearly all dimensions. They were simply hidden beneath the layers of the more obvious energies. That meant Harry could use binding energy to invoke chains capable of locking a target's movement or suppressing their abilities almost anywhere. Apparently Kraken was known for keys and chains. The energy under his command could not only bind things, but it could also unlock things by conjuring a replica of the Kestrel key of Kraken. He was very glad he wouldn't have to shout that aloud to conjure the thing, or people would definitely stare at him. Harry spent much of his time building this universe's version of block transfer computation but hit a long series of snags. The largest of which was that he couldn't confirm if he was going in the right direction without a test or experiment. On a cloudy spring evening Harry reached a roadblock he was unable to get past without confirming if a specific theory he had on how the system worked was functional or not. If he went further without confirming it, he could be wasting his time if he was wrong. In order to test this theory, Harry was going to see if he could build a bridge that sent an item 1 second into the future. He used magic to construct several dozen pillars intricately inscribed with 5-dimensional math which would calculate the process of moving a small piece of matter a moment into the future in the center of the formation. Once Harry was done, he tossed a rock into the space he created. If it worked, it would vanish for a second and reappear. He was almost certain it would. The test was just to make sure. He was wrong. Once the rock reached the focal point, the physical space shattered as if the rock had shattered glass. The crack collapsed the local space-time and swallowed everything in the area before reforming. The pillars had shattered from the strain of the calculation and Harry was gone. If Harry's body was normal, he would have been ripped apart by the tidal forces of space itself, but Harry had been so focused on getting his defense up he had increased his STR more than needed, which allowed him to survive being swallowed by a fissure in reality. Had he died, he would have reappeared in his room. He was not so fortunate this time. The feeling of being thrown through space could not be accurately described, but the closest approximation would be being tossed through the air by a Category 20 hurricane that was filled with hammers and bowling balls while every limb was tied to a rope connecting to massive weights thrown about by the storm, threatening to at any moment tear him to pieces. After an unknown period of being stretched, crushed, and thrown through the tides of reality, Harry was finally ejected from the space between spaces and shot into a hill. The angle was low enough to prevent Harry from getting flattened and the hill was soft enough to give way and make a nice Harry-shaped dent. In other words, Harry wasn't instantly killed. Harry could feel his so-called health bar was near depletion, but it wasn't getting worse. After being chewed up and spit out by space itself, Harry had only one thing to say: ow. Harry waited a few moments for the damage to return to normal and got out his strongest potion. It was stronger than Skell GRO, nerve restoration, and blood replenishing potion together, and in a normal person could heal any injury except a severed limb or deadly poison. It was appropriately disgusting, but Harry could use his settings to turn dull or remove his sense of taste, which was very useful. Used on Harry, the potion would restore most of his health while increasing his health regeneration to take care of the rest later. It was practically pure healing energy. Sure, he could have used healing magic, but magic had too many risks and he didn't want to make a bad habit of it. The first thing Harry noticed was that it was sunny. That meant he was no longer in the practice area he made near the Potter Manor of High Rock. Was it a different place or a different time? Harry gathered the dimensional energy into a mandala before him and had it spin and expand. It changed as it did so, automatically adjusting to the time and place he found himself in. Once done, Harry let the mandala scatter and let himself fall back into the grass. Good news. He was still in Britain. Bad news. It was June of 623 AD. The only good side he could think of in this whole mess was that he could see exactly where he went wrong in his setup for the time-folding array. He was paying very close attention to how the cracks emerged and propagated so he could infer how it happened and why. After taking a moment to admire how good and bad his luck was, Harry transformed into an owl and flew south where he figured he'd find people. Before coming up with a plan he needed to figure out what he had to work with, so he needed to get the lay of the land. Most people would be worried about affecting the past and changing the future, but Harry understood time better than any physicist on Earth. Most agreed that when you looked at the future, it would change simply from looking at it. What few knew was that the past was the same. Why do history texts change? Is it because someone made a mistake and it was corrected? Is it because it was formerly a guess and now there was evidence? Yes and no. The past itself did in fact change. It was possible to find evidence the past was one way, then a few hundred years later new evidence would be discovered that proved the past was a completely different way. Then further down the line more evidence would conclude the past was different than either of the first two theories predicted. Just like the future, the past could in fact change just by looking at it. It was possible that Harry could greatly change the past, and when he returned, new evidence would show that the history books of this time were all lies to cover up the truth, and further evidence would show a completely different history. So no, Harry wasn't concerned about changing the past. He wasn't going to actively try to mess with things, but as long as he didn't remain in the past for too long, the future would still be there when he returned. With Harry's stats he could fly very fast as an owl, and it didn't take him long to find a farm. He observed the peasant clothes and flew a distance away before returning to normal and transfiguring his clothes into a similar style of serf wardrobe. One benefit of the past was no tech, and since his exotic energy couldn't be detected he could use wizard magic as he pleased. As it was spring there wasn't much to stand behind, so once Harry was close enough for the farmer to spot him, Harry shouted, "Morning, do you know a place I could find work?" "Town's that way, son, heard the Lord's looking for young backs," he answered amiably. "Bless you, sir," Harry replied and headed off. He didn't know how people of the day conversed outside of books, so until he got the hang of it he wanted to keep his sentences short. Once out of sight he returned to owl form and flew off for the town. Harry first thought the wind would be fresher and more pleasant in the past, but there was an ominous taint that lingered in the air. It made Harry doubt his stay in the past would be peaceful. From a distance the town seemed stereotypical. Homes of wooden walls with thatch-covered roofs to keep in the heat littered the outskirts, and further in the center were some sturdier, partially elevated homes with some made of stone. Harry saw a gathering of people and landed on a nearby rooftop as the crowd grew larger. A man in a somewhat finer quality of clothing shouted, gather round, we have a summons from Lord Morrigan's army. All healthy males above the age of 12 are required to enlist. Failure to do so is punishable by execution for yourself and your family." The one standing next to the one shouting wore dark-tinted armor which, combined with the whole enlist or die thing they had, gave the general tone of what was going on. Harry gave a loud hoot in owl form which got a few stares, including the attention of the Black Knight character. When he met Harry's eyes, Harry used legilimency to read the man's mind. Once Harry understood why these men were here, he only had one opinion on the guy. What a dick. Harry flew to an empty area and shifted back to normal before he took out an aging potion. Harry took 5 drops which changed his age from 14.5 to 17. It wouldn't last longer than a day, but he could take it again once the effect wore off. He used a few more transfigurations on his clothes and hair to make himself look suitably plain looking and walked out from behind the corner to where the group of adults and barely adults were gathering. Some of the others noticed the stranger, but under the gaze of the Black Knight no one was in the mood to raise any questions. Once the crowd was gathered they were marched out of the village and south to where the battle would take place. They were told they would be given weapons on arrival, but none were asked if they had experience with them. They didn't give food or rest or water to those that asked for it, and after the better part of the day, they arrived at the field where the battle would occur the following morning. Dozens if not more of similar-looking groups were marched to the field by others and all converged together. The reason they had no intention of giving food or water was because they fully expected everyone to die. The field itself had been prepared for a massive undead raising spell. Once most of the drafted peasants were dead, the field would activate and turn their peasant army into an undead army. Yeah, they were the bad guys. Once they were taken to the section they were told they would have to defend from the invaders arriving the next day, Harry vanished without anyone noticing him. He wandered around the camp while invisible and used legilimency on the important-looking ones to find out the details of the battle. There were in fact about a dozen weak wizards following the orders of 3 stronger wizards. They were the ones in charge, though they used a lot of runners for messages and orders who all had specific uniforms. Each section of the peasants was to be led by an armored commander, one of those men who gathered the groups from their homes. After thinking over a few plans, Harry decided on a plan to change the outcome of the battle. Harry walked through the whole group of peasants, about 400 of them, and found a few leader types and their names. Once it was dark he knocked out a message runner and took some of his blood for a polyjuice potion. It was a variant of the type he made with Snape before and was even better. Still tasted horrible of course, but it could hold a transformation for a full day. Once he looked like the runner and took as much knowledge from his mind as he could to play the part. He went from peasant group to peasant group stating he had orders to collect specific people and gather them together for a secret project. They came nervously over one by one and Harry led them off to another area. Once together he said, "All right guys, who here knows why we are here?" One of the more clever ones said, "To hold back the forces of Lord Johnsborne." Harry nodded and said, "Yup, but the guys giving the orders are evil. Turns out they want everyone to die and get resurrected as an undead to make an undead army." Harry cast an invisible calming charm on them as a few of the smarter ones seemed like they were likely to keel over from such an admission. The best way to get people to follow you is to sound like you know where you're going even if you're completely lost. So Harry continued with a tone that was filled with 100% confidence, "But there is a way to stop them. Here's the plan." Of course, even after explaining his plan with confidence, no one believed Harry's plan would actually work. He had to call over one of the armored knights to where they were gathered for a demonstration. Harry had to use a few compulsion charms to ensure they would actually follow the plan, but he eventually got the kinks worked out and before the sun rose everything was set. Harry set himself up in an invisible chair next to the 3 strong wizards and the dozen or so weaker ones ready to activate the undead raising field. For something that only took a few moments of prep, he was quite pleased with himself. This would likely be the best prank pulled off in 1,000 years. The Black Knight commanders had been instructed to distribute weapons at first light and call all peasants to march into the center of the undead raising field once the other army was spotted and hold that position. First Light's arrival set in motion the distribution of weapons. The menacing armored knights prevented any groups from getting any funny ideas which pleased the wizards watching from afar. Harry tried not to pay attention to the conversation of the wizards as it made him nearly forego his plan and crush them all then and there. In addition to the men, they each took a woman from the villages they went to and were sharing the details of how they spent the night with them. Harry knew he couldn't save everyone but such a thing still greatly enraged him. Once the enemy army was seen coming over, orders were shouted and the mass of untrained peasants were marched to the field. The other army didn't exactly look like they were the best of the best either, but at least they had swords and shields and somewhat matching uniforms. The peasants gathered in the field and the incoming army marched closer, swords drawn. The wizards were shouting commands and preparing the rituals required to activate the undead raising field. Then, the entire peasant army dropped their weapons, sat down, and laid face down on the ground. The wizards noticed this and one shouted, "What are they doing?" A group of runners was heading up to the wizards and once within earshot they shouted, "My lords, the commanders have ordered the filth to lay down their arms and surrender." Several other runners arrived with the same message. The general response of the wizards amounted to a flabbergasted, "What?" Most looked like they had just been slapped with a fish. From the stain of death energy over their flesh and the overall feel of these wizards, Harry sensed that they seemed to specialize in necromancy and pain magic. Death energy wasn't something the living could use without cost and each of them looked to be withered husks of skin and bone. They really couldn't do much in a situation without people to threaten with pain or corpses to turn into undead. The latter problem however the wizards decided to fix when they saw the arrival of the other runners. Before they could kill anyone though, several red flashes of light shot out from Harry's invisible position and stunned the wizards about to strike. The remaining wizards turned and started chanting their spells, but before the first one could finish their chant all 15 wizards had fallen. Harry then shot his stunners at the runners which made for amusing moving targets. Too bad Harry was very accurate and stunners were the second fastest moving spell behind the disarming charm. Harry got out some thick iron bands and attached them to the wizards' necks. They required a drop of their target's blood to activate and when they did, they would saturate the body with anti-magic. This was an alternative use of one of Harry's training tools as practicing magic when saturated with anti-magic energy was like physical exercise with weights. Though Harry only put a small amount of anti-magic in them when he used them and he placed them on his wrists. For these wizards, he had the saturation at max level and set them on their necks so they couldn't just cut off their hands to free their magic. It was somewhat cruel but this was already the limit of Harry's mercy for them. The best part was that if the bands weren't removed, any children they sired while wearing the bands would be guaranteed squibs, though the descendants of those squibs may eventually get magic back. The bands themselves weren't that complicated as they simply an artifact version of a spell called Rings of Ragador which called anti-magic energy from Ragador's realm to disable the magic of those bound by it. It worked on wizard magic just as easily as it did sorcerer magic so it was very useful. It couldn't be used on someone stronger than him but the strongest of these guys were only a little stronger than Cedric Diggory meaning the bands would work just fine. A security feature he built into them was that if they were removed from the one they were tied to by blood, the enchantment would collapse meaning they couldn't be removed and studied once placed unless the absorbed blood within the band belonging to the person they were bound to vanished. A leader of the very confused army which just witnessed the peasants' surrender was heading over to Harry's location where he spotted Harry sitting down and the evil wizards unconscious and bound in chains Harry conjured. Putting 2 and 2 together the man said, "Friend wizard, I understand it was you who set this stage and prevented the needless shedding of innocent blood. For this I thank thee." A small use of legilimency on the field leader's surface thoughts gave Harry a summary of the situation which led to this war. Merlin had been captured by Morgan Le Fay and was being held prisoner, guarded by something called the Black Dragon. Chapter 24 Power Rangers vs the Black Dragon. After taking a peek into the man's surface thoughts, Harry said, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Why are there no magic users fighting for your righteous cause? The knight answered back, the foul witch Ellie Faye holds their oaths of loyalty to Merlin against them. Until Merlin is rescued from her clutches, they cannot fight at our side. You must not be a student of Merlin for you to be able to defeat these vile fiends. Harry nodded back, I am a student of the world and have learned much from it. As for these vile fiends, the metal bands around these men's necks cannot be removed easily, and as long as they remain, they will not be able to use magic. You may do with them as you wish, but I believe it best to keep the bands on for the remainder of their lives, as nothing would be a crueler punishment than living a full life without magic. The metal bands resisted grinding, melting, tearing, and corrosion, and even if an indestructible nail file was used on them, it would take a decade of continuous use to file through the band. And since they were saturated with anti-magic, it would take a very, very strong magic user to overpower them without killing the one they bound. The man answered back, the advice of a wizard is not to be taken lightly or ignored. I am not the one who will decide these men's fates, but I will pass on your words to those who will. I myself am Sir Landford, a knight of Lord Gawain's. Harry gave an appropriate bow and said, Greetings Sir Landford, I apologize but I cannot give you my name. I am lost and wish to remain that way so that others seeking me cannot locate me. I ask a small favor, please do not inform others of my involvement today. Make up something if you wish, but I would appreciate it if I was mentioned as little as possible or not at all. Landford frowned, but only for a moment. I would protest, as such a deed deserves a suitable reward, but if that is what you desire, I shall do all that is in my power to make it so. May I ask of your intentions for this land in the days to come? Ping. New quest, rescue Merlin. Free Merlin from his imprisonment to return to the present. Harry internally rolled his eyes and said, what plans are there to free Merlin? Landford answered, we have sent word south and across the channel to request assistance from others not taught by Merlin, but I have little faith that help will arrive. Rumor has spread that Ellie Faye has a dragon guarding the land of his imprisonment, and it is no ordinary dragon, but an immortal black dragon. Harry's eyes shot up in surprise. His casual glance into the knight's thoughts didn't say anything, the dragon being immortal. This quest was impossible. There are 4 types of dragons in this world. The most common type are the magic dragons, which are little more than beasts of concentrated exotic energy that take the form of a dragon. These, however, are widely considered imitation dragons, and though powerful, are by a significant margin the weakest type of dragon. The dragons known by witches and wizards are all magic dragons. Next are the dragon demon sorcerers. Demon sorcerers were sorcerers or descendants of sorcerers who underwent a dark ritual to merge their chi with specific energies, causing them to lose their soul and become demons. There have been thousands of demon sorcerers in the past, but most have long since killed each other or have been sealed by good chi wizards. The only remaining dragon demon sorcerer, the demon dragon of fire Shendo, had his powers removed and from what Harry heard had been turned into a statue. The strongest demon sorcerers are immortal as their existence has merged with the source of their element, but dragon demon sorcerers are not considered true dragons either, though many of their rituals require materials from true dragons. Above them are the dragon keen, beasts and beings that contain the blood of true dragons. They are the descendants of true dragons, and though some are weaker than the strongest dragon demon sorcerer, they are on average far more powerful. Dragon keen exist not just on Earth but on other planets as well. There are many aliens who take the shape of dragons, and most are dragon keen. And at the top are the true dragons themselves, also known as immortal dragons. They are not gods, but they are about as close as you can get to them. Immortal dragons have enough power to wreck countries and have natural resistance to almost all forms of damage. Even the Ancient One using her dark energy would have difficulties defeating an immortal dragon. Not because an immortal dragon is stronger than the Sorcerer Supreme, but because an immortal dragon would be very difficult to harm, much less kill with magic of any form. Harry had to stop himself from shouting but asked anyways, how did Ellie Faye get an immortal dragon to work for her? Landford shook his head. His lord was the great-grandson of Sir Gawain, who was best known for slaying a dragon, and they knew more about them than most. An immortal dragon should not be working for Morgan Ellie Faye, no matter how powerful the sorceress had become. We are not certain. What is known, however, is that the dragon has not been seen on any battlefield. Harry sighed and said, then I guess I'll check that out. You know where Merlin is being kept? Landford gave Harry the location, and with that Harry walked away. His map had a pointer icon, but he wanted to know the name of the location before blindly heading out. Once he was out of sight, he transformed back into a snowy owl and flew in Merlin's direction. As he flew further into the region, the taint in the air grew heavier and the sky grew darker and more oppressive. He was pretty sure it wasn't normal for giant beasts to be flying through the sky. One such beast, which looked like a massive vulture with carrion black wings, spotted him and changed its course for interception. Intercepting male owls was a standard practice in times of war, which was likely the job given to this vulture. Harry had absolutely no intention of escaping. What's the point of maintaining his stats and ability to cast magic while in owl form if he has nothing to use it on? He flew in close and watched as the great vulture raised its claws to swipe at him. Harry then accelerated and rammed into the vulture, dodging the claws and smashing his head into the bus-sized avian. Not surprisingly, he bounced off and the vulture wasn't affecting. He didn't think it would do anything, he just wanted to try it once. His stats carrying over meant he had super speed and super strength compared to that of a normal snowy owl, but he was still vastly weaker than he was as a human. However, only his physical stats were reduced in his owl form. His magic was powered by his mind, which had not changed due to the nature of the animagus transformation, and since the Elder Wand seemed to be a part of his existence, his magic was only moderately more difficult to use but still usable. The monster vulture recoiled more from surprise than the force of impact. It took only a moment to change its mindset from having lunged to aerial combat. It braced itself and swung its wings down to throw gales of winds to the left and right. Harry was at the creature's left and his small body was caught up in the torrent of wind. A few heavy flaps of his own wings, however, was enough to escape the gale and brace himself in time for the vulture's second strike. Harry increased his speed closer to his limit to gain some distance before the vulture could deliver its following blow. It was good enough for experience in aerial combat, and now it was time for the next phase. Harry tried conjured objects for binding: water, ice, flames, and lightning, one after another. None had been used with enough power to defeat the vulture, as he was simply testing their effectiveness in an aerial combat setting. Binding a bird with 2 large wings ended up being difficult without very large, very strong binds, which didn't make it efficient. Water rolled off the vulture's feathers, and it seemed birds were not as conductive of lightning as video games would make one believe. Ice, however, stuck to the feathers, and fire burned the feathers. Both were effective. Blunt force impact had some effect above a specific point, but it was cutting spells and effectively used conjured blades that had the best effect in aerial combat. Second best was weaponized bindings like ropes with thorns or heavy clamps that punctured at the point of contact. Harry was glad PETA didn't exist yet, because even if it was a creature that was created with evil magic, they still wouldn't appreciate what Harry did to that monster before finally ending it. From the energy he absorbed, he could tell the vulture was about level 70. Stronger than a Hogwarts graduate, but not by that much. Once Harry confirmed there were no other creatures or monsters or humans in the area, he flew down to the forest below and set up a base. Another reason he killed the vulture was because he was interested in its territory. He cast every spell he could think of to remove his presence and used transmutation magic to craft a small hole beneath a tree he found into a large fortified underground base. Next, he used every secrecy and stealth spell he had to make sure it wouldn't be found and filled it with amenities and made a nice bed. Harry had an innate sense for where his respawn point was should he ever die. As soon as he arrived, it set itself for the location he crashed into the moment he arrived in this time. Knowing his respawn point was lacking in safety made him feel more than a little exposed, so he wanted to make a new one. Thankfully, the means to set a respawn point was pretty simple. It was either set for the last safe area he was in or the last place he rested. When he died while training in the Room of Requirements or sparring with the Ancient One, he would respawn there because that was still a safe place. But if he died against a monster or unsafe land, it would be set as the last safe place he rested. He was about to face an immortal dragon, so dying was pretty much a given, meaning he needed a good respawn point. And though he technically didn't need rest, he still felt mentally fatigued from the nearly torn apart in the currents of between space thing and the flying all day thing and the fact that he hadn't slept in 3 days thing. So yeah, a nap would be really nice. In addition to waking up refreshed, his nap also caused the aging potion and the remaining effect of the polyjuice potion to expire, meaning he needed to take it again to stop looking like a 14-year-old. He could just face the dragon normally, but there were too many downsides and not enough upsides. Although anything he did in the past would likely correct itself eventually, he still didn't want a record of himself in shape or name, so going as himself was a no-no. Thankfully, he prepared for this. The prior day he knocked out each of those Black Knights and collected their blood to make polyjuice potions for the peasants to replace them and lead the army to surrendering. However, he kept a batch of modified polyjuice with each of those knights' blood for himself as well, so he had a dozen or so people he could turn himself into for a day. Harry considered a few plans and decided to do reconnaissance a few times. He could afford to lose a few levels and figure out what worked and what didn't before giving it his all. He would have to polyjuice as a different person each time to prevent the dragon from thinking it was the same person, lest the dragon throw him in the same cell as Merlin or do something that prevented him from dying. Of course, it would be nice if he could resolve everything without fighting, but there wasn't exactly a charisma stat and he wasn't going to hold his breath. Harry took out several uniforms made of basilisk hide he practiced his tanning and crafting on. It wasn't the best he could do, but it wasn't bad for practice. He then adjusted their sizes, made them the same in general appearance, and lastly, changed the color of each one to something vibrant. Yes, he knew what he was going to do. Harry used the polyjuice for the person who was the least threatening to look at and put on the blue uniform and headed out. He sealed the entrance to the hidey hole so that even insects and little critters couldn't enter and operate out. One of the wards he set would prevent teleportation or apparition in but not out. That worked best since his respawn was not affected by any barriers of any kind, or else he wouldn't have been able to respawn inside Hogwarts the few times he died while experimenting due to carelessness or danger. It took another 2 hours to fly to where he was told Merlin was being kept at half his full speed, since he set his respawn point pretty far from the target location as he figured it would be dangerous. Once he was close enough, he returned to his polyjuiced form and walked the rest of the way. The location was a cave set into a cliff that looked very stereotypical for a dragon's lair. There were even torches set on the wall surrounding the entrance and someone was sitting outside. Wait. Harry double-checked and confirmed, though well hidden, there were secondary signs that showed that Caucasian man in the black martial arts robes was ridiculously powerful. Yeah, immortal dragons can easily shift into human form, so that was probably him. Harry walked calmly over to the cave and confirmed that the man sitting outside was reading something. Books weren't exactly common in this era, so he was a little curious about what it was but doubted he would recognize it. The man's attention was on Harry the moment Harry stepped out of the clearing, though he didn't look up from his book. Harry then paused. While paused, he walked past the guard and entered the cave. However, the path into the cave went much further than Harry initially suspected, and he reached the limit of his distance before he found the end. He unpaused, which returned him to where he was in front of the guard. Well, no point in being rude. Harry straightened up and said, "Greetings, I am the Blue Ranger of the Mighty Power Rangers. Are you the one guarding Merlin? I seek the means to ensure his release." He looked up from his book and said in a low voice, polite, for a mortal. "I have never heard of the Power Rangers though. I am Kayantang, the Black Dragon. The one you call Merlin will remain here under my watch for the next year. After that, he is free to do as he pleases. Now leave here with your life or it will be taken from you." Harry asked, "Is there nothing that can dissuade you from this?" The Power Rangers are prepared to offer much in exchange for letting Merlin free without combat. Kayantang looked over Harry for a moment. You wear the treated skin of a basilisk, and though weak, you are certainly above most. Perhaps there is something you have which would interest me, mortal, but it matters not. This duty is one I perform not just of service but as a favor to repay a debt. Some years ago my sister was seduced by an upstart off-worlder Dragon King, and they were secretly married. He then shamed her, took her treasures, and left her heartbroken and with nothing to her name. It was the sorceress Ellie Faye who informed me of this, allowing me to get justice for my sister and give that upstart what he deserved. I forced him eternally into his dragon form and made him undying after ripping his heart out and sticking it in a furnace so he can suffer for all of time. Ellie Faye called in the debt I owed her for informing me of that, so she could request my service, and she has paid a suitable price for it. Even if you could pay more, I owe no favor to you and my debt must be repaid. My services will only be for a year. If others wish to free Merlin earlier than this, they must slay Ellie Faye herself so that I no longer owe her a debt or defeat me." Harry asked, "Others?" Kayantang closed his book and said, "Yes, others. I gave you a chance to leave, and rather than take it you decided to ask a question. I do not give second chances to mortals, so you can take that answer with you to the grave." He got up and struck at Harry, but Harry was able to dodge and form a blade of dimensional energy and counter. Kayantang didn't bother dodging, and the blade shattered against his martial robes. He pressed his advantage without fear of retaliation, and each blow had the force of a high-speed semi-truck. Harry threw himself back using the power from one of the larger strikes to gain some distance. Kayantang smiled and said, "Not bad for a mortal. As a reward for making this at least a little interesting, I'll allow you to die under the power of a true dragon." His form quickly became insubstantial and expanded out in a mass of darkness and power. A moment later it reformed into a massive 100-foot-long green dragon with a terrifying jaw, large wings, and powerful arms and legs. Harry yelled, "Why are you called Black Dragon if you're green?" Surprisingly, he answered and said, "I was born black, but I prefer this form." He then exhaled a powerful breath of dragon fire. Harry didn't bother to dodge. Heat above a certain temperature can't be felt by tissue as it burns away the flesh, though the next part and the part after that would still suck. A few moments and 2 excruciatingly painful instants later, Harry was back in his hide hole. He moved over to the bed to rest, since dying and reviving both made his existence ache. After waking, he went over the details he had. Kayantang wasn't going anywhere, and his dimensional energy sword shattered on contact. His martial arts were above Mordo's and below the Mandarin, though he was many times stronger than either. His flames were also stronger than any fire magic Harry was capable of using. Not that any of that was really surprising. The name Kayantang wasn't familiar to him, but it wasn't like Camartage and Hogwarts had all the knowledge in the world. In any case, he at least had something of an outline to work with to make a plan. The next day, Harry took a polyjuice for the weakest looking guy and changed the color of his next basilisk hide uniform to purple. He returned to the site of the Black Dragon's cave and equipped himself with a magic staff that amplified his abilities. Kayantang looked up from his book and said, "Another one." Harry shouted, "I am the Purple Power Ranger. Our Blue Ranger was sent to negotiate with you, but as he has not returned, it seems you have chosen death." Harry lifted his staff at the black-robed man and summoned a dimensional edge using a spell he learned from the Grand Grimoire. Kayantang dodged the spell that cut space itself and nearly cleaved the cliff behind him in two. Harry was hoping that spell might break whatever cell was holding Merlin inside, but he wasn't counting on it. The human form of the Black Dragon struck out, but the blow was stopped by a 7-layered mystic shield. This staff couldn't amplify wizard magic, but it was very good with other forms of magic. Harry threw a grenade over his shield and behind Kayantang at the cliff face. Kayantang ignored it and struck Harry's shield once more, this time piercing it completely, though not fast enough to strike Harry before he dodged. Harry slammed the hilt of his staff to the ground, and chains conjured from the energy of Kraken's realm surrounded Kayantang as Harry used his fastest speed to jump back just as the grenade he threw 3 seconds earlier went off. Kayantang wasn't able to break the chains fast enough to dodge the blast of the grenade Harry had squeezed 100 Bombarda Maximas into. Harry himself relied on the basilisk robe and his own shields to protect himself, but he was still sent hundreds of feet away from the blast. The blast itself tore the cliff face to pieces but didn't destroy the whole thing. Harry sensed within the cliff was some structure that was being held together with powerful magics, and it would not break with just that. Harry twirled the staff in the air, which called forth natural energy as well as energy from Volter's realm. Clouds started to gather as the dust settled and Kayantang's form was revealed. his black martial robes torn, blood and wounds over his body. It was mostly superficial, but it at least proved that the true dragon was not completely immune to magic above a certain degree and could even take damage from accumulated wizard magic. A moment later, the vibrant green form of the so-called black dragon was staring Harry down. He took in a breath, but before he could release it, Kyan Tang was struck by lightning from above. Harry shouted, "The Power Rangers are not to be taken lightly." He threw his staff down and the cloud descended to the ground. The black dragon was surrounded by water vapor that clung tightly to him and made it difficult to move around. "Enough," he shouted. He flapped his wings a few times and the spell holding the mist together broke and fell apart. Harry swung his staff once more as he gathered enough dimensional energy for another dimension edge. The spell cut into Kyan Tang's skin enough to draw blood but not deeply enough to hamper the immortal. The massive dragon launched himself forward towards Harry, who jumped away, but the 100-foot-tall dragon changed directions with a subtle movement of his wings and reached Harry, who threw his staff to the ground. Once it made contact, more chains appeared to wrap around the massive green monster, stopping his pursuit of Harry before he could shatter the chains. Harry commanded energy from the realm of Icon to cast illusions of himself to make a dozen of him appear around himself. Kyan Tang roared in outrage, "You dare to challenge a true dragon to a contest of magic?" His roar itself was filled with dragon magic which disrupted the illusions, revealing Harry's position. The energies of the space were rendered deaf to Harry's command, preventing him from further use of sorcery. The various energies of the planes swirled around the field and strengthened as they bent to the will of the dragon's rage. A pantheon of glowing colors of light wrapped around the space and converged on their location. Kyan Tang roared, "Die under the might of true dragon magic." The hurricane of impossible power locked the space and prevented any form of teleportation, though Harry hadn't demonstrated his use of it. Even wizard apparition would not be able to penetrate the dense field of destruction bearing down on him. As if to add insult to injury, Kyan Tang let loose his dragon breath into the hurricane of magical energies, causing it to glow brighter than the sun and speed its convergence on Harry's location. A few moments later, Harry was back in his hidey hole and returned to bed for another nap. His only thought was, "Damn, so that's dragon magic, huh?" Once he woke, he got out his next basilisk hide cloak. His equipment hadn't survived either death, though he always res beyond in at least a shirt and never naked. If he did die with his equipment intact, it would somehow return to his inventory and re-equipment itself once he res beyond. He got quite a bit of information this time. What was most surprising was the effect of wizard magic. An amplified explosion spell had so much effect, and unlike sorcery spells, they couldn't be affected by the magic commanding powers of dragon magic. Thankfully, he used a grenade instead of casting any wizard magic himself, so he wouldn't give himself away as a wizard. He also got a good look at the recovery speed of a true dragon that he would have to overcome if he wanted to finish him. The next basilisk hide uniform he took out would be colored black. He only had a dozen of them from his practice runs, and he really hoped he would be able to get enough info on how to beat Kyan Tang before he ran out of them. Harry returned once more, and this time, instead of reading in his human form, Kyan Tang remained in his green dragon form. However, he didn't clean up the location. The parts of the cliff that had broken off from Harry's attacks remained, which was kinda the point. Dragon eyes can see through any form of invisibility, so he couldn't sneak past the dragon before. The point of the senseless damage was to make enough cover to hide behind. Before getting within his range, Harry conjured 100 black mice and allowed them to scatter into the field. He then removed a shrinking solution from his inventory and drunk enough to render himself the size of a mouse, and he used the reducio charm on his clothes to shrink them to his size. He approached the rubble scattered around the cliff face and slowly made his way through it to the entrance that led to Merlin. The black mice got Kyan Tang's attention, but the wizard magic that made them up was invisible, so to his senses they looked like ordinary mice. Such creatures were beneath his notice, so after confirming they were nothing, he went back to ignoring them. Harry was able to make it past the rubble and into the cave entrance without trouble thanks to his distractions and prior preparation. Both prior Power Rangers made no effort to conceal themselves, and with the mice to make Kyan Tang ignore small movements, the immortal dragon wasn't expecting a tiny infiltrator. The shrinking solution hadn't even been invented yet. Harry spent a few hours slowly making his way through the cave. He paused before each corner and confirmed nothing was on the other side while paused before continuing. Eventually he found the heart of the cave and found a red magic barrier. He wished it would be a nice set of bars or perhaps a door with a small window he could slip Merlin a shrinking solution and let him slip through, but no, it was an airtight magic barrier. Harry used a few wizard concealment spells and took the antidote to the shrinking solution while removing the shrinking charm from his clothes, allowing him to seemingly appear before the magic barrier. On the other side of the barrier was an old bearded man in a chair reading from a large tome. Next to the chair was a shelf with other books and a bed. When Harry appeared, he closed his book and said, "What's this? Who are you?" "A strangely dressed servant of Ellie Faze. Actually, I snuck past the black dragon and came to rescue you. Got any ideas on how to open this barrier?" Seems the man known throughout history as the greatest wizard of all time wasn't expecting that. He quickly said, "This barrier is formed from the heart blood of the immortal black dragon. It cannot be broken except by his will or his death. You must leave here at once and obtain the aid of the Sorcerer Supreme. Only he can help me now." A voice echoed through the cave. "So it is a Black Ranger now? How many more of you must I deal with?" Dragon fire filled the cave and Harry found himself back in his hidey hole. He figured Merlin speaking with him must have risen some alarm on the other side of the barrier his spells didn't affect. Although Merlin said to get the Sorcerer Supreme, Harry couldn't do that because the Camartage and the Sorcerer Supreme were aspects of his future, though it was a different one at the moment. The autocorrecting feature of time travel only applied to things far away and things that were unknown. Going to Camartage meant getting scanned by the wards again for the first time, which meant he would need to figure out a way to make it forget it scanned him, which meant disabling it and reassembling it. And that was just for the wards. It was far more complicated than that should he actually meet the current Sorcerer Supreme. Anyways, he only needed one more test before going all out, a combat test. The next day Harry used the polyjuice for the largest person he had and colored his robe red. He also equipped several pieces of armor and accessories beneath his robes to increase his defense and strength using energy from Sidorac's Crimson Cosmos, which was half saturated into the armor. Next he got out his giant heavy sword made from the bones and fangs of the basilisk. The sword was one of his better attempts at using goblin crafting techniques, and the sword's edges had basilisk venom magically imbued into it. Harry approached the massive green dragon, who once more got up and said, "This grows tiresome. How many of you are there?" Harry swung his heavy sword in the air and said with a low, Scottish accented voice, "You would not believe me if I told ya." The dragon slowly got up and walked over to Harry, who took a stance. He shouted, "I am the Red Power Ranger. Let me see the strength of the one who fell the others." Kian Tang swiped with his fist and Harry used his sword to deflect the blow. The force shook every bone in his body and made him feel as if the black dragon was wearing a two-story house and using it as a boxing glove. Harry used the force of the blow to ready his swing, and with a jump forward he sliced into the dragon's torso. A special feature of his weapon was that his sword's edge vibrates at high speeds, and with the sharpness granted by the basilisk fang edge, the blade was able to slice through the skin and muscle though it bounced off the bone. Rather than recoil as one would normally expect, Kian Tang pressed forward and attacked with his jaws while preparing his swing to attack should Harry dodge. Harry neither evaded nor dodged. He removed an edge of this sword that turned out to be a smaller sword and jumped off his blade to target Kian Tang's eye. The massive beast had not been expecting this and was forced to turn away or lose an eye. He swiped his claw where Harry should have been after jumping through the air, but Harry had jumped backward while airborne using a retractable wire that attached the heavy sword to the removable blade. Kian Tang shouted, "Cheap tricks," and let loose a roar of flames. Harry hid behind the sword, which glowed with heat but didn't break. Harry shouted with his fake accent, "You think fire can kill the Red Ranger? It probably could if the Black Dragon continued, but it would take a while." Harry's current gear was enchanted with his strongest flame-freezing charm, which would prevent fire from burning him, though it would eventually run out. Thankfully Kian Tang bought his bluff since he couldn't feel the magic of the flame-freezing charm, so he had no idea why his flames weren't working and couldn't feel the strength of the charm waning with each moment. Kian Tang swung his tail and Harry stuck his sword into the ground to meet the tail. Scales broke off, but as his tail was far more heavily armored than the dragon's chest and the strike wasn't able to deal significant damage to his tail before the force of the blow sent the blade skyward, along with Harry, who nearly dislocated his shoulder just holding onto the blade during that strike. Kian Tang jumped into the air and with a flap of his mighty wings overtook the soaring figure of Harry's swordsman form. The massive dragon rolled in the air and Harry got behind his sword and braced for impact as the rolling dragon's tail swung overhead with the force of a meteorite. Harry's last sight was the fragmented pieces of his sword and the pieces of his own shredded body falling from the sky. 2 painful instances later and Harry was back in his hidey hole. He wasn't exactly happy that he could still feel the pain of death for something that should be quick and painless, but he had long accepted it as the price of reviving from the dead. After adjusting from the ache of revival, he went over the details of the fight once more. The sword's unbreakable properties were probably used mostly up from the dragon breath, and even if it weren't, that tail swing in the end could likely have smashed a mountain to pieces, much less a half-indestructible prototype sword made of bone. The basilisk venom seemed to have had no effect, as the sheer strength of the dragon's magic burned it away before the black dragon could even notice it. The strength of his arm swing was in the 100-ton range and he was an expert in flight combat. However, he did have weaknesses. He was over-reliant on his defense and healing abilities and didn't seem to have much experience in fighting someone who could harm him, though harm is a relative term. Kian Tang's bones were like reinforced diamonds and the edge of his blade didn't even nick the bones of his ribs before being bounced off. A small sword piercing the dragon's chest through the gaps of the ribs into the heart may not work due to the size of the heart and healing factor, but the brain would be an even harder target, as even a surprise attack on the dragon's eyes using his fastest speed was easily dodged. Harry paused and went over his inventory. There were a few things he could use, but most wouldn't do much. Even his so-called reality bomb wouldn't do much against an immortal dragon, as such a being could likely survive in a space where the laws of reality were broken. Harry didn't have any other one-hit kill type attacks. Well, there was the thing which got him here, but even if he successfully set up a repeat of that, it would only send the black dragon into the past or future. Merlin was very specific that the heart-blood barrier could only be dispelled by Kian Tang's will or death, or else he would have mentioned banishment as an option. Maybe he should just send a letter to the Sorcerer Supreme and call it a day. However, he wanted to give it his all first. Harry decided to do both. He did think of a plan which might work, but before doing it he'd send a letter to the current Sorcerer Supreme that included everything he learned from his battles with Kian Tang. Even if he lost or was imprisoned or worse, the details of the letter should enable someone else to beat the Black Dragon. Harry spent a week preparing for the final encounter and made a few arrangements which he hoped would bear fruit in the future. A day after his last fight, the black dragon would occasionally fly around to scout the area, as 4 consecutive days of showing up likely made him paranoid. He wasn't wrong either, but he had no way of readying himself for what Harry Potter had in store for him. Chapter 25. Chapter 25. A Dragon's Might and a Woman's Scorn. For the last fight, Harry didn't take a polyjuice and had to make a large amount of equipment from scratch. Much of it required a large area to make, forcing him to make a new base on an empty plot of land far away from anyone who could be watching him. Harry used a portal to head to where Camartage was near and paid someone to deliver a letter to the temple at a certain time. If by then he hadn't won, the Sorcerer Supreme would be informed and make his move. Once Harry finished his preparation, he arrived once more. This time, however, he didn't change the color of his basilisk skin so he could keep it green, and beneath it he wore a full set of the best armor he could make. Harry only had a single heavily enchanted knife, but his gear looked tailored for martial combat. Kian Tang noticed him and sneered, "Dem mortals. Sending children now? I swear the next time I see him I'll have my brother grant me leave to slaughter as many of you as I please. I don't know where you Power Rangers come from, but I will find you." Harry smirked and shouted, "What the hell is a Power Ranger? I've never heard of them before, you crazy or something?" Kian Tang was dumbfounded, but only for a moment. He shouted, "You dare mock me?" The moment the black dragon moved to attack, Harry tapped the pendant on his wrist, causing the anti-magic stored within to release into the body. He gave a wry smirk and shouted, "It's morphin' time," and a moment later Harry's small form grew in size and height to match Chain Tang's own. His armor grew with him, though his basilisk cloak was unequipped and returned to his inventory. Kian Tang growled, "Growth magic? Another sorcerer dares." He roared once more and the magic energies of the land fell to his whims. For a moment, several bursts of energy from the anti-magic mines Harry shrank himself to place around the lands earlier went off, filling the space with anti-magic energy. Harry wouldn't be able to call for more energy from other planes once Kian Tang did his dragon magic domination thing, but it had little effect on existing magic, and Harry stored loads of anti-magic energy within those mines and set them go off at the slightest stimulus. Of course, this also meant he was more limited in what magics he could use. The only reason he would be able to use magic at all was because of all the training he did while wearing anti-magic binding cuffs. The coming storm of magic called forth by Kian Tang died under the suppression of anti-magic, and Harry's giant form ran up to the massive black dragon and punched him in the face. Harry wasn't using growth magic, but a growth potion. His equipment, however, was currently normal size. Prior to arriving, Harry took a special growth potion to allow him to match the dragon in size, and at that size he equipped a set of massive armor saturated with energy from Sidorak's realm. Due to Harry's unique physiology, increasing and decreasing his size didn't actually affect his stats, but it did allow him to equip the enormous, strength energy saturated armor he made, which did in fact boost his strength significantly. Using these means, Harry's strength could approach the level of the immortal dragon for a time until the armor exploded or he burned through the growth potion from heavy physical exertion. He then used a shrinking charm on himself and his equipment to temporarily return him to normal size that he could dispel with some anti-magic stored in a pendant. This gave the illusion of growth magic to make Kian Tang look down on his strength. He was still way weaker, of course, at about a third of his estimate for the black dragon's strength, but as long as he kept the fight on the ground he had an advantage. Sidorak's energy didn't just increase strength, it reinforced momentum, which made it ideal for attacking and blocking. Kian Tang opened his mouth to release his dragon breath, but Harry landed a flying knee into his jaw, forcing it closed. Harry had to disable at least one of Kian Tang's arms for his plan to work, and he was only going to get one shot. The black dragon grabbed Harry's leg and pulled him down while leaning in to bite his head off, but Harry had set his hands together and slammed them down into Kian Tang's nose. Harry got released when Kian Tang instinctively moved to grab his nose, giving Harry the opening to deliver a flying elbow drop onto Kian Tang's knee. It didn't break, but Harry did feel a little bit of a crunch when his strength energy empowered elbow guard met the dragon's armored kneecap. Kian Tang's wings beat a step to throw him back to gain some distance, but not into the air. Harry confirmed in the last fight the dragon's pride wouldn't let him take flight unless Harry himself took to the skies, since he'd been challenged to a physical contest. Harry charged forward before the immortal beast could release his dragon fire, but Kian Tang instead spun around to whip his spiked tail at Harry. Harry had no intention of taking another trip into the sky, so he dropped back and kicked the tail up as it passed over him to deflect it. He threw himself from the ground at Kian Tang to strike as hard as he could at the monster's armpit in an attempt to dislocate Kian Tang's shoulder from underneath. Kian Tang, however, had taken in a breath as he spun around, and the moment Harry made contact the dragon released his fiercest fire breath. Harry blocked it with an arm guard charged to the max with the flame freezing charm, but this breath was far stronger than any the dragon had released before, and it would take only a few moments for the charm to expire. Harry took it as his chance and smashed his other arm onto his chest, which caused the chest armor to shatter into pieces. Harry directed those pieces to cover Kian Tang's right arm, where they gathered together in Harry's attempt at recreating the crimson bands of Sidorak. Kian Tang's arm was bent behind him and held there by the interlocking bands, and Harry took out his knife and struck with all his force through Kian Tang's chest, where the knife stuck itself into his rib. There the dagger glowed. The dagger was similar to a spell grenade but released the mass accumulation of spells on the point it stabbed. The spell Harry crammed as many of as he could into the knife was a healer spell, the basic bone removal charm. Although he doubted it would actually cause the rib bone to vanish, it should still have an effect as wizard magic seemed more effective than other types against Kyan Tang. The hilt of the dagger glowed the moment the spell was released into the rib, which had another effect. Harry had set up another block transfer computation formation around the area with this point as the center and the knife as the target. Kyan Tang started glowing blue as the formation's effect successfully took place. Kyan Tang stopped his flames and used his other arm to strike at Harry, but he did slowly, at only a fourth the speed he had been as time deceleration had been applied to Kyan Tang through a non-magical means. Harry used his left arm to block Kyan Tang's strike and charged his right arm with a new spell. It looked like a thin band of white light spinning around his forearm over his fist to elbow. It was a rapid cycle-cutting spell and turned his fist into a chainsaw. Harry shouted and used every fiber of strength he could muster to slam his fist into Kyan Tang's chest. One feature of this formation was relative momentum. As Kyan Tang's time had been reduced by a quarter, Harry appeared to be moving 4 times faster and his fist shredded through the black dragon's chest and hit his rib. Kyan Tang roared with power and rage, the blue glow flickering as the immortal dragons will fought against the laws of space and time. The arm Harry was blocking was increasing in strength and cracks formed all over the makeshift bands of Sidorak. Harry knew he only had this one chance to finish it, so he drew in the stored strength energy from his leg armor and forced it into his arm. His arm was going beyond the limit of energy his flesh could sustain and was about to explode, but in the next instant the rib he was pressing against broke through and his chainsaw fist pierced deep into the immortal dragon's chest and into the heart. A wave of black energy exploded from Kyan Tang's body and threw Harry back and to the ground. Black static spread over Kyan Tang's body and his knees gave way. The hole in his chest wasn't closing to Harry's relief. The black dragon looked over to Harry's near-broken form and noticed the damage to Harry's arm was recovering. He said, "I see. There was only one of you. Well played. Be warned though, young immortal, there will be consequences for your actions today. And just like you, I shall return." The black static turned to lightning and consumed his body before exploding outward and seeking Harry Potter. He had no time or strength to move or dodge before the black lightning entered his body. Ping. Immortal Dragon Chi perk acquired. Dragon Path has risen to rank 5. Harry leveled up 4 times, which felt rather hollow all things considered. However, the Dragon Chi perk was certainly a hell of a reward and it granted him access to another path which started at rank 5 instead of rank 1. The path's autocorrections gave a bare-bones understanding of how to use it, but he was still an amateur in its use. For now anyways. Harry took the antidote to the growth potion and re-equipped his proper clothes. A few moments later Merlin exited the cave and looked over the damaged landscape caused by all the fights Harry and Kyan Tang had together. Harry hadn't taken a polyjuice for his Black Ranger getup since the shrinking solution, just like the growth solution, didn't go well with polyjuice, so Merlin recognized him as the one he saw die under the Black Dragon's flames. Merlin asked, "Where is the Sorcerer Supreme?" Harry answered back, "I sent him a letter, he'll probably show up later." "What? Then where is Dragonslayer?" Harry asked, "What's Dragonslayer?" "A sword created by the Dragon King and given to man to keep his brother, the Black Dragon, in line. Only Dragonslayer has the power to kill the Black Dragon and the Sorcerer Supreme has it." "Oh. Are there ways of killing him without Dragonslayer?" "Well, of course there are, but Dragonslayer is the quickest and only real option for most mortals." "Where is? What has happened here? And how are you alive?" Harry wondered how many people in the history of time and space have ever confused Merlin this much. A portal opened at the site and out of it walked a beautiful woman with black hair and dark energy permeating her flesh. The woman took one look at Merlin and said with a scowl, "Has that vile filth betrayed me?" Harry yelled back, "Kyan Tang said something about missing a hot date and won't be back until tomorrow. Did you want to leave him a message?" Merlin summoned his staff and fired purple lightning at the woman who blocked it with a magic shield. Merlin shouted, "Ellie Faye, you dare show your face before me." The woman, Morgan Ellie Faye it turned out, caused her shield to glow, which absorbed the purple lightning and fired purple energy bolts from the lightning it absorbed. Merlin dodged rather than block as he was pretty out of it from being bound for so long. Harry paused and went over his options. Morgan Ellie Faye has always been considered one of the greatest sorcerers in history and is a student of Merlin and is half Fae and is immortal. Oh, and if that weren't enough, she's read lots from the Darkhold, perhaps one of the most dangerous books in existence. That black wave that shot out of Kyan Tang when he died removed the anti-magic energy in the area, which wasn't something Harry expected. If that wasn't the case, Ellie Faye wouldn't have been able to make a portal to this location. Now that she was here, anti-magic wouldn't affect her very much since her skill in sorcery was far better than Harry's from what he could tell. Well, that might work. Harry unpaused and took a magic gun from his inventory and shot Ellie Faye. However, her image faded to reveal itself as an illusion that had even fooled Harry's energy sense. She reappeared and said, "A magic gun? You're from the future, aren't you?" Harry didn't answer. He tried to focus on his energy sense, but she now appeared to be in several places at once, though Harry only saw the one in front of him. Harry tried to apparate out, but it didn't work. He then remembers Merlin is a wizard and also capable of apparition, meaning Ellie Faye would have set up a means to prevent his escape on arrival. Merlin started sending out waves of green energy which passed through the illusions and bent around them while the original Morgan Ellie Faye started glowing. Harry aimed and fired 3 shots, but Ellie Faye transformed into a massive snake and dodged the shots. Harry fired at the ground, causing an explosion, but the snake had moved far faster than a snake should be able to and got clear of the way. Harry countered by setting his hands on the ground and he cast a wide area transmutation spell. Pillars and spikes of iron shot up from the ground, forcing Ellie Faye to return to her human form and take to the sky, as those with fairy blood cannot stand the touch of cold iron. Harry fired a few more shots, but her skill at flying allowed her to practically dance through the sky and dodge Harry's remaining magic bullets. She looked like she was playing with him. Harry's senses weren't telling him more than it seemed she wanted him to know, which was even worse than the situation with Kian Tang. Merlin fired several barrages of magic spells, but they were either dodged, deflected, or absorbed by Ellie Faye. The sorceress smiled and said, "You certainly have lost your touch, and your friend from the future has no imagination." Harry figured that was said to get him angry, so he yelled back, "Someone wearing that dress with that belt has no right to talk about imagination." Yes, he was insulting her fashion sense. A low blow for sure, but from her shocked and infuriated expression it seemed to have worked. And seriously though, a silver skull belt buckle? A vast stream of energy and light shot from the horizon and stuck Ellie Faye, who had been too distracted charging up a spell to kill Harry, to notice. An old man of African descent appeared in the sky and fired blast after blast at Ellie Faye, along with Merlin, who added to the force. Morgan Ellie Faye gave one final sneer at Merlin and Harry before teleporting away. Harry took a look at the new arrival and recognized Merlin's predecessor, the sorcerer supreme of this age, Maykeen. He looked at Harry for a moment before going over to Merlin and asked, "What happened here, my friend?" Merlin shook his head and said, "I don't know, ask him." Maykeen calmly walked over to Harry and said, "Who are you?" Harry sighed and said, "Harry Potter, a student of Camartage of the 4th year of the 21st century. I was practicing a form of time math, and when I checked my calculations the space-time broke and I ended up here. Heard Merlin was in trouble, so I went to help. I wanted a crack at the Black Dragon, but I sent you a letter before facing him in case I failed, which it turns out, I didn't. I used time math to hold Kian Tang and wizard magic to pierce his defenses and destroy his heart." Maykeen stayed silent for a moment before giving a weary sigh and said, "I am getting too old for this. Merlin should be able to return you to your time. Do not stay for too long." Harry nodded, "Yes, I know." Maykeen walked over to Merlin and berated him for getting sloppy for someone who was still in his prime. He told Merlin that once he had paid back Harry for his assistance he was to head straight for Camartage and finish his uncompleted training. The Sorcerer Supreme left through a portal and Merlin asked, "You are both a wizard and sorcerer, are you not?" Harry nodded, "Yeah. Come to think of it, I heard the Heart Palace technique I learned was something you invented." Merlin smiled and made a portal to his tower, saying, "Follow me then, I know just how to repay you." What neither knew was that not long after they left, Ellie Faye returned and used a spell for time viewing to see everything that had happened, from the Power Rangers to the final fight to the conversation they had after she was driven away. No one had thought to cast any privacy spells after all, so when Harry answered Maykeen's questions, she heard his answers. Harry was only invisible when looking at him in the future, not the past. The immortal gave a wicked smile and said, "Harry Potter, 2004 After arriving at Merlin's place, which he cast half a dozen spells to clean due to the length of his absence, Merlin sat Harry down and explained the details of the Heart Palace. One of the things Harry had never succeeded at was fusing mystical energies with exotic energy to combine wizardry and sorcery. Merlin basically told him the trick, which involved a lot of visualization and practice. Once finished, Merlin opened a portal to Harry's time, though the same amount of time he had been in the past would have gone by on his return. Merlin didn't have to explain why, as Harry knew the consequences of leaving for 2 weeks and returning the same day. Ping. Quest completed, rescue Merlin. Reward, new feature, load save. As soon as Harry took his first step in the present, the quest completion screen popped up. The full quest was to rescue Merlin and return to the present, so he didn't technically complete it until just now. Harry opened up his menu and confirmed the details. Load save was basically an instant death he could use any time to kill himself and return to a save point. He still lost a level, but the feature had a lot of applications. Should he fall into a tear in reality again, he could pause before arriving and load save, thus killing himself and returning to the present before arriving elsewhere. Due to the nature of his body, it was very hard to simply kill himself at convenient times. He could even use this feature to fake his death if he did it right. Though if he really wanted to fake his death, he was more likely to charge his body with far too much energy and cause himself to explode, preferably with an audience around and cameras set up in advance he could use to record everyone's expressions. He wished load save could be done without the dying, the losing of a level, and the pain, but there was a chance that having something so convenient would lead to abuse, which would spoil him. He didn't want to be the type of guy who played online and disconnected every time he was going to lose. Before heading back to Camartage, Harry used a portal to head out into the middle of nowhere and found a hidey hole. Not the one he used to rest, but a different one. Before his final battle against Kian Tang, Harry said a few things here. There were a number of magical processes known by wizard, sorcerer, and goblin which took a long time to complete, so Harry set up as many as he could think of, and now that he returned, he collected them. One example is a process which can turn silver into mithril and gold into adamantium. This process was special because once it started it could not be interrupted, or else it would have to start over and the materials used could not be collected while in the process of transmutation. Of course he didn't have that much gold to work with due to giving most of it to his bank, but he had something just as good. Harry had several tons of scrap metal from his crafting practices and a philosopher's stone, and for the first time since acquiring it he was able to take it out and use it to turn his scrap into gold and silver. He did so somewhere close to the North Pole, of course, after setting a dozen or so concealing spells which prevented anyone from showing up before he was done. The philosopher's stone could turn base metals into copper, silver, or gold, in addition to making the elixir of life, though the amount it can produce at any time is quite small. Since time does not pass in his inventory he can't collect it in there, but at least for that time he was able to get 5 doses and set them aside for emergencies. When Harry returned 1,400 years later, only about a tenth of the gold had changed and a fifth of the silver. The process which changed it was similar to the half-life decay of some materials, except it broke down into something more complex instead of something simpler due to the treatment and alchemic formation used. Something interesting he found when cross-referencing some details he learned from his business contacts was that mithril and adamantium had both been discovered a while ago. Though mithril had a different name, it was called vibranium. Although it was only a fraction of the total was measured in tons, and though the separating was tricky, he was able to get a large amount of pure adamantium and vibranium for use in future projects. He still remembered the tail swipe of the black dragon destroying his sword, and if what he heard about the properties of adamantium and vibranium were correct, he wouldn't have that problem in the future. On Harry's return he went to the Sanctum Sanctorum, which had been mostly quiet without him, and he informed the Ancient One of his most recent adventure. The reason he didn't keep it to himself was simply because his actions could have further consequences. The one in charge of the protection of the realm needed to know. When finished she said, "I'd ask you to be more careful with the fabric of space and time, but I suppose these things happen." Harry had no ability to tell the difference between when she was joking and when she was sarcastic. She continued, "You certainly obtained some gains, however. A private lesson from Merlin himself and immortal dragon Chi of all things. I'm sure you've noticed we don't have much on the use of Chi for martial arts, and we have nothing on Chi magic. I suspect you will be capable of Chi magic in the future, but the only good Chi wizard I know of lives in San Francisco. I will write him a letter though and ask if he wishes to give you some lessons. As for using dragon Chi in martial arts, there are those capable of teaching it, but they are not among those I trust. It would be best if you seek your own path on that matter and keep it to as few people as possible. On another note, it would be prudent not to take off your shirt in public." Why? She gave an innocent smile. "No reason, as long as you don't mind people staring at the black dragon tattoo that seems to have appeared there." Harry conjured 2 full-length mirrors, one in front and one behind him, and lifted up the back of his shirt, revealing the elaborate black dragon figure that seemed to be ascending towards the sky that covered most of his back. At least it looked cooler than Kyan-Tang himself did. Chi was something Harry had done a great deal of research both in and out of Camartage after his encounter with the Mandarin. Chi itself was life force, pure and simple. Most humans have very little Chi except for children who are naturally energetic and have excess Chi which their body uses to grow into an adult. There are those who train all their lives to gather and Chi from the world to increase their own, but such Chi requires purification, which is very difficult due to high concentration of pollutants in the modern era. Harry's Chi, however, was that of an immortal dragon now, though it would be more impressive if the attributes such a thing passively granted weren't things he already had due to the nature of his mutant obscurus body, such as healing, magic resistance, and tough physique. Using it actively, however, was another story. Without control, he would take the expression bull in a china shop to an unprecedented level. In addition to being able to use Chi magic, he should also be able to learn dragon magic, which is the equivalent of dragon Chi magic. Since he got a few examples of how it worked while fighting Kyan-Tang, he wouldn't even have to start from scratch. It didn't take long after his return to Camartage for Goose to find him and express her displeasure in Harry's absence for the last 2 weeks. Harry's room had an enchanted litter box, water bowl, and food dispenser which would take years to stop working, so Harry wasn't physically needed. But Harry had always found some time to pet or hang out with his familiar, and this ended up being the longest period they had been apart since the bond formed. Harry made it up to her by offering to chauffeur Goose around London all day and take her anywhere she wanted to go, which the Flurkin graciously accepted. There was also a junior chef cooking contest today Harry had entered himself in a few months back, and Goose was not against attending. After the day trip, Harry got back to training. Merlin had told him how to fuse his exotic energy with the other energies in his heart palace, and he wanted to try that as fast as he could. Not for increased power through. Harry was aware he was not the only one capable of sensing energy, and though few among the sorcerers could do so without tools or physical contact, there were wizards who could, and likely others as well. When Harry was just saturated with his invisible exotic energy, that wasn't a problem, but now he had other forms of energy within his body. Harry wanted to merge his exotic energy with his sorcerer energy so that the invisible nature of one would envelop the other. According to Merlin, the process of merging one with the other was basically a form of visualization. He had to visualize his exotic energy as something and his other forms of energy as something that was compatible with it. Being a chief, he decided to use food. He thought of his exotic energy as butter. He then thought of his dimensional energy as mashed potatoes. Once the imagery clicked, he felt the inherent incompatibility of the two energies within him fall away and slowly merge together. The other energies he would assign as other foods. Strength energy from Siderax Crimson Cosmos he'd think of as broccoli. Nature energy he'd think of as biscuits. Mist energy from Volter's realm would fit as popcorn, and Icon's illusion energy he could think of as rice. Raggetter's binding and anti-magic energy he would think of as pancakes, and Kraken's locking and unlocking energies he could see as steak. Once he started the fusion, he found he could increase the rate or slow it down, but he couldn't reverse it. That was fine, but he had to take his time to adjust to the fused energies and slowly adapt the spells he knew to use the fused energy. Technically, he could force a complete fusion right now, but then the spells he knew which used the energies on their own wouldn't work and he would have to make new ones from scratch. This process of merging energies, however, only worked with exotic energy. Merging other forms of energy would cause one to disrupt the other or will cause one to try to convert the other into itself. Exotic energy, however, doesn't follow the same rules, which is why it is possible for it to be merged within a heart palace. That being said, since wizards who try to use dimensional or nature energy often explode according to the grimoires of the Black Family Library, Harry might have been only the second person in history after Merlin himself to actually do it. The Ancient One had told Harry he wasn't the first wizard to try becoming a sorcerer, only that he was the second to succeed. Harry had intended to take his time safely testing the merged energies, preferably under the eye of the Ancient One in the mirror dimension, but things don't always go as planned. A week after returning from his time-skipping adventure, his London residence got a package with his prize for 4th place in the cooking contest he went to with Goose. It was a very large, autographed, limited edition cookbook with a ribbon tied around it. Harry didn't bother removing the ribbon once he opened the package. He just placed it directly into his inventory. Ping. Darkhold has become bound to inventory and cannot be removed. Harry's last thought before his senses were enveloped by darkness was, oops. Chapter 26, Darkest Temptations. Ping. Darkhold has established a connection to the nether plane. Spirit body has been forced into the $% hashtag n %% hashtag $% nether plane. Harry woke in the semi-ethereal form which he often took while using battle meditation or exploring the astral plane. He clearly remembered his last sense, which was the feeling of a book entering his inventory. He could now tell that the book itself was made of a special material reminiscent of Quirrell's turban that blocked his energy sense, which is why he didn't feel the content hidden within the hollowed-out book until it was too late. And now the Darkhold had Trojan horsed itself into his inventory and it didn't want to leave. The Darkhold was said to be written by the elder demon god of chaos, Thin, as a means to interact with a world he promised his sister, Gia, he would not return to. The Darkhold was a loophole to this promise and contained all the knowledge the elder god, Thin, could even make specific sections stand out to draw in the attention of the reader to learn what he wanted them to and act in a manner he wanted them to act. Harry had long since determined that his inventory was basically where his mind and soul was located. Even if Harry died in a sealed room, his magic obscurus particles would be taken into his inventory and removed from his inventory at his last respawn point, so without knowing where his save point was, he couldn't be killed in the physical world without great difficulty. That meant that to truly kill or harm Harry, he had to be attacked through his inventory, which now had a connection to an evil elder demon god of chaos. Harry got up and tried to end his battle meditation, but it didn't work. His astral body seemed to be locked in this plane and he wasn't getting out the easy way. While in the astral plane, Harry couldn't pause, use his inventory, or even use his new load save feature, as they all could only be done from his body. One reason Harry had yet to put any serious effort into creating powerful equipment for himself was because most of the energy he obtained for level UPS came from battle meditation and he couldn't even use any item he created here. Sure, he could conjure a weapon using magic, but he couldn't take from or place items into his inventory unless he was in his own body. Through his inventory, Harry felt the Darkhold's contents entice him to memorize it, even as the specific contents that seemed to stand out shifted to become more and more alluring. He was doing his best to ignore it, but it was like having someone whisper in your ear without being able to tell if it was your own thoughts or someone else's words. Unlike other books that were easy to ignore, the Darkhold was interactive and wasn't affected by the time stop of his inventory. Eventually it would imprint itself completely on Harry, and Harry Potter himself would be all but dead. What would take his place would be a servant of Thin, or worst, a vessel. Harry himself was both emotion and logic driven, but emotions can be manipulated, and the logic of an elder god born before life existed on Earth could easily direct Harry to think that serving as Thin's vessel would be a logical choice. He wouldn't even have to do it directly, he could just whisper into his subconscious until his conscious couldn't think of any reason not to do so and would even be willing to do it with glee. That would be bad. Harry wasn't sure how someone arranged this, as it required knowledge of Harry's ability to become one with books, with only the Ancient One and Snape having learned that, and the latter had erased the knowledge from his mind. According to the messed up little pop-ups, he was now in the nether plane, which just so happened to be the plane of existence Thin lived in and ruled. Thin's power was chaos and knowledge. But that actually worked against Harry, as it basically meant that the stronger you knew Thin to be, the stronger he actually was. And since the Darkhold was telling him exactly how powerful Thin was, it wasn't looking very good for Harry at the moment. Harry decided to try walking around. Sitting down wasn't helping him distract his thoughts away from the promises of infinite power the book on his mind continued to whisper to him, and he figured a good distraction would help prolong the inevitable, or maybe buy time for a miracle. He couldn't even go through the other books in his inventory, since the Darkhold was like a shining light and would draw his attention to it if he even thought in the general direction of the books in his inventory. He could already feel parts of his mind trying to break his mental discipline and go through every word of the Darkhold. He was pretty sure the part of his mind saying a single peek wouldn't hurt wasn't a part of his mind at all. There was one thing which gave Harry hope. Thin may be able to access his soul through his inventory, but he could not take it unless Harry gave it to him. Harry hadn't memorized the Ancient One's private library for nothing. Even in a situation like this, he still knew what could and could not be done. He simply had to figure out how to not be tricked or enticed into doing just that and hope Thin would eventually grow bored of him. The inky black void around him changed into a serene landscape with a beautiful night sky that surpassed the majesty of the sky he missed during his tutorial in the land of the dead. A few feet from him was a quaint table, and sitting there was a beautiful woman who looked about 20 or so with silky black hair framing an enchantingly flawless face. She had pearl-smooth skin that glowed under the dim moon light of the sky above and a black velvet dress that hugged her form, leaving little to the imagination while still looking tasteful. Her eyes had a fascinating color close to violet but far more otherworldly. She wasn't looking directly at him however but was reading a book at the table. Harry thought it was one hell of a low blow. He had been able to avoid most of the effects of puberty since the only woman he interacted with these days was the bald Ancient One, and she was an ant figure to him, so he never thought of her that way. Now, his 14-year-old hormones, which shouldn't even affect him in the astral plane, but somehow were doing exactly that, were being used against him as he faced what was basically the sexiest being he'd even encountered. Still, no point in being rude. He said, "Hello, my name is Harry, nice to meet you," before taking a seat. The woman closed her book and elegantly set it to the side before turning to him with an irresistible smile. She spoke with a silky British accent that made him dizzy. "Hello Harry. It's nice to meet you as well. I'm sure you've already guessed it, but I'm the lord of this dimension, Thin." Harry did his best not to tremble as the negative emotion suppression he usually relied on seemed gone at the moment, and after a breath to steady himself he said, "So what can I do for you today? I'm sure you didn't invite me here for my wonderful company." Her beauty seemed magnified through her smile and she said, "No, I cannot say I did, wonderful as your company is sure to be. You're already doing far better than most. The innate mental protections granted to you are stopping my direct attempts to control you, but it is your own will that strengthens them. I'm very impressed." Harry's fear of the woman was ebbing away, which he knew to be a bad thing, as his fear would keep his hormones from making him do anything stupid. Damn, she was good. She smiled as if his thoughts were clearly on display and said, "I'll make this simple, Harry Potter. I want you. Not as a vessel, I already have another in mind for that. Not as an avatar either, as once I have a vessel I won't need one." Harry understood that she wasn't even bothering to hide the fact that his thoughts since entering this realm had been an open book to her. Harry asked, "If not as a vessel or an avatar, what use could you have for me? For that matter, how did you get the dark hold to me? I didn't think you could just deliver it by mail. How did you even find out I could absorb it?" She gave a smile that was as seductive as it was predatory and said, "How clever. You're correct, of course. The sorceress Ellie discovered your identity and sought a means to strike back at you from her own time. However, because she could not find you in the future, she was forced to use the dark hold. That was where I learned of you, and through Ellie I took some steps. The room of requirements of your school was actually created from a spell of mine within the dark hold. I too could not find you, but since I knew you to be a wizard from Ellie, I made sure you would enter that room as soon as possible. Although I cannot affect the room, I can see everything that goes on within, so I simply had to wait for you to arrive. That is how I learned of and witnessed your gifts. As for getting the dark hold to you, it wasn't difficult to manipulate Ellie into doing so for me. After finishing my preparations, I simply gave her a spell that she thought would send an attack into the future at you, but once the spell was cast it drew the dark hold itself into the spell and directly into the future. By the time the dark hold had reached the present, I had enough information on you to manipulate a few things to get it to you. And as for what I want from you, as I said before, that's quite simple. I want everything. You're not aware of even a fraction of the gifts you have been given, and through my power you can rise higher than any on the mortal plane." Harry tried to remain oblivious to her attempt at seduction and pretend he wasn't blushing. He then tried to nonchalantly shrug. "Why would I want that? I mean, it might be nice for a little while, but wouldn't that get boring rather quickly?" Thin laughed with the clarity of a silver bell and said, "Indeed. Power is hard for others to obtain, but you can acquire it as you please given enough time, thus it does not hold the same value to you." Harry nodded and said, "Even if I became the strongest person ever, I would likely find ways to limit myself to keep things interesting. So a quick means to become powerful would just make it more inconvenient later when I need to limit myself." Thin leaned over the table, giving a godly view of her cleavage, and Harry had to use every fraction of willpower he had to stop himself from looking through the dark hold for sex spells. She stared into Harry's soul and could easily see he was not lying to her. Harry had gained a love of video games in the afterlife and enjoyed the feeling of doing one's best to grow stronger. A game where one was given the power to defeat everything right away without effort wouldn't be worth playing, and since he considered himself a video game character, he took this as an outlook on life. Harry also lacked the connection to many others at the moment. It was something of a coincidence at this point in his life and would likely change soon, but there was no one he wanted the power to protect and no one he would give up his soul for right now. This meant Thin's usual offers held little value to Harry. That being said, she was a flexible elder demon god of chaos, so she had other things to offer. There may not be any specific person on Earth Harry would sacrifice himself to protect, but what about the Earth itself? Thin said, "It is true that you hold no interest in what I have offered to others. That doesn't mean I can't give you what you want. Tell me, Harry, are you aware of the deepest desire of your soul? Harry couldn't exactly trust his mind at the moment to give him an honest answer, but it would be rude to remain silent, so he looked back at his memories. Looking at the sky above him, he sighed and said, I just enjoy helping people. It was his hobby after all. Then smiled and said, I will take possession of the earth with or without your assistance. As I've said, however, I want you. I will take you either now, or through my vessel on the earth, but one way or another you will be mine. Now, however, I shall offer a concession. Give yourself to me, and in return, I shall not take any action that harms anyone on earth. Harry raised an eyebrow at the deal and did his best to ignore what she said before that. He answered, I highly doubt that would be possible. Then said with that silky voice that was still making him dizzy, you enjoy helping people, but that is not all your heart desires. You want to live in a world filled with adventure and wonder. Chaos can be sinister, but it can also be subtle. I can see the sky your heart desires, and I must say, I think it has promise. If you give yourself to me, I won't reshape the world in a single moment. I will do it gradually, over the course of centuries. No one will die due to a sudden surge in chaotic forces. Instead, they will all be given the needed period to safely adjust. Over time, chaos will spread and humans will gain abilities while animals will become stronger, more fierce, and more numerous. Technology will experience several leaps forward due to a few chaotic breakthroughs, and the world will advance into something beautiful. Accept my deal, and the world itself will become your game. Harry shook his head to try and regain his wits and asked, and how would I even be able to enjoy such a thing if I've given you my soul? Her flawless smile and glistening lips drew his attention in what he recognized as a sexual fascination spell. The fact that he recognized it made him realize his mental defenses had given in at some point during the conversation. He recognized the spell because it was in the dark hold, and without his awareness catching on, another part of his mind had already started memorizing the dark hold's contents. He remembered that memorizing the dark hold was supposed to be a bad thing, but for some reason couldn't quite place why it had been bad. She said, I never asked for your soul, Harry. I asked for you. I want you, the whole you, and everything that comes with it. I won't take your soul from your delicious body. I want it right where it is. I want you to stand at my side in the world I intend to create. Then edged herself further over the table close to Harry, and with half-closed eyes and a sultry tone, she said, and I want you in my bed at the side of my future vessel. Harry felt light and muddled, and he couldn't help but be drawn into those fascinating magic-filled eyes. However, all the mind magic in the world wasn't able to cover up the one thing that was lacking in those perfect violet irises. There was no love. That realization sparked something in Harry, and through the fog of his mind he answered, no. Even with the dark hold whispering in his ear, perfection itself staring him in the eye, his mind assaulted by the strongest and subtlest of magics, and his hormones trying to control his body like a puppet on its strings, he could never give himself to someone who didn't love him. Thanks to his mother and father, even if they were echoes, he knew what love looked like, and thanks to his relatives, Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia, he knew what its absence looked like as well. The world shattered around him as the illusion broke, and he was returned to the inky black lands. Before him stood a massive formless creature seemingly made of ink and shadow with an indecipherable silhouette. Jagged words erupted from the space itself, I will have you, Harry Potter. One way, or another. The fear that had faded away returned in full swing, and Harry's mind had made a comeback. He concentrated on butter-saturated mashed potatoes while creating his favorite heavy sword. Rather than the standard rust color, this eldritch heavy sword was blood red. He knew there would be consequences for fully merging his exotic energy into his dimensional energy without an adjustment period, but he would be thrilled if he could just survive long enough to face such consequences. Even though this was Than's realm, the Nether realm was one of the closest realms to Earth, and it was only due to the promise Than made to Gia that prevented invasion. This, however, also meant that it was not isolated, meaning he could still draw upon other forms of energy for combat, just like during battle meditation. Tentacles of squirming darkness shifted in and out of existence, sweeping back and forth over Harry at wind-breaking speed. Harry used an image of buttered broccoli to saturate his spirit with exotic energy-infused strength energy from the Crimson Cosmos. He wanted to overload his spirit with energy and self-destruct like he could in the material realm with his flesh, but his spirit had well-defined limits, and he had never been able to draw in more energy than the limit of his spirit in the astral plane. Harry moved faster than he ever had before and swung his heavy sword through the writhing tentacles, striking him from every direction. However, there was little else he could do. Than was the absolute law of this dimension, and although he was weak against eldritch magic, something his heavy sword counted as, that only meant Harry had some room to struggle rather than immediately get ground to pudding, since no other form of magic would work against the being labeled as the first black magician. The space voiced out as appendages coalesced from the inky void into creatures beyond mortal description. Your use of magic is impressive for a wizard, but who do you think invented it? Let me tell you a little secret. There is no such thing as exotic energy. Your kind are the descendants of my children, beings capable of molding reality as they saw fit using my power. What you generate and wield is nothing less than chaotic energy itself. Your kind once ruled the world under my power until they turned against me. With a single spell, they wiped my existence from their own memories and the memories of all others. They convinced themselves their magic had nothing to do with me, nothing to do with chaos, and without the knowledge of my existence as an anchor, I lost my throne in your world. Harry knew what Than was doing. The demon god was pressing Harry into a corner by informing him his own magic could never defeat Than. Harry's frantic mind had practically gone against his will and already started combing over the dark hold in an attempt to find some means to escape or get out of this situation. But since Thin controlled what parts of the dark hold would draw in Harry's attention, it was only showing him means of getting stronger which would corrupt him, not a means to escape. Eventually Harry would reach a limit and be forced to use those means, and with that there would be no turning back. Of course Thin wasn't trying to kill him, just pressure him. Harry could stop swinging his massive sword at the endless hordes of creatures now surrounding him while the space itself struck at him again and again, just barely slow enough for him to dodge. If he stopped, Thin would too, since he had no intention of allowing Harry to die. But if he stopped fighting, Thin would simply use other means to pressure him. Means like torture, or worse, more seduction. Harry knew that elder gods didn't really have a gender, but Gia was considered female and Thin was considered male, and the fact that he just tried and damn near succeeded at seducing Harry would give him nightmares for a long time if he survived this with his sanity intact. Even though it was only his spirit, he would tire eventually. And it seemed although Harry was technically destroying creatures made of pure energy, he wasn't absorbing them for experience, likely due to Thin's power. He wasn't given any path that would allow him to win besides the one Thin chose for him. He was also pretty sure even if he knew of such a path, Thin was probably using mind magic to prevent him from thinking of it. That meant he could never make a successful plan. Harry was getting frustrated and even angry, something he hadn't felt in a long time due to the negative emotion suppressing effects of his power. However, once he realized this, it did in fact give him an idea. Harry concentrated on his anger and let it fill him. Just like hormones, anger can make people do stupid things. He never allowed himself to get angry at his aunt and uncles because they would punish him for anything stupid he did while angry. Because of that, he had no idea what he would do while angry. And that was a better alternative than making a plan Thin allowed him to make. Harry shouted and rushed into the array of creatures and slashed with all his strength at anything that caught his attention. He no longer concerned himself with conserving energy, just dealing as much destruction and damage as he could. He dived deep into his memories of his childhood with his relatives and every unjust action they ever took against him. He thought about the so-called wizarding world that sent him to that hell and forgot about him until he exploded. Harry gave completely into his rage with all his heart and soul. A barrier within his mind snapped and golden streams of energy burst from Harry's spirit form like raging flames. Now he remembered. He'd recently acquired immortal dragon chi and he had read from the Grand Grimoire. He could try block transfer computations and turn into his animagus form if absolutely necessary, like his godfather had in Azkaban. Harry realized that before he awoke in this plane, some of his knowledge must have been sealed, though thankfully it was the same seal rather than multiple seals. He didn't remember he had immortal dragon chi until now, but his pure rage was enough to awaken its power without consciously being aware of it, which broke the seal. Thin didn't seem to mind and said, "You interest me more and more with every moment. Let me show you the power of true chaos magic." Exotic energy, or as Thin stated it actually was, chaos energy, was filling the space, and conjuration and transfiguration and charms and hexes all seemed to occur through the space at the same time. At first Harry thought it was different, but now with it raging through the space in various concentrations, Harry saw the similarities between the energy he could generate and chaos energy from this plane. Other forms of energy were always uniform. Unless tainted, the dimensional energy in one sorcerer had the same feel as another. This is because it comes from the same source as long as they were in the same dimension. The exotic energy in wizards, however, were each unique to them because they generated it. And this chaos energy may have felt different from his own exotic energy, but now that he knew where to look, it was simply the difference between one wizard's magic and another's, though far denser and less uniform overall. From the chaos energy saturating the space came maddening creatures conjured from nothing that had their forms transfigured unexpectedly as they attacked in impossible to predict manners which caused strange effects with every movement. Harry used the strength enhancement and protection from magic of his immortal dragon chi to fight back with his blood-red eldritch heavy sword, but since wizard magic was effective against dragons, it came as no surprise that this chaos magic was the same, since it apparently was in fact the same. Harry tried several different computations using block transfer computation, but any effect, good or bad it had, was garbled up in the torrent of chaotic energies which rendered the math of time and space meaningless, and he wasn't being given a chance to set up anything large enough to have a strong effect. He thought back to the times he remembered the Ancient One telling him where she had to face the masters of other dimensions in their own dimensions, but more often than not, that only played out in her favor through trickery, bluffs, or deals with other beings. Not much good at the moment. There was one thing he remembered which gave him something of a plan. The one who wrote the Grand Grimoire had written a spell to break out of dimensions you are trapped in, and although Harry never practiced it, he figured he might be able to use it even in his astral form. However, he wasn't being given an opening to use it. Endless legions of creatures were being formed from nothingness, and Harry's own wizard magic spells such as finite incantatum were not working to dismiss them or easily defeat them. Space itself seemed to bend a fold, and Harry could barely move a step without finding himself turned upside down or backwards. Harry figured since Thin wasn't going to just give him an opening, he might as well just put everything he had into one shot, since he wasn't exactly getting stronger as time marched on. It wasn't difficult to notice that the creatures that reformed after he slew them were slowly adapting to his attacks, meaning any skill he had which could easily slay them wouldn't do so for very long. Harry focused on the image of butter-saturated pancakes to fully merge his anti-magic and exotic energy and shouted, "Through these words I cast you back, 7 rings top to bottom." Bind the magic, cast it out, finite incantatum. 7 rings materialized in the void around Harry, and within that space the conjured creatures evaporated. This was a spell Harry designed which fused the concept of the 7 rings of Rogador with finite incantatum, anti-magic and magic cancellation in one. Since he fully merged the two energies together, it was also the only anti-magic spell he had, and he was lucky he already had an idea on how to use it. Rather than cast on the enemy though, he cast it on himself. In doing so, parts of his mind he didn't know were still blocked off suddenly opened up, and Harry regained his sense of self. Creatures and tentacles that tried to enter the space of the rings evaporated as well, so Harry used the chance to pour all his willpower into his soul as he focused his dimensional energy into a single point. Harry shouted critical burst, and forced the point to expand while contracting to create a critical point mass. Cracks formed around him and shattered his rings, but the creatures and horrid masses didn't approach him. The space itself darkly laughed. Well then, go on through. Critical burst should first crack the space and then shatter it into a hole, allowing passage into the space between realms known as the crossroads. With the amount of energy Harry put into it, there should have been an opening large enough for a tank to drive through with room on both sides. Instead, the opening that formed in the center of the cracked space wasn't large enough for him to squeeze his pinky finger through. Critical burst used pure dimensional energy to work, and since his had fully fused with his exotic energy, the spell he was gambling everything on ended up a dud. The darkness bellowed deeply, "Give up, Harry Potter. There is no way for you to escape me." Harry realized that Thin had probably allowed him to use his plan not only to waste all of Harry's energy, but to give him hope just for a moment before smashing it to pieces. The creatures around him slowly moved in, but before they reached him the darkness cried out, "What?" From the tiny crack a flame emerged and lit the darkness like a torch in the night. "No, he is mine," rumbled the darkness. The flames broke through the cracks and entered the nether space. It burned away the darkness and all the creatures and black magic within. The void itself seemed to shatter and was replaced with a new sun. The flaming sphere didn't burn nor harm Harry, who had nearly given up hope. It lengthened and shifted, and wings emerged from its sides as it took on a familiar shape. A woman's voice rang out from the firebird, "He is not yours, and he will never be yours." The shape of the flames tightened into what Harry now recognized as a phoenix, which meant there was only one identity he could assign to this being. The Phoenix Force. Chapter 27, Chapter 27 Consequences and the Future. The embodiment of life and the passion of creation, the symbol of rebirth, and the nexus of alchemic energy in the universe, the Phoenix Force herself, had apparently taken advantage of the tiny crack Harry made and crashed his kidnapping. Orange and red flames spread through the plane, igniting the darkness and casting out the irregular forms it took. The sky itself shook as the last vestiges of chaos burned away while shuddering out. This isn't over. The shimmering flames died down and gathered together into the form of a woman who stood before Harry. "We don't have much time, Harry Potter. And there is much to discuss," Harry said. "Didn't you beat him?" She shook her head. "No, I've only driven him back. This is not the nether plane, but a corridor to the nether plane that exists within the Darkhold. He can never be beaten in his own realm, but he can't drag others there from Earth without consent. Thin was trying to trick you into thinking you were in a hopeless situation, so you were more likely to give in. You did remarkably well, and I was able to use the fissure you made in the corridor to enter and purge its connection to Thin, but only for a short time. During this time, however, I can freely speak with you, as this corridor operates outside the rules of non-interference higher beings have with lower ones. I have been watching you use my gift, Harry Potter, and so far I like what I have seen." "Your gift?" he asked. "Yes. Myself, death, eternity, infinity, and the living tribunal forged the aspects of this power for you. In doing so we granted you freedom to break fate and the ability to go against destiny. We have no opinions on how you use it, and even if you burn the universe down, none of us will stop you, but I doubt you ever would without just cause." Harry tried not to think about the fact that the Phoenix Force did in fact have the ability to burn down the universe if she chose to do so. And although this answered some questions, it also raised so many more. She continued, "I'm telling you this for 2 reasons. First, you need to understand that any power that takes control of you can control the fate of the universe. That is why Thin desires you. Second, I have a favor to ask." Sure, what can I do for you?" "Around the time you died, I encountered a young and powerful telepath on this world who tried connecting to the mind of a dying friend, and in doing so almost died herself. Someone who values life should in turn be valued, so I saved her and granted her a connection to my power. In time she would have become an avatar of mine, but since then, that connection has been sealed. I want you to find her and break the seal." Since there was much written about the Phoenix Force in Camartaj's library, Harry asked, "As your avatar, wouldn't she have to go around the galaxy burning away useless worlds?" One of the primary jobs of the Phoenix was to cut away parts of the universe which would then regrow. A world destroyed by the Phoenix would always have new life rise from it, no matter how trashy the planet was before. It was the nature of her power. Eventually, but not for a long time. You could just as easily do it for her once you have risen in strength, or you could do together, it matters not which. Thin was right about something, Harry Potter. You are only aware of a fraction of your gifts. You are both Obscurus and Mutant in addition to the gifts you have been granted, and until now you have only scratched the surface of your full abilities. Many of them, however, your subconscious has locked until your mind becomes stronger. In this I can assist you. Agree to my favor and I shall give you a small portion of my power, a seed you can use to grow a mind strong enough to control the powers you don't even know you possess. Harry considered it but was hesitating. The Phoenix Force noticed this and said, my avatar will not be controlled by me in any way. She will know what I know when accessing my power and understand what needs to be done, but it is by her own will alone that she may choose to do it. That however is only if the seal is released soon. If not, her mind may be crippled by the seal and she may end up controlled by others. I can assure you releasing the seal will not cause any harm to come to her, in fact it will prevent possible harm that may occur if the seal is not removed soon enough. With that Harry had no more reason to refuse and said, in that case, I would love to help. The human form Phoenix Force held out her hand and a small flicker of orange flame appeared and floated over to Harry's chest. It entered him and he felt a small warmth spread throughout his body. Ping. Phoenix Flame perk acquired. Chinook Path has risen to rank 10. The corridor shook and the Phoenix said, we're out of time. You can't remove the dark hold from your inventory without help from inside your inventory. You need to find the Book of Visionty. Harry felt himself return to his body but shouted, wait, how will I find the girl? The Phoenix said, my flames will guide you. Before Harry woke up in his body, he took a look at a clock and found it had been about a half hour since he saw it even though it felt like so much longer. Once Harry returned to his body, he felt the dark hold within his inventory return to life and once more tried to drag him into the corridor. The darkness that tried to take him however was halted by the embers of the Phoenix Flame left to him, but just barely. If he tried to actively browse through the dark hold contents or if he tried to use battle meditation he would certainly be dragged back. And since he could barely peek at the contents of his inventory without seeing the dark hold, that meant he couldn't access other books in his inventory either. Even if Harry left it alone, the constant subconscious allure the dark hold had would eventually draw him back. He considered pausing to see if the dark hold's connection to Thin would still be there if time stopped but when he tried he found that the pause feature was not working. Harry figured it might be similar to the fact that Harry's wizard magic didn't react well to frozen time and the chaos energy connection the dark hold to the nether realm may have had the same property. Harry took a few deep breaths to calm himself. He found himself wishing that memory magic had an effect on him but the best he could do was use a clemency to store the memories of what happened as far from his mind as possible. Harry tried to create a portal to the Ancient One's study but he found that he was unable to do so due to the dimensional energy in his heart palace fusing completely with his exotic energy. He could still use exotic energy on its own but he'd never be able to use just dimensional energy on its own again unless he purged the energy from his body which was ridiculously dangerous and would make things worse. Every action he once did with dimensional energy he would have to relearn to do with his new dimensional energy. Harry decided to just apparate to the park in front of the London branch of the Sanctum Sanctorum and ran inside as fast as he could. He noticed that the ward didn't look very hard at him since much of his energy was now invisible but that was the only real benefit at the moment. He entered the building and ran to the portal to Camartage on the upper floor and from there ran to the Ancient One's room. On arrival he found the Ancient One and Wong having a discussion. She was about to give him a reprimanding glare but from the fear she saw on his face she realized the situation was outside the ordinary. She asked, bad news I suppose. Harry gave a half-hearted smile and said, very. Her eyes widened just a little in surprise as Harry's definition of very bad closely resembled her own. It meant potential news of the world-ending variety. She turned to Wong and said, I am sorry but it seems this will have to wait. Master Wong didn't question her and left for the door. Harry cast several wizard spells which would ensure the conversation could not be eavesdropped through any means and said, I'll tell you the whole story later but the dark hold is currently inside my inventory and Thin is trying to drag my spirit into it so he can control me. The Phoenix Force showed up and told me to get the dark hold out. I need the Book of Visionty. I have no idea where it is and if I don't get this thing out, Thin will use me to rule the universe. The Ancient One shook her head and said, I shall decide on your punishment later. Follow me, the Book of Visionty is in our possession. Harry felt a wave of relief over that fact but had to tense himself up right away as the dark hold tried to use his lapse in concentration to drag him back once more. He really wasn't to last much longer at this rate. The Ancient One led Harry to the portal Harry which linked Camartage to the New York branch of the Sanctum Sanctorum and up 2 flights of stairs to where the relics were usually kept. Harry saw several items he recognized and several he didn't. A strange hovering cloak waved at him from behind a glass case. The Ancient One said, the symbol of the Sanctum Sanctorum is in fact the symbol of Visionty so we prefer to always have his book on hand. How much do you know of it? Harry answered back, Ultimate Book of White Magic. 0 attack spells. And pretty much the anti-dark hold. And you are aware of the risks of using it? She asked for confirmation. Yeah, it falls into the same category as using the names of others to cast spells. They won't mind you doing so as long as you use the power of their realms as they would, but doing so means you owe them a favor and if they come to collect, you can either do the favor or permanently strip your access to their realm. This was the main reason the Heart Palace was so valued. If Harry spent 3 months connecting to, absorbing, and tuning himself to dream energy, he could summon a mist which could put people to sleep. If a sorcerer who knew the approximate feel of dream energy simply shouted that they were calling on the mists of Morpheus, the Lord of the Dream Dimension, they could achieve the same result or perhaps an even stronger effect. However, if Morpheus himself asked of them a favor, they would have to do so or face the consequences. Harry however was not bound by this as he didn't use the assistance of others to use magic, only his own power. There were no free lunches in the universe. Even the Phoenix Force could only give him access to her power after he promised to do her a favor to balance things out. If he used the Book of Vishanti however, there was a risk the Vishanti would call upon him in the future. However, it was a risk worth taking. The Vishanti were the three backers of the Sanctum Sanctorum and freely gave the power of their spells for its sorcerers in order for them to protect the earth. If they ever did call upon him for a favor, it shouldn't be a bad one at least. They entered a room and the Ancient One closed and locked the door. She then called the dark energy within her to dominate the space and an empty area folded away, revealing a hidden space containing a pillar and the book. What was impressive about it was that before the Ancient One opened the folded space, even Harry couldn't feel the presence of the book. She picked it up from the pillar and handed it to Harry. He took it and said, I'm going to set this spot as my respawn point. If this doesn't work, you know what to do. The Ancient One nodded without difficulty. How to kill Harry should he ever need to be killed was something they had in fact gone over more than once. It was one of the requirements for her to fully trust him and give access to her private collection. Harry placed the book into his inventory and felt his existence tremble. His spirit was being drawn in, but not by the dark hold. Harry concentrated with everything he had and dived in. He hoped this wouldn't end badly. When Harry's eyes opened in what seemed to be the next moment, he found that his hand had been placed on the orb of Agamotto which the Ancient One seemed to have brought out. It was glowing the same pure white color it had before when he touched it 2.5 years ago, which had Harry let out a sigh of relief. The Ancient One noticed his eyes opening and his own relief, which caused her own tension to lessen just a bit. She asked, how did it go? Harry placed his hand into his inventory and pulled out the cookbook with a ribbon tied around it, and a moment later he pulled out the Book of Vishanti. Harry said, better than I expected. What do you want to do with the dark hold? Place it on the far side of the moon. She shook her head. No, it might still be found by the people living there if we did that. Harry still had no way to tell if she was being serious or sarcastic. The Ancient One cut the ribbon of the cookbook and opened it to reveal the hollowed-out portion that contained the ancient black book authored by Than himself. After just a moment of hesitation she closed the book once more. Harry wouldn't comment on the fact that she checked to make sure it was actually there and not still in his inventory. The dark hold was temptation personified, and if she didn't check, she would always have a tiny doubt. She said, I recognize the material this cover is made of. It will only hide the dark hold for a short while longer. If it is removed from Earth, Than will be able to act in order to retrieve it and return it to Earth, since it is only on Earth that he is restricted. There is nowhere it is truly safe. Harry thought about it and remembered something Than himself did. Harry said, what if we sent it into the future? And the person we sent it to could send it further into the future, and so on and so forth? Than told me he allowed it to be sent into the future in order to get it to me, so if he hasn't retracted that from what he allows of his book, couldn't we take advantage of it? The Ancient One gave a pensive moment of silence before stating, the dark hold is not just a force of evil, it is also a tool for balance. Complete removal from the timeline would throw off the balance, so that wouldn't work or would have consequences worse than the dark hold itself. Harry considered it and realized she was right. If there are 5 bad ways for something to happen and you prevent all 5, a 6th bad way will appear. If they tried complete removal, something would probably happen and make it worse in order to correct the balance. Harry said, then we pass it to someone from the future who keeps it hidden in that time for a year, and after a year passes it once more to the future. Harry took a few items out of his inventory and said, I have an idea. It didn't take long for the Ancient One to catch on to his idea, though she was surprised Harry had acquired so much mithril and adamantium. Although Harry was still a fledgling crafter compared to the makers of the relics stored in the sanctums, he was already very skilled for a human. Harry used some straightforward crafting spells to make a simple mithril adamantine alloy and shaped it into a cloth paired with a small tablet. He then wrapped the cloth around the dark hold until it was completely bound and asked the Ancient One for 2 drops of her blood. She knew he couldn't use his own for this, so she consented. The blood acted as an encryption which paired the charms on the cloth to the charms on the tablet. Once the spell completed, the cloth-like alloy was no longer cloth-like and had become not only hard, but completely indestructible. The only way to remove the cloth was the tablet, and the tablet could also be used to find the cloth no matter where it was. In other words, the tablet's existence could remain in the world, taking the place of the dark hold, so that if the forces of balance required someone to use the dark hold, it could still be accessed. A moment after the spell was completed, a purple portal opened up in the room and a tall, beautiful blonde woman wearing strange armor and a massive glowing heavy sword on her back came through. The Ancient One and Harry both readied themselves for combat until she lifted her hand and showed them a tablet identical to the one Harry had just created. She gave the room a glance before taking a long look at Harry. Faster than either could move, she ran over to him, scooped him up into a hug and shouted, "Oh my god, you're so small and cute." The Ancient One cracked a smile and said, "You are from the future, I assume." Without letting Harry down, who didn't bother struggling, she said, "Yup, Ilyana Rasputin, current, or should I say, future, Sorceress Supreme. I beat Little Miss Stark for the position last year and it's already been a wild ride. It's a pleasure to meet you, Ancient One." She fully showed how honored she was to meet her, yet treated Harry like a stuffed doll she won at a carnival game. The reason Harry wasn't bothering to struggle was because he was too busy getting shocked at the power of the woman. She didn't have a heart palace like himself and the Ancient One, yet she contained massive reserves of white, black, soul, Chinook, and even death energy. And yet she carried it all without difficulty. This was a woman who could heal, purify, summon demons, fight with a sword, and use telekinesis and necromancy. The Ancient One had already used a few spells to determine the same thing Harry had and was equally if not more shocked. After getting her fill of hugs, the future Sorceress Supreme put him down and said, "Stay put for a moment, I want a picture." She then got out what seemed to be a mobile phone and with the sound of a shutter took several pictures of Harry and the Ancient One. The Ancient One got over her shock just a little quicker than Harry did and asked, "Who was your teacher?" She took a long glance at her glowing heavy sword then gave a small, but noticeable glare at Harry who simply shrugged. She said, "Well, I was taught by a few people but the one I considered my teacher was Aurora Monroe, two of them actually. Different versions of the same woman from different realities. And yes, Harry did teach me his wave sword style. I didn't ask for my soul sword to be this gigantic." She removed her sword and displayed several moves that Harry often used when wielding his eldritch heavy sword which confirmed the story for the most part. She continued, "Stephen taught me a bit as well but we have different specialties so I didn't learn much of him." The Ancient One perked up at this and asked, "Are you Doctor Strange's replacement?" She shook her head for a moment. "No, he retired into marital bliss a few decades ago and Wiccan succeeded him. Wiccan however has been stretching himself pretty thin on a lot of projects so he wanted someone who could devote more time to the actual combat part of defending the Earth to replace him and if you hadn't noticed already, I'm a badass." The Ancient One gave a slight glance to Harry who was still analyzing the readings he was getting off the woman and said, "Perhaps you should not reveal so much of the days to come." Ileana smiled and said, "Nah, I was told that you already have your life and death planned out and nothing anyone says will change it. Harry on the other hand can't be changed. He, and I'm quoting here, takes all information as both truth and fiction and acts accordingly and not at all. So nothing I say will change anything Harry intends to do in the future because he'll take into account both the possibility I'm telling the truth and that I'm lying. For example." She turned to Harry and said, "One of your future wives will be responsible for the deaths of countless people." Harry remains unfazed at the accusation though the fact that she mentioned wives, as in plural, was surprising. Ileana turned back to the Ancient One and said, "Now that I've told him that, he'll consider that I could be lying, but also that I could be telling the truth. However he won't take any action other than what he feels to be right which won't change. There have been attempts to travel back in time and direct Harry before but none of them have ever worked thanks to his stubbornness. And due to the creation of the time shield, no one has been able to travel back into the past without clearance so that isn't as big a problem as it used to be. I have clearance of course." She pulled out a badge Harry recognized as something that contained not only time energy but exotic energy, his exotic energy. She put it away and said, "All right, last thing before I take the book." She took a card out of her wallet and said, "Harry, think of a number between 1 and 10. Harry recognized the question as a specific contingency he had and thought of the number 3. She then said, "Banana," and showed the card to Harry which had a picture of a banana on it which caused Harry to smile. That was the correct response, his thinking the number 3 was to throw off mind readers. Harry handed her the bound dark hold which she took and said, "Oh yeah, there was one thing I did have to say. I was told I already said this, so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy and yada yada." Harry needs to start practicing control over his mutant powers and complete his high school education at an actual school. I was told the Ancient One knows the one I'm talking about and he should start in the fall semester. The Ancient One rose her eyebrow slightly at this and Ileana took another look at Harry and said, "Remember, don't take over the world, eat all your vegetables, and place silencing charms around your room when having sex." Harry blushed at that last statement and heard the shudder of a camera and the shout, "Yes, I got it," before the blonde jumped back into her portal which then vanished. Once she left Harry said, "I am so gonna prank her when I see her next." The Ancient One smiled at that. Harry had to remain silent as there were specific guidelines one had to follow when conversing with a time-traveling you've met in the future. You could ignore those rules of course but there were usually consequences and Harry didn't feel like dealing with them. Harry sat down and looked at the tablet he just made and had been surprised that the plan he came up with on the spot proved to work so quickly. The future Sorceress Supreme would have to hide the thing for a year and then someone with the tablet and their own security measures would find her and take the dark hold from her. The tablet could always track the dark hold, even through time, which is why she was able to come directly to them moments after its creation. The Ancient One said, "We shall discuss this another time. For now, please tell me what happened today." Harry obliged. He told her about the cooking contest and the book which was mailed to him and then told her about being drawn into what he thought was the Nether Realm. He gave the details of Than's seduction attempt and offer and why he refused. He told her about the fight, the permanent fusion of several of his energy types with exotic energy and his idea to use his rage to do something outside of Than's plans which unlocked his suppressed knowledge and dragon chi. He then told her the spell he used from the Grand Grimoire and its near failure and the Phoenix Force's arrival. And last, he told her about Phoenix Force's request which he agreed to. The one thing Harry did not tell her was the relationship between chaos magic and wizard magic. The more who knew that, the worse it would be. It was only because he knew of their relation that he knew that wizard magic could be used to bind the dark hold when other forms of magic would likely be destroyed by the dark hold itself. After thinking it over for a few moments, the Ancient One said, "All things considered, you did well. Resisting Than's temptations and manipulations in his own territory, even if it wasn't his realm, is not something I have ever heard done before, and I must admit I am impressed. Now, tell me what happened when you placed the Book of Vishanti in your inventory. It has been 3 hours since then, and I doubt it was so simple as placing the Book of Vishanti and removing the Darkhold." Harry nodded. "To be honest, I'm not entirely sure what happened. It seemed shortly after I placed it in, I was able to pause. I don't know what I did while paused. Afterwards, I unpaused and did some stuff I don't know, and lastly, I took all the knowledge I gained from both the Darkhold and the Book of Vishanti and locked it in my subconscious along with the memories I had while sorting it, which is why I can't really recall what I did. I can't actively use the information, and I don't even know what I know, but it seems if needed, I'll become aware of specific pieces of information that I may need. But you once told me you could not forget things or alter your own memory." Harry nodded. "Yeah, my Shanic path rank increased from 10 to 17 while paused, so I'm pretty sure I must have used some of the practices of occlumency using Shanics to rearrange my head in a way which allows it. Most of my head seems a lot less cluttered than it was before, that's for certain." That meant that Harry had in fact memorized, likely the full content of both the Book of Vishanti and the Darkhold, but was keeping the knowledge from himself unless he needed something specific. The Ancient One would have been more worried about that had she not just seen proof of the future just a moment ago. She had never really been able to get over the fact that she couldn't see into Harry's future, but the fact that a future Sorcerer Supreme cared greatly for him removed the last shred of doubt she had for Harry Potter. That and the fact that Harry had been able to resist the temptation of Than himself, something she doubted she herself could do, was impressive. And that was even knowing how terrible of a being Than truly was. Both Harry and the Ancient One knew that Than could not be trusted. For example, even if Harry had accepted Than's offer, he likely would have been corrupted by her, and though Than promised not to personally take lives or cause the death of humans, Harry under her control would not be limited by that promise, and if he gave himself to her, killing everyone for Than would be perfectly reasonable for Harry. That however was only obvious in hindsight, thinking of it at the time would be close to impossible. The Ancient One said, "Although it is not entirely your fault, you must still be punished for dropping your vigilance. Recently, there have been a few requests from some of the younger acolytes, and I want you to take care of it." "What kind of requests?" The Ancient One shook her head with a sigh. "They are requesting we install Wi-Fi in Camartage and the Sanctums." Author's note. "I came up with the idea of sending the Darkhold into the future on the spot, and that scene practically wrote itself. This will likely be the last of the paths Harry will be getting. I wanted an eventual up Harry, but I wanted him to get up slowly through mostly legit means, which was the entire purpose of Arc 2. I honestly dislike all the Camartage fics in which someone comes out of Camartage with just a sling ring and the time stone, since that place has so much more. To those interested, other paths include the Trainer path, which is the physical version of the Scholar path. Then there is the Spy path for infiltration, espionage, covert operations, information gathering, and assassination skill. There would also be a Beast Tamer path, a Commander path, a Healer path, a Law path, and pretty much a path for every dedicated area people can focus their lives into. Arc 3 will be where he actually interacts with people his own age and starts to have an actual life. Chapter 28. Chapter 28 wrapping up in Camartage. Since Harry was assigned the task of Wi-Fi installation, he decided to do it with vigor. He did own several companies after all and knew a thing or two about electronics. Harry paid for the construction needed to have a dedicated fiber optics line installed from the nearest hub in Tibet directly to Camartage. For interior aesthetics to not be compromised, he kept the lines out of sight by using transmutation spells to create openings in the walls to run Ethernet and coaxial lines. And last, he set up a server room with the most advanced computers available, personally built and engraved by him to protect against magic, wear, tear, and even technopathic hacking. The latter he had been looking into, as it was considered a form of sorcery that used electromagnetic energy rather than nature or dimensional energy. Maybe he was going overboard, but he wanted to do it right. The server room would host a website that included a large amount of basic arcane knowledge that Harry spent a month personally writing into the various web pages of the site. It wasn't knowledge on how to cast spells, of course, but it did include very broad safety and awareness tips on magic and sorcery in general, and also included direct definitions of wizard, witch, sorcerer, chi-wizard, warlock, etc. Technically this was a breach of the International Statute of Secrecy, but the website itself gave the feel of a cult and never mentioned that such people were alive and still active. For example, it stated that wizards in general preferred to live with other wizards and strange things would happen when they were upset. The website clearly stated that wizards haven't been seen for centuries, though it did hint that may have just been because they didn't want to be seen, and if you did see one, to ignore them unless you wanted to experience life as a frog, as they disliked being bothered. To make the site feel less real and more commercial, Harry included advertising links to specific companies he set up which sold wizard and witch paraphernalia such as replicas of wizard robes and different types of fake wands. He did so with several other companies, both ones he owned and third-party ones. None of them actually sold real magical items though, only things which looked magical. The largest section of the website included classifications on demons, demon sorcerers, magical creatures, and magic in general, and gave simple ways to protect yourself if encountered any of them. Some of this knowledge came from Camartage's library, which included Egypt's Golden Book of Life, while other pieces of knowledge were taken directly from the Grand Grimoire, the Book of Vishanti, and even the Dark Hold. Whenever Harry needed information and such information happened to be inside the Dark Hold, he would become aware of it. This however only worked if he didn't think to look specifically in the Dark Hold for it, so it could only be accessed indirectly when a related subject came up. The Dark Hold did in fact include a few means one could use to protect oneself from the darker side of magic, but those were actually used as parts of larger, darker rituals and spells which Harry couldn't consciously recall. Specific shapes and symbols could make demons uncomfortable even without active magic, so Harry had a few jewelry and cheap trinket making companies make some things and placed ads for them on the website. Harry wasn't sure if it would work, but he also placed a powerful variant of the Notice Me Not charm on the servers which held the information. It was almost permanent and had no effect against people looking for specific knowledge within the site. What it should accomplish, however, was the prevention of people not looking for it from finding it. Anyone not looking for information contained within the site wasn't likely to notice its existence. Ping. Scholar Path has risen to rank 42. The moment Harry finished and launched the website, he got his first Scholar Path rank up this year. It hadn't increased since Harry learned a different dimensions version of block transfer computation, and even trying to make his own hadn't gotten another rank out of it. Harry knew the higher the path increased, the harder it would be to increase further, but this was getting ridiculous. It seemed that his website counted as a lesson taught to the whole of the world, which was why he finally was able to increase it a rank. That made Harry wonder about his other paths, so he brought up his stats. Harry Potter. Level 190, age 14. STR 275, AGI 310. Int 415, WIS 400. Luck 20. Warrior Path rank 26. Scholar Path rank 42. Magic Path rank 38. Tech Path rank 28. Business Path rank 16. Crafting Path rank 17. Dragon Path rank 5. Chinook Path rank 17. Looking at the new Chinook Path, Harry really did wonder how much time he must have spent paused, working on his own mind for it to jump 7 ranks. When he looked back into his mind, he found there was literally nothing more he could do with it, so he probably went all the way to the limit of internal Chinooks. The funny thing was that Harry didn't actually block people from entering his mind. He simply did a ridiculous amount of complex things to make it very dangerous and unproductive to do so. Chinooks as a path was different from magic. Magic was basically the manipulation of energies either found or created. Chinooks was the power of the mind and was rounded off into 3 skill sets: telepathy, telekinesis, and astral creation, which were basically mind over matter, and mind over existence respectively. Harry's battle meditation allowed him to take an astral form without a talent in Chinooks, but that was likely a part of the power gifted by the Phoenix Force. Astral creation itself was the field of using the mind to create mental or physical effects within astral or physical space. There was some overlap, of course, as many abilities could be generated by either magic or Chinooks. Pyrokinesis, for example, could either be considered a Chinook power or a magic power depending on the source of the fire. If someone generated the fire, it would likely be a magic-based power, but that person would not be able to generate infinite amounts or control fire not created through their magic. Their fire, however, would be very difficult to extinguish as it was a part of them. If they could not generate it but could control it, then it would be classified as a Chinook power, and the user would likely be able to control far higher volumes of fire, as they wouldn't need to waste energy creating it, as fire was something that could create itself if controlled right. However, the fire would have the properties of normal fire and could be put out in the same manner. After a bit of practicing, it didn't take much effort for Harry to figure out how to read minds, since he had practice with occlumency and legilimency, so it was just different tricks to achieve the same goal. Telekinesis was also pretty simple, though he could only move things in general directions. Just like magic, Chinooks was a skill set that was powered by int and WIS, so this path came very easily to Harry thanks to the Phoenix Force opening the door for him. His new perk, the Phoenix Flames he acquired, had 2 effects. First, it acted as a multiplier for the speed he could rank up his Chinook path. Second, it allowed him to use the Phoenix Flames skill, which was an application of telekinesis, telepathy, and astral creation at the same time. It could burn matter, mind, and the soul, but the energy it left behind would return to the earth and express itself as new life. This also meant Harry couldn't absorb the energy of anything he killed with it for experience and levels, though his use of it was very weak at the moment and far weaker than his magic due to the different in-path levels. As for his magic, he had been making some progress in creating new spells for his strength and dimensional energy, which had fully fused into his exotic energy. The Heart Palace technique basically accumulated a small portion of energy within the body and tuned it to the life and soul of the user, making it a part of them. The user could then use that tuned energy to channel and control external sources of the same energy by first channeling it through their body. It was still the same dimensional energy he was absorbing, but the part of him that directed it was now saturated with exotic energy. Not only that, any dimensional energy he used his body to channel would combine with the exotic energy he naturally created due to the effect of the already fused dimension energy directing it through his body. The only way he could return to using dimensional energy on its own again would be to purge his body and heart palace of the dimensional energy. However, he only got it into his heart palace by imaging it as a part of him. If he rejected it, he would never be able to think of it as a part of him again, so he would lose everything and be unable to ever regain it. There wasn't a single merit in doing so, of course. Strength energy fused with exotic energy wasn't difficult to find some applications for. It was easy to use to directly strengthen the body, but using a few new spells he hashed out could now allow him to create a magic shield using strength energy even stronger than dimensional energy shields. Exotic energy magic shields were only designed to block magic and were actually very good at it, but were nearly useless against guns. Dimensional energy shields were like hardened glass planes and could stop a few rounds of bullets in addition to magic, but nothing that high-powered. His new shield though was far stronger than any previous shield he could use. His next step was to see if he could charge an item with this shield and give it to others. Harry could still use constructs of dimensional energy and use dimensional energy to strengthen and move his body, but doing so used far more energy than it used to. However, he had figured out a way to charge his constructs with spells. For example, he could create a bow staff or whip that inflicted the stunner spell on contact, or a sword that used the severing charm every time he swung it. He still hadn't figured out a way to create portals with his exotic energy saturated dimensional energy, but he'd live without it for now since he could create and use port keys and apparate long distances and even fly in his animagus form. His anti-magic suffered the hardest though. He had a dozen anti-magic spells he had gotten quite good at, but now he was reduced to the one, and lucky to even have that. Anti-magic was a very difficult type of energy to rein in and control after all. One thing he was truly thankful for was that although his sorcerer magics contained exotic energy, it didn't radiate out from the spell itself like his wizard magic did. This meant he wouldn't have to hold himself back from using it in tech-filled areas. What was even better was that unlike his wizard magic, which couldn't be used while he was suppressing it to prevent all tech around him from crashing, his fused magics could be used while suppressing his exotic energy emissions. Not long after Harry finished installing Wi-Fi and setting up the website he dubbed mysticknowledge.com, the Ancient One called him in for a meeting. She made the tea this time, and once he sat down, the Ancient One said, "I intended to bring this up with you regardless, but as Ms. Rasputin has recommended it, we can discuss it now. I'm sure you are aware of this, but you have reached the rank of master long ago. Usually at this point those who remain in Camartage start teaching others and start fighting in the front lines in the fight to defend the Earth. Now however your dimensional energy can no longer be felt by others who have mastered it, which will draw suspicion if you continue to stay. In either case, the time for you to move on has come, and Ms. Rasputin's suggestion was something I already considered. In New York there is a school called Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. It is high school level boarding school, and much like your previous one, it is not what it appears to be. It is in fact a place where young mutants can go to learn and train with their abilities. Enrolling you in the fall semester 3 months from now would give you time to adjust your new magics and prepare yourself. I understand you wish to continue your education as well." Harry answered, "Yeah, the goblins told me the cover I paid them to make won't hold up under intense scrutiny. I can get into a normal college well enough, but a major one won't accept me." The Ancient One nodded. "The Xavier Institute houses some of the finest minds on the planet. You will likely gain more there than you would at any other institute of higher education." Harry asked, "But what am I going to say about my mutant ability? You I trust. I can't however just inform others who have not earned my trust about my abilities, and many of them tend to stand out." "Yes, and I agree with you. It will do no good for the true nature of your mutation to get out, as it would draw too much attention. The aspect of your gift that shields you from distant eyes and the eyes of those looking into the future will not stop others from looking at you should you stand out in the present. I believe we should choose a single aspect of your abilities and allow others to take that as your mutant ability." Which one? Harry was essentially immortal, strong, fast, could use magic, mind arts, and immortal dragon chi. There was also his inventory, his crafting, and his overall intellect, as well as his vast repository of knowledge and his inhuman learning speed. "I can think of 3 options." She started listing. "You can walk the path of physical prowess and claim a dragon-like body as your mutant ability. You can use this as an opportunity to train your dragon chi while pretending that your healing ability and increased stats are all a part of your mutation. This would be the easiest to display and safest overall. No matter how strong, people tend to overlook the physical types, so although you'd be standing out, it would not be as dangerous as standing out for your other abilities." Harry nodded and thought it was definitely worth considering. His immortal dragon chi and his dragon path were both things he had not been devoting enough time to practice, even though their potential was in fact just as high as magic itself. Next, you can claim minor energy manipulation with a specialization in setting energy into objects. In other words, an enchanter-type power. This would be the most difficult as you would have to hide all your other abilities, but it would also allow you to continue your research and practice into relic creation. Harry did want to continue his crafting, and although he could continue solo, what he really wanted was a genius or two to bounce ideas off. There were likely a lot of things he was overlooking just because he was looking at too large a picture, and a new perspective could do wonders. And finally, you can claim your inventory and the abilities that come with it as your mutation. This would allow you to continue accumulating knowledge and give you the most versatility overall. Harry said, "Isn't my inventory the most dangerous ability to show off?" Other things were basically power ups, but an infinite, timeless inventory he could perfectly analyze anything contained within was a game changer at another level. If someone had some super secret data on a password encrypted hard drive, Harry could place it in his inventory and directly read the very code off the drive, encrypted or not. If the encryption wasn't strong enough, he could learn the contents through guesswork. That however was not the scary part. Most computers had means to determine if someone has tried to access them. Those means wouldn't work against Harry's inventory. And that was just the advanced application. Undetectable smuggling of any size, the ability to steal anything from anywhere and get away with it, preservation and transportation of unstable limited shelf life products, and 100 other things. The Ancient One said, only if its full abilities were displayed. For example, you can tell others you can only store things for a limited time or that you can only store up to a limited weight. You could claim to only be capable of storing pure and simple items or claim that the more complex something is, the less time it can be stored. Harry realized the Ancient One had likely spent a long time thinking this over. He said, give me some time to think about it. Harry headed over to a station of set-up computers for Camartage and searched for info on Xavier's institute. The search itself brought up far more on the man himself than his institute and his past work. First and foremost, he was a doctor. And unlike a certain honorary doctor, Xavier had in fact written and published 4 dissertations that were reviewed and accepted by his peers, with one of them being Human Genetics and Mutation. Harry had to hold back a laugh at that because this man was almost as subtle as Harry himself, who just wrote a website on Magic 101 and signed his name at the bottom. Thankfully there were more Harry Potters in the world than there were Charles Xaviers, so he could hide in plain sight as long he didn't openly admit to anything. After doing his initial search, he started a deeper one. Although Harry hadn't figured out technopathy yet, he was still a hacker using an advanced computer he built using magic, so there wasn't much he couldn't get if needed. The problem wasn't accessing it. The problem was making sure the places he accessed it from didn't track it back to him. That problem, however, was solved with a box that worked off quantum entanglement he called the remote hack box. He replicated the effect of quantum entanglement using magic, and any information in one box would show in the other regardless of distance and in real time. This meant he could place the box in a New York library and plug it into the phone line. When he was done hacking, a portkey within the box would trigger to teleport it to a set location where he could retrieve it later. Harry still wasn't able to get much without drawing too much attention that someone was even looking, but he was able to get some info about the X-Men. From what Harry could tell, they were similar to Aurors for the wizarding world. They were led by Xavier and dispatched during conflicts to mediate or deal with issues caused by mutants as quietly as possible in order to prevent the public opinion on mutants from taking a nosedive and to help others in general. According to some records in Camartage, mutants have been around for thousands of years, if not longer. What was interesting was that there were periods where mutant births peaked and periods where almost no mutants were born at all. However, those times when mutants peaked always seemed to be followed by danger for the world itself. There was one record he found that showed a large period of mutant birth during the time of ancient Egypt, and the records also showed some alien bug-like swarm attempted an invasion during that period, which was defeated by the power of the mutants during those times. Had those mutants not been born, Harry couldn't see any reasonable way for the people of the time to hold back an alien invasion, much less actually defeat it. Harry wondered if he should make another website, but decided against it for now. Unlike magic, mutants were an issue with a high level of exposure, and he wasn't ready to show his name off to the world just yet. The magic website was to provide a base layer that could be built on by the world over time. People fear what they don't understand, but if they think they know about it, or at least know they have access to information about it, they are less likely to do stupid things regarding it. Since Harry knew about technology, he knew that the wizarding world would not stay hidden forever. The website was the first step in a long-term assimilation plan. One day in the future the concept of magic will become commonplace, and at that time, when the world discovers the hidden wizarding world, Harry doubted it would even make front-page news. When he went back to the files on the X-Men, what stood out most was the so-called code names. Storm, Wolverine, Beast, Colossus, Angel. Everyone had a code name, even Xavier was called Professor X. None of the files had descriptions, and even though Charles's file was the largest, they weren't even sure he was a confirmed mutant. While considering the code names, Harry thought back to the options the Ancient One gave him. If he went the first path, he'd likely be called Dragon or something. The second path would probably make people call him Enchanter, which of course shot the idea down completely. As for the last option, what would they call him? Backpack? Storage? Inventory? Not exactly the best power to be named after. Of course Harry had more than just those options. The Ancient One was brilliant, but her imagination was not as colorful as Harry's. The main problem with his inventory wasn't the ability to place things in, but the ability to take them out. If lying was an option, he could just tell people he can't take out or place certain things into his inventory. Maybe something like he could only place things that were natural or something. In that sense, he could combine the Ancient One's ideas if he claimed adding certain things to his inventory granted him certain capabilities. Maybe something like this: Harry Potter, mutant power, assimilation. Can absorb and temporarily gain the attributes of things he has absorbed to increase his strength and durability, and maybe other things. He could claim different abilities depending on the different things he absorbed. In that case, for all the things he could do, he'd probably be called Swiss Army Man. For some reason, that term made him shudder, as if he was recalling a particularly traumatic memory he wanted to forget. Okay, no Swiss Army Man. With this description, he could even claim if he absorbed certain things, he could heal, which would explain his healing if injured. And as long as people thought his powers were limited by what he absorbed, and could only be used if he absorbed something, he could catch them off guard if they tried to take advantage of his weakness. Harry returned to the Ancient One and told her his idea. She approved of the premise and added in her own thoughts. They decided that Harry's limit was that he could only absorb food, books, and pure metals. Absorbed food would grant Harry the ability to heal, and absorbed pure metals would increase his strength, durability, and speed. Books he absorbed would have their knowledge accessible for a few days and forgotten if not gone over repeated. They decided, for now at least, to completely hold back on revealing his magic, sonics, or anything else. Harry spent the next few months preparing for the next part of his life. He sent a letter to Hermione that he was going to finish high school in New York, and she sent back that he should get a cell phone and give her his number. She already had one and used what she learned from Harry to make it work around magic so she could keep in contact with her family while in school. Harry didn't have a cell phone because, 1. He didn't need it as no one he kept in contact with until now had one. 2. He could teleport, so if he wanted to speak with someone he could just do it face to face. And 3. Apparition would still fry a cell phone since the magic resistance only renders it safe from ambient magic. Hermione didn't know that, as she wouldn't be learning apparition for a few more years. He thought of just getting one when he arrived, but that meant calling or receiving calls from Hermione would be an international charge, so figured he'd just place a remote hack box at his London house, plug a phone line into it, and plug a phone wherever he was at into a paired one and use that. If he set up a phone number there, she'd be able to call it and it would redirect it to where he set up the other one. Was using high-end physics and advanced quantum magic to get around long-distance charges excessive? Nah. Harry also informed the goblins he was moving overseas and asked them to expand their joint business interests in the New York area. The main Gringotts branch in the United States was in Boston, but there was a sub-branch in New York they could use a few means to take over and spread out from. Most businesses were basically using money to make more money, and the fact that Harry had metric tons of gold for capital and was willing to invest slowly meant his coffers were usually increasing rather than decreasing. The goblins asked if his move to New York would be permanent, and Harry decided it might as well be. He would likely be making more friends in New York than he had in Britain, and since there was a New York sanctum sanctorum Harry could use if needed, it was about as good a place to settle down as he was going to find. Besides, snowy owls were not uncommon that far north, so he could fly around almost whenever he wanted. They used their contacts to arrange for his Muggle identity to get US citizenship and set all the papers and files in motion. Harry had visited Gringotts 2 or 3 times a year for the last 3 years to update their computers and make sure they knew how to use the latest systems. Thanks to that, the goblins of Gringotts were already some of the wealthiest goblins in the world, and they made no effort to hide that fact from other goblins. It wouldn't be much longer until P&G, Bank, and Trust made its move to enter the larger world of business, but for now, they were still waiting. A foundation was not something that could be rushed. Rather than devote all their funds to a single field, they had been testing the waters and getting familiar with the various markets and how well they could be done using goblin and wizard magic. The only pain in the butt was that since he was using his actual identity to run the company, he had to do the taxes in his name so people could indirectly find him if they put a lot of effort into it, though the best he'd let them do was find an untraceable phone number and P.O. box for his mail. And since he was doing it the legal way, Britain would be heavily taxing the funds he transferred across the Atlantic, and the US would then tax him every year for all the funds he possessed. However, these were required if he wanted to set himself up legitimately in the future, so he gritted his teeth and crossed his T's and dotted his I's while signing all the paperwork the goblins sent him with a portkey box he set up. On the magic side of things, during the final months, Harry decided to fully merge his other forms of magic directly into his exotic energy. Doing so would make them harder to use, but would render them invisible. Although those who could sense energy were very few and far between, he still didn't want to head into the larger world with a giant, traceable energy signature. In addition to that, Harry didn't bother sleeping outside of the need to recharge for several months and was able to use his training during that time to add the energies of Ichthalin's and Balthak's realm to his heart palace and fuse them with exotic energy as well. Ichthalin's realm contained endless ice and cold energy, and Balthak's contained heat and light energy. The only energies he lacked compared to the spell repertoire of a standard master was Morpheus' dream energy, Fulton's mystic flames, and Faralea's hunter energy. Of course, the other masters had to call out the names of the lords of those realms to use all those types of energy for magic. Harry didn't. The mystic flames of the Fulton was actually one of the strongest spells a sorcerer could cast, but it was nearly impossible to use the energy without invoking the name of the faultiness. That was because they were godlike existences of pure energy who were synchronized to the energy their realm contained and didn't like thieves. Harry didn't want to use any invocation magic, and since his phoenix flames were just above the Fulton's flames, he decided to skip them. He also realized at some point he'd likely never be able to get any dream energy from Morpheus' realm, since he didn't like people visiting unless they were asleep, and Harry didn't dream, so he couldn't use battle meditation on his energy to gather enough to set and tune through his heart palace. Faralea's energy was unique in that it was used to cast hunting, tracking, and trapping spells, but the energy level was very high, in the level 240 plus range, and Harry wasn't going to try and use it for battle mediation anytime soon. And lastly, Harry had also been advancing his wizard magic. It seemed parts of his subconscious that had gone over the dark hold, and the nature of chaos energy had decided he should put more of himself into his magic. One of the main differences between the chaos energy Harry sensed from Thin and his own was uniformity. Chaos energy was, unsurprisingly, chaotic and non-uniform. Wizard energy however had properties that matched the wizard who cast it, so the more of himself he put into his magic, the more controllable it would become. One reason Harry could never cast the Unforgivables was because it required something he just didn't have. In order to cast the killing curse, one had to truly hate something and want it dead. Harry couldn't even hate Voldemort or the monsters he'd learned about in the world of business enough to want them dead. In order to cast the Imperious Curse or the Cruciatus Curse, one had to truly want someone to suffer or truly want to control someone. Harry certainly enjoyed pranking, but his pranks were more geared towards allowing others who deserved it to make themselves suffer. And Harry didn't mind directing people as a teacher, but that was only after giving options. Directly controlling or only allowing someone to travel a path he decided for them was something he could never do. Harry likely couldn't build enough emotion to cast those if he tried. The negative emotion suppression of his ability would hamper it. And even when that suppression wasn't there, like when he faced Thin, he still didn't think he could feel them. Anger was easy. Anger is natural. Hatred, however, was not something he could do. Harry didn't even hate Thin or Voldemort. Harry didn't agree with them, but they had their reasons for what they did, even if the reasons of the latter were stupid and the reasons of the former selfish. Rather than make his magic more chaotic, he was making it more controllable using hints his subconscious figured out from reading the Darkhold. He was hoping this would eventually allow him to lessen the destructive nature of his exotic energy against things like electronics and computers. Before leaving, Harry said goodbye to the masters who trained him and told them he was going to complete his schooling in New York and they could call if they needed anything. None of them knew Harry's strength matched their own when they were using invocation magic, so they didn't feel anything was wrong with a child finishing his education. They did little more than wish him well, as most were men of few words save Wong, who told him to continue his studies, and Mordo, who told him to return when he was 18 so they could make sure he hadn't gotten rusty. The Ancient One was given a cell phone with Harry's number, so there wasn't a need to say goodbye, and after packing up and returning his monk's robes he headed for the London Sanctum. He had already arranged with the Ancient One for a new wizard section of the library to be added in 2 months, so they would not connect it to him and they would be provided the means and coins needed to enter and use the resources of the wizard world as they wished. He also hoped one of the younger acolytes he showed the website to would take up the duties of monitoring the forum so they could use it to find evidence of threats to the realm sooner than before. Next he visited Mr. and Ms. Black and their daughter, his goddaughter, Virgo Amelia Black. Being named after a constellation and a goddess of justice was appropriate considering her parents, and also taking her parents and godfather into consideration there was a distinct possibility she may in fact die a virgin, the other meaning of her name. The lord of the noble and most ancient house of Black and the former head of the DMLE staring down any would-be boyfriends would see to that. Harry had long since met Remus Lupin, but as he was already an independent, pseudo-adult, there wasn't much room for him in his life, so they were simply acquaintances. When thinking about Remus, a piece of knowledge from the Darkhold appeared in his mind. His parents had of course told him about their friend's furry little problem, and it turns out the Darkhold was responsible for the creation of both werewolves and vampires. However, the means to permanently cure them that was contained within the Darkhold was a trap. It seemed Harry's subconscious had cross-referenced the details of the purification ritual from the Darkhold with cleansing rituals from the Book of Vishanti and found that the former rituals were completely lacking in safety and warning messages. There were too many ways it could go wrong, and Harry doubted there was a way to perfectly use the ritual. Perhaps it would be useful for reference when finding an actual cure, but the Darkhold was not going to directly help solve a problem it caused. That was like studying a match to figure out how to stop a raging forest fire. A majority of the nice things inside the Darkhold were either traps or temptations to draw the reader deeper into the Darkhold to corrupt them to doing something terrible later. Harry visited a few locations in London with an ID card to personally turn in some papers and sign some forms for his immigration to the US. He'd buy a ticket to the US when finished, so there was a physical trail people could follow if they decided to look. That proved Harry Potter went to New York by airplane. Harry now knew a thing or two about tracking people, so he wanted to make sure those looking at him didn't see anything that far out of the ordinary. The following day, Harry took a plane to New York. The plane wouldn't be comfortable for Goose, so he'd use magic to get his flirkin later after suffering the 10-hour flight by himself. Harry wondered how much trouble he could get himself in living in New York. For some reason this thought brought a smile to his face. Chapter 29. Chapter 29 Meet the Mutants. New York was a place Harry liked to visit through the Sanctum Sanctorum branch here, so Harry knew a thing or two about the area before leaving the airport. Camartage also had some masters who left the Sanctum living there who occasionally shared their homes with guests. Harry asked first and got permission from one of them to use his address as a temporary place of residence. On paper anyways. The immigration's office wouldn't just let someone come over without evidence they had a place to stay. There were other things Harry could have done of course, but that would have brought attention to his vast wealth, so he now had a place of residence he would only visit to give a thank you gift later. Now Harry just had to figure out how to apply for a place that only sends invites. According to the Ancient One, Charles Xavier was a telepath and had a machine which amplified the range of his clairvoyance. Clairvoyance itself was a psionic skill that fell under both telepathy and astral creation, but it was also something that didn't work on Harry along with precognition. Harry was rendered invisible to any paranatural means that allowed farsight or future viewing. This of course meant Xavier had no idea he existed, even though Harry was in fact a very powerful mutant. The Ancient One stated that Xavier's machine allowed him to use the astral plane to visit nearly any location on Earth, though he would only be able to sense the minds at those locations, not the content of the location unless he borrowed the senses of those he visited. She never approached him but did observe his passing a few times through the astral plane, though he did not notice her. That is how she learned of him in the first place. There were 3 approaches he could think of for first contact. 1. He could catch a cab to the school and knock on the front door. 2. He could call ahead and ask for an appointment or meeting. 3. He could make a scene and have them come to him. Maybe he could do all 3. Walk up to the institute, yell profanities, and when they came out he could overcharge his flesh with energy and violently explode in front of everyone. Nah, pranks like that couldn't be pulled on the first day. First week on the other hand, Harry had already decided to tell others his mutant power allowed him to temporarily increase his stats when he absorbed metals, heal when he absorbed food, and allowed him to memorize the contents of books for a few days when he absorbed a book. Although it would limit him, it was the safest option for the long term, and he decided that under no circumstance should he show off his magic. Ping. New quest, get drafted with style. Go to the marked location and display abilities. Will become visible to nearby clairvoyant, Charles Xavier. Display use of magic and shenanigans to X-Men who arrive to meet you. Get recruited into the X-Men. Harry sighed and thought to himself, so much for that plan. After getting the quest pop up, Harry went over to a nearby hotel lobby and asked permission to use the phone to make a local call, which they allowed. He went over the phone and removed the hack box from his backpack and plugged the lobby phone's cord into it and made a call. Hello Harry, I wasn't expecting a call so soon. The Ancient One seemed more than a little amused. Yeah, laugh it up. I got a quest to show off my magic and shenanigans and wanted your opinion. I see. We've discussed this before, but in all likelihood, your quests are generated by the power of the Living Tribunal. There has yet to be a quest with negative consequences for completing it. Yeah, only negative consequences for failing it. You think there might be a reason I need to show off my skills in the future? From previous experience, that does seem more likely than less likely. However, did the quest say to show off your magic and shenanigans, or your full range of abilities? It said, display use of magic and shenanigans to X-Men who arrive to meet you. So the former. Interesting. If I had to guess, a choice Charles Xavier will make in the future will be different depending on his knowledge, or lack of knowledge of the existence of magic or your shenanigan talents. Possibly both. If it is the power of the Living Tribunal that suggests informing him now, I would recommend doing so. Therefore, it would be prudent to ensure he knows at least most of what you are capable of. However, I do have a suggestion for how to keep with the original plan while displaying magic and shenanigans. Please impart your wisdom to this lesser being, O great Ancient One. For that alone I should hang up on you and allow you the chance to grow by solving your own problems. That is cruel and unusual, and you know it as well as I. Indeed. Very well. Several of the companies you own that make jewelry use synthetic gemstones, correct? Yeah. Turns out the magic properties of some gems are even better when synthetic because they can be made 100% pure. Use them with the right symbols and talismans in jewelry and they can work as weak protection amulets even without a magic user charging them. Excellent. Here is the plan. Harry had to cast a few discreet low-power wizard spells during the call to prevent people from telling him to get lost after the call reached a half-hour in length. Nothing nearby seemed affected, though the phone may need to be replaced later. Thankfully it didn't seem like anyone really needed it, as the lobby had a second phone line across the hall. The Ancient One's plan was basically to get some large gemstones and have Harry claim the ability to use certain energies when certain gemstones were absorbed. Like the ability to use strength energy spells after absorbing a ruby, use dimensional energy spells after absorbing a diamond, etc. He would also display his ability to sense energy. This however meant he would have to walk around with giant rubies and diamonds, which was kinda tacky. He'd had to make them big too so people didn't think it could use magic with tiny ones, about the size of an egg would do. First he would need to reorganize a few things to make sure he had a visible means of acquiring such gems, which meant he had to contact the goblins. However, one considered a few things. He decided this might be an opportunity. At the moment, there wasn't any big company that made large amounts of synthetic gems of large size because there wasn't a need or market for one. However, gemstones had far more uses than just jewelry. There were hundreds of uses for various gemstones in engineering, and they only used synthetic stones. Harry, however, knew thousands of applications for gemstones. He had analyzed the Mandarin's alien tech and the Doctor's future tech. He knew that there was more to electronics and technology than copper, iron, and silicon. Almost all technology relied on properties of electromagnetic energy, whether it be electricity, radio waves, or even colored light. However, Harry knew about other forms of energy and knew the means to harness them. He knew properties of gemstones and certain materials that no one else on Earth knew about. Harry decided his first move into the direction of tech he was considering was to create a large company that mass-produced synthetic gemstones of various shapes and sizes. Most of these would have commercial engineering applications and sold at the proper price, but the point was to find and get settled into a niche. Harry knew both mundane and magical ways to create gemstones, and so did the goblins. After getting out a stack of papers and his portfolio box from his inventory, Harry wrote down his intentions and plans for the future. Once the company had visible mundane means to create large amounts of synthetic gemstones, Harry would introduce the goblins to the concept of the sonic screwdriver. Harry certainly couldn't build one at the moment, but he could create a massive machine that could do a few things a sonic screwdriver could do, like alter the properties of some materials without magic. Harry knew that some technologies required materials with properties that simply didn't exist yet. However, if he used an imitation sonic screwdriver, even if it could only affect gemstones, Harry could alter the properties of some gemstones to get materials which had the properties needed to create highly advanced technology. And that was just the long-term benefit. By saturating the market with synthetic gemstones, those who measure their wealth in gemstones will find themselves poorer while those who don't measure their wealth in gemstones will be richer by comparison. Thus was business. Ping. Business path has risen to rank 17. Harry smiled at the pop-up. That was a good sign. In order to prepare his dastardly plan for the X-Men, Harry used magic to create 3 chicken egg-sized gemstones of 4 different types and put each in a pouch Harry strapped to his belt. He used a Notice Me Not spell on the pouches so a pickpocket with a knife wouldn't pay enough attention to them to swipe for now. He wouldn't use it later though since that was a great weakness to have. The point of this charade was to demonstrate his magic and other abilities in a way that would allow people to believe Harry could be beaten in the right circumstances. In this case, deprive Harry of his gemstones. People were less likely to try to kill a person if they thought they could beat or control that person, but someone could only be beaten or controlled if they had a weakness to exploit. Harry wondered when the men in black suits would visit him and deprive him of his source of power and threaten him. He figured he should start writing a list of pranks now to use on the unfortunate souls who tried it first. Once finished, Harry caught a cab to North Salem, which was where Xavier's Institute was located. However, the map pointer was pointing to another area of North Salem, not the Institute. When the cabbie realized the area they were heading, he declined going further and asked if he could drive around. It seemed that strange things went on in that neighborhood. Harry said it was all right and got out and paid the man with a nice tip. The street he walked through was somewhat checkered. Several locations on the street seemed to be freshly made while other locations were old. Several of the various houses or store fronts had windows with cracks while others' windows looked brand new. There were few if any buildings that didn't seem half old and half new. In other words, this street saw a lot of damage at one time or another. What stood out the most though was the lack of people walking around. It didn't take long for Harry to reach the map marker, so he just started wandering around. Hey, haven't seen your face around here before. A young man looking about a year older than Harry shouted from an alleyway while approaching Harry. He looked tall for his age with a shoulder-length unkempt mess of brown hair. Harry said, "Well, I'm new in the area. Just arrived actually. The name's Harry. British? Never met a Brit before," he remarked. Harry could have dropped his accent but decided not to. It was a part of him and anyone who didn't like him for it could bugger off. The teen said, "Well, I'm Lance. And this is John," he said, motioning to another teen with blonde hair that stood straight up. The newcomer approached Harry opposite Lance's approach and were effectively surrounding him. Harry appeared oblivious to them. "Nice to meet you, Lance and John. Know anything fun to do around here?" The blonde chuckled. "Yeah, there's an arcade a few blocks down." "Ah, that's right. I used up all my quarters doing laundry for the homeless." "You got any cash on you?" Harry said. "Perhaps, perhaps not. If I told you I only had British pounds in my wallet, would you believe me?" Lance grinned and said, "You don't seem to understand the situation here, you scrawny little Brit. We're members of the Brotherhood and we own this town. Unless you give us everything you got on you, you ain't returning to jolly ol' England." Harry cracked his knuckles. And who said Americans didn't know how to have fun? Come on them. The pair glanced at each other for a full second before they broke down laughing. John pulled out a lighter and said, "I think we should have a reenactment of the Great London Fire. What do you think?" Harry was getting tired of these guys, so he threw himself forward and smashed his fist into Lance's still laughing face. The force of the blow threw Lance's whole body back, which spun 3 times before crashing into the side a garbage can on the other end of the street. John nearly dropped his lighter in shock. Harry didn't bother using the opening and said, "All talk after all. So much for the colonies." John was successfully enraged from the insult and flicked the lighter to cause a spark. Harry felt a rush of Schnick energy fill the flame, which mixed into the air and grew large and larger. Harry sighed and thought to himself, of course he's a pyrokinetic. Harry ducked under the oncoming flame rushing at him and made it to the street. The blonde shouted, "You're gonna burn for that." He agitated the flames to make them larger and Harry just stood there. Harry reached into 2 of his pouches, one had smoky quartz and one had zircon. He said, "You got a nice trick there. Let me show you a few of my own." Harry cast a Lumos spell within the egg-sized orb of smoky quartz which shined brightly in his hand, and then he took it back into his inventory, making it vanish. He said, "Hit me with your best shot." John didn't need any more encouragement and threw a large ball of flames at Harry just as Harry cast a flame-freezing charm using a massive amount of power. Several of the lamp posts exploded as Harry wasn't suppressing his exotic energy and was actively casting very powerful wizard magic. However, the building behind him seemed to be abandoned, so there wasn't anyone inside or any electronics close enough to get fried besides those lamp posts. The fire heavily impacted Harry like a massive ocean wave crashing down on him, but he withstood it using a proper stance, and when the fire scattered, nothing had burned. One downside of Schnick's based pyrokinesis was that the fire they controlled was just fire. Unlike magic fire used by magic-based pyrokinetics, Chinook-based fire control had no means to prevent itself from being extinguished by normal fire extinguishing means, and it had no resistance to magic. So each had their ups and downs. John looked at Harry in absolute shock. He was also surprised that not only had his fireball not burned anything, it had actually gone out. The reason it went out was that the flame freezing charm prevented it from burning anything, even air, so it went out without anything else to burn. That trick doesn't work when it is burning wood, but air is different. Harry then lifted his other hand, which contained the lump-sized zircon, and cast another Lumos charm inside it. Are you ready for my next trick? The shining zircon vanished into Harry's inventory, and golden chains erupted from the ground and bound themselves around the pyrokinetic and dragged him to the ground. The shaggy brunette from before was still out cold, which wasn't surprising for one of Harry's punches. Harry took a look at them both and had a nasty idea. He reached into his pocket where he actually drew from his inventory a Sharpie. He then walked over to John, who was shouting profanities at him, and said, "You know, if you want to act like the villain, you really should look the part." Harry then bent down and drew a villain mustache on the bound teen, which caused another string of profanities, half of which Harry didn't even recognize, to run out of his mouth. Harry thought it was odd the man had a vaguely Australian accent when swearing. Harry walked over to Lance and drew a matching mustache on him as well, and said to the one who was still conscious, "You need to cool down a little or you'll burn yourself out. Have a nice day." The quest display showed a check mark on the first item. Xavier probably saw him and would be sending his X-Men to scout Harry in a bit. The map marker showed another area Harry ran off to, as he wanted to set up a few things for this confrontation. The location the map marker led him to was at the edge of an empty, trash-filled park and an abandoned construction site where some materials had been left around. Something about it seemed stereotypical, but it was as good a place as any for a meeting. A few minutes after he started waiting, Harry felt a tug and warming sensation from a certain direction. It was the phoenix flames gifted to him, trying to lead him somewhere. Though that seemed pointless, as where it seemed to want him was moving closer. Harry was more than a little surprised that the one the phoenix told him about was not only here, but on her way. He wondered if that was why the quest not only wanted him to show his magic but Chinook's. The 4 types of gems Harry had in his prepared pouches were smoky quartz, zircon, quartz, and emerald. According to his cover, those types of gems could be absorbed to use wizard magic, binding magic, Chinook's, and illusion magic respectively. Any other type like dimensional energy and such would be overkill for most, as the eldritch magics powered by dimensional energy had been honed and sharpened in combat for tens of thousands of years. A black van with a red X within a red circle on the side drove up to the construction site and parked once they had a visual on Harry. A shorter than average man of interminable age and a gruff exterior exited the driver's seat and stood next to the door without approaching. The van's side doors slid open and from one side came a teen with red sunglasses. Harry sensed formidable power behind, and from the other side a fair beauty with shoulder-length red hair his gifted flame was excited to see. Their gazes locked and green eyes met green eyes. She turned away a moment later with a slightly self-conscious blush. From the passenger side of the van emerged a young woman who, like the other, only stood next to the door. The sunglasses-wearing teen and the redhead walked over to where Harry was sitting on a large piece of metal and watching. "Hi there, I'm Scott, and this is Jean. Were you the one who got in a fight with some of the Brotherhood earlier?" Harry smiled. Who doesn't like a little comical misunderstanding? Harry had been living with monks for the last 3 years and hadn't had a good target for a prank in far too long. He placed the metal he was sitting on in his inventory, which made it vanish before everyone's eyes as he got up and said, "Ah, I see, you must be a friend of theirs." "What?" "No dash." Harry dashed forward to nail Scott in the stomach, but the teen shifted his weight and turned to dispel most of the force of the blow. He seemed to instinctively move to take his sunglasses off, which caused Harry to jump back before a surge of red energy erupted from his eye sockets that threatened to gouge out the sky. Jean shouted placatively, "No wait, we're just here to talk." Harry said, "Americans must have the most interesting conversations, since those who talk can either make great big fireballs or shoot lasers from their eyes. Of course, if that's how Americans choose to converse, I'm happy to reciprocate." Harry took out a large emerald from his pouch and took a moment to look at it before saying, "It matches your lovely eyes red," which had her turn away from him. Scott had closed his eyes and was taking what appeared to be a visor from his pocket and putting it on. Harry once more cast Lumos within the gem, causing it to shine brightly before he placed it into his inventory while closing his fist for effect. Harry only had 2 illusion spells he could cast, and the cover he was using would only allow him to use 1 spell per gem. Harry cast Independent Doppelganger, which made 4 Harry Potters appear and start running around in accordance to Harry's will. 2 of the illusions rushed Jean while Harry and the other rushed Scott. Jean pressed her hands forward at the illusions coming at her, and Scott's visor released a thin red beam at the doppelgangers, which passed harmlessly through them. Had he started on the ones coming at him, he would have hit Harry first, but instead he shot through the ones coming at Jean first with a sweeping motion. Harry accelerated before the beam reached him and delivered another gut blow, but this time he centered it, not allowing Scott to throw off the force. Jean released a field of Chinook force which locked onto Harry and lifted him into the air. Harry smiled at her and pulled out a large piece of quartz from his pouch, which started shining brightly in his hand before it vanished into his inventory. Harry then thought up what the phoenix looked like in all its glory and concentrated on the image before locking in on Jean's mind and sending her the image. Jean's focus on telekinesis was completely disrupted by the intense and vivid image sent through telepathy, and the breaking of her concentration caused her a headache which made her groan slightly. Harry safely dropped from the air and Scott noticed Jean get attacked and shouted, "Jean," before turning to Harry and releasing a high-volume blast of red energy that passed harmlessly through him. The real Harry switched for an illusion the moment he hit the ground, and Scott had been too distracted to notice it. Harry had moved behind Jean, who was still rubbing her head. A part of her wanted to get the image out of her head so she could focus on the fight, but another part wouldn't let her ignore it. Scott couldn't recklessly fire his optics blast when Harry was behind Jean, so he would only watch Harry pull out another gem, zircon this time. He noticed it was different than the previous 2 gems he pulled out, but recognized the pattern and tried to shoot a pinpoint optics blast to shatter it. Harry ducked partially behind Jean, and the zircon glowed with the cast Lumos spell before vanishing once more. Golden chains shot from the ground, and just like with John, Scott was completely bound by them before he could react. Harry casually walked over to the van and said, "That was fun. Do you want to talk?" The gruff man said, "Nah, I'm not much of a talker. Fighting though. How about a little one-on-one?" Harry smiled and took out another emerald from his pouch, and it glowed once more. The gruff man said, "That's ain't gonna work on me, brat," and rushed at Harry, the real one. Harry figured he somehow could tell the difference, so he dispelled them and moved to fight. He struck his side, but those ribs reminded him of Kyantang's, and when Harry blocked the man's counter it made his own bones ache. Harry had long since figured that although stats were not always clear-cut, they were usually straightforward. An average adult human had 10 of each stat. However, an average adult man struggles with the newspaper's crossword and doesn't bother memorizing anything not related to his job or life. An average adult human can also deadlift about 100 pounds. If that was broken down, then each point in STR was 10 additional pounds that could be deadlifted. Harry once heard that the world record for the deadlift was over 1,000 pounds, meaning a normal human could in fact reach a STR stat of 100. From the force of his blows, Harry figured this guy had a STR of at least 200. His own was higher at 275, but neither of them were going all out. That was just Harry's estimate for his max. Moreover, this guy's bones had 0 give, and unless he was mistaken, the short man was at least 4 times heavier than Harry was. The amount they held back lessened and lessened as blows were exchanged or dodged at faster speeds with heavier strikes. Harry wasn't nearly as sturdy, but he didn't bruise, and injuries recovered quickly, which his opponent took notice of. Harry was shocked to find that this guy's combat standard was close to, if not in the same realm as the Mandarin, and even if Harry's strength and speed were a fraction higher, Harry was only keeping up because of how easy the man was going on him. Harry rushed back while taking out his last zircon and making it glow. His opponent took a stance, and though he was bound in golden chains a moment later, he was not taken to the ground. He smirked at Harry, and with the sound of metal against metal, 3 shining claw-like blades erupted from between the man's knuckles. He swung up his arm and the nearly indestructible chain was cleanly sliced through. Harry frowned. Metal claws? I should have brought a diamond or a ruby. Well, live and learn. Before the fight could continue, Harry felt Scott's energy build up, so Harry jumped away to dodge the sneak attack. Since Harry was using each gemstone to cast a single spell, he wasn't maintaining them, so the chains binding Scott had faded, giving the teen what he thought was an opening to strike. Harry's opponent snarled, "Scott? What do you think you're doing? I said this is a one-on-one fight, dot. But Logan, he hurt dash." The redhead said, "I'm fine, Scott, he didn't hurt me at all." She had recovered and was watching Harry's fight. Harry felt her mental probes and allowed her to scan his surface thoughts. She already determined Harry was just sparring. It seems Scott was the only one who thought the fight was serious. Harry turned to the visor-wearing mutant and flatly said, "You came here to talk. Words are cheap, so I wanted to have a different type of conversation, and you've said more than enough. Someone willing to shoot another man in the back isn't the type of person I want to have further conversations with." He turned to Jean and said, "It was a pleasure to meet you." And he turned to the warrior and said, "It has been an honor to fight someone at your level. I'd like to continue, but I'm just about out of gems." Harry flattened the pouch he took the last zircon from to show it was in fact empty. Harry then took out a smoky quartz, and before anyone could react it glowed and vanished. Harry said, "It is a shame, but my trip to the States seems to have been a waste." He glared slightly at Scott for a moment before apparating away, vanishing before them all. Or at least that's what it looked like he did. Harry apparated to the highest point of the construction site and shifted into his snowy owl form. Just to be safe, he also cast a few spells to completely suppress his presence. From his new vantage point, he saw a large raven perched on the top of one of the nearby trees, who seemed to have watched the whole thing and was paying close attention to the X-Men. Harry also saw someone further down the street, a teen with white hair. The man, apparently called Logan, growled out in a tone laced with sarcasm, "Way to go, Cyclops. The future leader of the X-Men just showed a potential ally, exactly the type of person he would be following if he joined up with us. Nice job displaying the virtues and values Charles took all that effort into shoving into your thick skull. But Jean dash. Quiet," he shouted. He then looked over to the redhead and asked, "What did he actually do?" "He sent a really detailed image into my head of a giant flaming bird. A phoenix maybe? It looked so real. It broke my concentration, which gave me a bit of a headache, but that's it." Logan asked, "He's a telepath?" "I don't know. When he sent the image into my mind, he seemed to be a telepath." But while you were fighting, his mind didn't have any trace of telepathy. Harry inwardly smirked. Telepaths have natural, passive defenses against mental intrusion. Harry simply withdrew them all and let her see his mind. However, she saw only what his occlumency allowed her to see. Logan said, "So a telepath but not a telepath. Everyone noticed him using those crystals, right? And didn't he make that metal piece he was sitting on vanish too?" Scott seemed to try and be helpful by adding, "Yeah, I'm not sure about the metal, but he definitely pulled one of those crystals each time he did something. When I tried to shoot one, he moved it out of the way." The woman who was still standing next to the van said, "So what? He absorbed those crystals for power." Logan shook his head. "He wasn't weak even without them, Pixie. Kid was actually stronger and faster than me. He also has experience. Not practice, but actual life and death combat experience, and a lot of it. I think he might have had a healing factor too." Logan narrowed his eyes and looked at Scott. "He was testing us. Not much of a point joining with someone weaker than you." He turned and headed into the van, back to the institute. "Let's see if Charles can track the kid down." Harry himself never planned on turning down their invitation. He was just playing hard to get. The fact that the quest hadn't failed proved that. Once the van drove off, the white-haired teen sped over to the area faster than a blur. A moment later, the raven on the treetop flew down and transformed into a blue-skinned woman with blood-red hair. Now Harry was interested. Chapter 30, the Brotherhood and the X-Men. The white-haired teen gave the area a look over before asking in a rapid voice, "Was that the guy Mystique? How strong was he?" The blue-skinned woman answered smoothly, "For someone who looked no older than yourself, very. I did not believe Pyro and Avalanche at first, but it seems they were not lying after all. Heard that. Couldn't see much though without the X-nobodies spotting me. What do you think? He seemed to use tools but fought Wolverine well enough without them. The fact that Xavier sent his children implies this new arrival is one of us. It seems the Boy Scouts' temper has certainly worked in our advantage this time. Look around, Pietro. Very few teleportation abilities can take someone very far. If he is nearby, I want him found. He must join the Brotherhood." "You got it, boss." With that, the man sped away faster than a blur. Harry watched the scene from above and noticed this white-haired teen, Pietro, had a concentration of time energy on his body. Harry figured he could increase time's frame of reference for himself while in motion and move several-fold faster than others while watching the world in slow motion. Harry had no simple way of countering such a person. Some of the anti-magic spells he could once use may have had a dampening effect against the teen's access to time energy, but Harry hadn't had any luck in making another anti-magic spell, and he couldn't make more binding equipment that used anti-magic until he could cast such spells. Before Harry could consider further ramifications, the blue-skinned woman, Mystique, shifted back into the form of a raven and took flight. Harry considered following her or getting close and placing a tracking charm on her, but if it turned out she was just flying around looking for him, he'd feel pretty silly following her around. Once she left the area, Harry operated into the sky above a more populated section of North Salem and flew down into an empty alleyway before shifting back to human form and removing the concealing spells he placed on himself. Harry walked around for a few minutes and eventually spotted the speedy mutant down the street. He allowed himself to be followed into a hotel and walked up to the counter. Harry sensed the bearer of time energy follow him inside and walk over to a coach. Harry visibly took the last quartz crystal from the pouch at his side and kept it in his hand while talking to the woman at the front desk. She stated that Harry wasn't old enough to order a room, and Harry used lumos on the crystal held below the desk out of her line of sight, but in Pietro's. He placed it into his inventory and used a simple form of telepathy to make the woman think that an adult was standing next to Harry, showing the right ID and everything needed for a room. She accepted the cash payment and gave Harry a room card, even saying the room number out loud and thanking the man for his time, even though anyone looking would see she was talking to empty space. Thankfully, the only one paying attention was the white-haired teen on the couch. Harry thought to himself if these guys needed more hints then that they weren't worth his time. Not long after arriving in his room, Harry took an empty pet carrier out of his inventory. It had a two-way portkaya that would send itself to Harry's London home and a few minutes later, return to the same spot. Harry used a charm while saying, "Goose, get in and sit tight and this will bring you to me." The charm would make the pet carrier repeat the message upon arrival, and with that Harry activated the portkaya. A few moments later the pet carrier returned and Goose casually walked out. Goose conveyed a question though their link, "What are you getting yourself into this time?" Harry answered the sassy Flurkin back, "I'm going to attend a boarding school filled with mutants. Please don't eat any of them." Goose turned her head up at that and conveyed back, "I don't eat junk food except for special occasions." She jumped up on the bed and got comfortable before sending another question at him, "What kind of mutants?" Harry wondered how many types of mutants Goose was aware of. Goose seemed to know lots about Earth, about magics, and all kinds of things, and it wasn't like she had access to the internet. Or did she? Though Harry couldn't imagine his familiar using a computer. He answered, "The humankind who have awakened their X gene, hoping they weren't tastier than other kinds of mutants." He would never know, however, since Goose didn't say anything after that. While waiting for the carrier to return, Harry had been setting up several traps and relics. He couldn't make more until he had more spells to use, but the amount he made before that was still in the hundreds, even if they were all prototypes. Harry could also use wizard magic to create things to his heart's content, but doing so would fry the TV inside the room. Harry decided to proceed anyways and compensate the hotel for the TV afterwards. One thing Harry did was place a overpowered diagnostic charm on the door frame, turning it into a scanning type artifact. Since wooden door frames were not an ideal material for such artifacts, it would burn out after a single use but would give Harry a detailed report of the next fellows who entered. Knock knock. Harry answered the door, and unsurprisingly the white-haired teen was standing there with a stern-looking 30-something-looking woman wearing no-nonsense business attire and glasses. Harry asked, "Yes? Can I help you?" The woman spoke up, "Actually, it is I who can help you. Do you mind if we come in? I would like a moment to speak with you." Harry shrugged and said with his clipped British accent, "Well, I certainly have a moment. Come on in, I suppose. Make yourself comfortable." Harry pulled out the chairs near the desk and dragged them near the bed and sat himself down. Pietro walked into the room first but turned every which way to make sure there was nothing there that could be dangerous. Harry internally laughed at this as the teen completely ignored the flurkin lying on the bed. The traps and relics scattered about all looked like trash, so he didn't pay attention to that either. A moment later the woman entered and closed the door behind her. She turned from the door to face Harry while the surface of her body rolled over in waves, revealing her blue form, while her business attire shifted into something simpler that looked like a white one-piece dress. Harry raised an eyebrow at her and smiled back. "You did say to get comfortable." Harry looked thoughtful for a moment before shrugging once more and not paying it any more mind. Neither sat down in the provided chairs, preferring to lean on them while they remained standing. The shapeshifter said, "My name is Mystique and this is Pietro. We are from the Brotherhood of Mutants." Harry answered back, "Acquaintances of the fellows from before? Well, I'm Harry Potter. I don't suppose you're here to fight, are you?" Mystique quickly shook her head in the negative and said, "No, I'm here to offer you a place in the Brotherhood. A chance to rise above the humans and take your rightful place in the world." Harry suddenly felt another presence within his mind. A telepath had come knocking and entered when he found the front door was open. Harry's mind was available to anyone who wanted to come in but would only allow others to see what he wanted. This person seemed to be borrowing his senses and trying to discern his thoughts on the conversation, but it wasn't from either of the mutants in the room. Harry said, "Even if that held any interest to me, what could your Brotherhood offer that would help me accomplish it?" He had no interest in such a thing, but he was curious about the resources these mutants had to make such an offer. Mystique answered, "Strength. We will make you stronger." Harry thought, "That's it?" He looked over at Pietro and asked, "And how exactly do you gain strength?" The speedster quickly answered, "Combat training mostly. The more you fight the better you get at fighting." Harry had a lot to say about that but simply asked, "How many times in the last few months have you fought someone or something that was willing to kill you if you lost?" Harry waited 5 seconds but there was no reply as the teen seemed to still be thinking it over. Harry asked, "Then in the last few months, how many different people have you fought who are stronger than you?" This time he quickly answered, 6. And lastly Harry asked, "And were at least half or more than half of these 6 members of the Brotherhood?" He looked like he wanted to answer but a glance from Mystique rendered him silent, as it wasn't an answer they were proud to announce. Harry gave a flat look to Mystique and asked in monotone, "So in conclusion, your Brotherhood doesn't have anyone strong enough for you to improve yourself sparring against, and you either challenge others merciful enough not to kill you when you lose or those weaker than you. And you're saying I'll get stronger if I join you? Did I miss anything?" Mystique looked rather angry at the logical conclusion and said, "Yes, do you want to die?" Harry gave a knowing smirk to her and confidently said, "If you think you have a chance, feel free to try. But there will be no turning back once you do. I'll have you know there isn't a single soul in this world who has tried to kill me and lived to tell about it. I don't give second chances to those who come at me with lethal force, regardless of the fact that it never takes." Harry gave Mystique the same stare he gives to the creatures that spawned during battle mediation. Harry was not a killer, he was a warrior. In combat against someone seeking his life, he would end his opponents. He wouldn't make them suffer, of course. He'd never make someone suffer before killing them. It was that efficiency that made him even more dangerous. Pietro, who wasn't on the receiving end of Harry's hard gaze, said, "What the hell? You're immortal." Harry answered, "I didn't say that. My power has a lot of applications, and with some prior preparation, there is a lot I can do." Mystique realized that her own bluff wasn't going to do anything and understood from his gaze he was not bluffing. Changing the subject, she said, "The Brotherhood is not weak, but neither are the humans. We must stand together for when the time comes that they turn on us." Harry said, "You're making a lot of assumptions there. However, let's skip over all of that for now. I assume you must have seen me fight or heard about my little scuffle with your acquaintances. What did you learn about my power?" Pietro answered before she could speak up, "Let's see, you're strong, pretty fast, though not as fast as me. You can make fire not burn, make chains, make illusions, and teleport. But besides your strength, you need to use rocks for your other powers." Harry said, "Close enough. I call my power upgrade. I can absorb pure metals or pure gemstones and get short-term boosts, long-term boosts, or momentary access to certain forms of energy. I can also absorb food and use energy from it to recover. If I absorb food in advance, I gain the ability to recover until it has been digested. I'm strong because not long ago I absorbed a lot of platinum and a few hours ago I absorbed a lot of steel. Absorbing gemstones at least the size of an egg give me a moment's worth of access to the other abilities." Both mutants were stunned as neither expected Harry to directly tell them the details of his powers. Harry also thought to himself, fully knowing there was a listener in his head, that he could also absorb books and know their contents perfectly for a few days. Pietro shook his head, and once he processed the information he shouted, "You're a goddamn premium gamer." Harry froze complete at the term and barely was able to ask, "What?" Mystique said with annoyance, "What are you talking about, Pietro?" The speedster pointed at Harry and said, "In online games there are bastards who spend lots of real money to get stronger than anyone else, not because they're better, but because they're richer. They're always topping the leaderboards and leave guys who play with just their skill in the dust. This guy's power is just like that. He can spend money on stuff to unfairly make himself stronger without working for it." Harry sat frozen for 3 full seconds before he burst out into hysterical laughter. He thought Pietro had somehow figured out his true power, but it was that of all things. He could easily keep laughing for a few minutes, but that would be rude to his guests, so he took a few deep breaths to calm himself, though he still had a large smile plastered across his face. Harry said, "Premium. I like that. I hope you don't mind if I use it in the future. Anyways, if I joined you guys, I wouldn't be able to keep my own source of income and your brotherhood would have to spend its funds upgrading me. If I go too long without absorbing anything, I'm no different from a very skilled human." Mystique frowned and said, "If it is just metals, we can easily grant you with an unlimited supply." Harry noticed Pietro's eyes seemed to widen in some sort of realization. Harry figured he just thought of someone with a mutant ability that could guarantee such a promise. Harry said, "Well, tabling that for now, there is one last point. Are you confident in the future that there will be no one stronger than the Brotherhood?" Mystique said with firm resolution, "Yes. We are already gathering the strongest mutant dash." "Stop," Harry interrupted her. He said, "Just mutants." She was irked at the interruption and said, "Yes, we are the Brotherhood of Mutants after all." Harry shook his head and said, "Then you are wasting your time. If you're only recruiting mutants, then you are just looking for a strong mutant. That is because the only way your group could win is if you found a single unbeatable mutant. But even if you actually found such a mutant who shared the same goals, they'd never listen to you, you would have to follow them. I'm sure whoever you currently follow is very powerful, but unless he cannot be defeated by anyone, your goal is meaningless. Strength that is not absolute is not strength. Unless an undefeatable mutant is already a part of the Brotherhood, you can't claim you have strength, which means that in the end, you have nothing." Pietro said, "Now hold it right there. No one can beat Magneto." Mystique shouted, "Silence, Pietro." Harry shrugged and said, "Let's end this here. You don't have any means for me to get stronger that I can't use myself. You don't have a source of the resources I need superior to my own. And since your leader isn't already the leader of the world, then he obviously is not undefeatable, which means your goals cannot be achieved without luck. I will not be joining the Brotherhood, so you can show yourselves out." Mystique had watched Harry's fight with the X-Men nearly from start to finish and had heard from Pyro exactly how quick to fight Harry had been. She thought just giving him a chance to fight more would do it, the easiest recruitment ever had by anyone. Instead, he used calm and dispassionate logic to break down her offer piece by piece and show her how worthless it was. She couldn't even counter it because she knew that her boss was not in fact undefeatable and she was in fact looking for unstoppable mutants. She gave him one last glare that seemed about as effective against him as a gentle breeze and said, "You're making a great mistake. If you stand in our way, you won't live to regret it." She had been used to threatening people for so long she had forgotten their earlier conversation, so Harry's response was unexpected for her. Harry smiled and innocently said, "Oh, is that a promise? Something to look forward to then. I hope you won't disappoint me." Pietro muttered to himself, "Bastard probably paid for extra lives," before saying aloud, "Let's get out of here, Mystique. Without pay to play, this guy's just a loser and he's even crazier than my sister." With that the pair left and Harry felt the presence eavesdropping on his awareness leave as well. He checked the door to see what the diagnostic charm revealed and was more than a little surprised. Pietro was pretty much what he expected. The teen's nerves seemed to channel time energy, which increased his relative perspective of time-space. From a standard point of view, he could think fast, react fast, and move fast. The time energy likely spread out to his muscles, allowing him to move while the world would be slowly moving around him. Mystique was different. Her power existed in every single cell. They could divide and even merge at will. Every cell could practically shift into another cell. She could take the form of any human of any age and likely even take the form of most animals, though he suspected it would be harder for her to take the form of larger animals. What was interesting about her power was the similarities it bore to his own. Harry's cells were all made up of the same energy, and if injured, the excess energy of nearby cells could be used to make cells to replace damaged ones. Mystique's cells were similar in that each cell could potentially turn into any other cells, though it was obvious she had limits. He doubted if her head was removed, she could turn her hand into a head and survive. The similarities, however, were enough to make him wonder though. Harry's mutant power was basically the ability that kept his magic obscurus particles together in the shape of Harry Potter. But, was that all his mutant power could do? Both the Phoenix Force and Then had told him he was capable of far more than just what he knew. The Sorceress Supreme of the future did in fact tell him that he had to start practicing his mutant powers. That meant there was in fact more to his powers than just keeping his form and repairing his form. Knock knock. His musings were interrupted by his next visitor. Visitors as it were. Moreover, one of the people behind the door felt like a powerful sorcerer saturated not with eldritch dimensional energy, but natural energy, as if Mother Nature herself was standing there. Harry answered the door once more and first noticed the one warrior he fought before called Logan standing to the side of a bald middle-aged man in a wheelchair and an African goddess of a woman behind him. She looked to be in her mid to late 20s, but Harry knew that level of saturation of natural energy would inhibit signs of age until she was in her late 60s, so she was likely closer to 50 than she was 20. Harry wasn't interested in older women, but he could appreciate beauty. Harry first turned to Logan and said, "We meet again. I'm sorry if you want a rematch, but I'll have to disappoint. I'm kinda low on strength at the moment unless you have a few pounds of steel laying around." He said, "Maybe later. I'm here because Charles wants a word." Harry said, "Ah, the peeper, so what can I do for you?" The bald man and the woman behind him were both startled at Harry's address of Xavier. The wheelchair-bound man asked, "I'm sorry, but what do you mean by that?" Harry said, "Well, you were the one peeping on my thoughts during my earlier conversation, right? I'm a pretty open guy, so I don't mind, but since you didn't ask permission to borrow my senses, you were peeping, thus, you are a peeper." Logan chuckled, which caused the woman to slap his shoulder. This caused him to chuckle more. The bald man sighed and said, "I apologize for intruding on your mind. When I learned we were not the first to arrive and speak with you, I was very concerned. Mystique's unique physiology prevents me from reading her thoughts, and young Maximov's thoughts run at a speed that is difficult to comprehend. I allowed my curiosity to get the better of me, and I ask your forgiveness. It won't happen again." Harry shrugged. "If you say so. You probably already know this, but I'm Harry Potter. Come on in. That's Goose, by the way." He motioned at the Flurkin, who had been amused by the previous guests and seemed to hope the next ones would be just as amusing. Harry wasn't worried about telepaths. When Harry had the Darkhold and Book of Vishanti in his inventory after getting his Chinook path and had paused, he reformatted his mind completely and then sealed the memories and knowledge of how he did it. He had no idea how long he must have spent using Chinooks and whatever he found in those books combined with a clemency to do it, but his mind had several nearly flawless defenses. If a telepath entered the mental plane that was Harry's mind, they would find a massive library. Thoughts Harry allowed to do so would echo through the halls, allowing those within to hear the thoughts he allowed them to hear. All of Harry's knowledge was organized into the book, so someone looking for something specific would have trouble finding it, as they would have to find the specific book. It wasn't possible to just enter his mind and find his memories or knowledge. And the books numbered in the thousands. That, however, was nothing compared to the mental attacks Harry somehow prepared during that time. When needed, Harry could cause perfect replicas of the thousands of different monsters Harry had encountered through his battle meditation to fill his library. He could send them to attack the minds of other telepaths or have them destroy weaker intruders or harass stronger ones, preventing them from finding the book and page containing the knowledge they wanted from Harry. There was even an automated security function that would automatically dispatch the hordes of monsters within Harry's mind if a book was taken from the shelf and not read in a designated reading area. That way, if someone did sneak inside without him knowing, or if he was incapacitated and unable to activate his defense, it would activate anyways. And last, the super-secret knowledge such as the dangerous magic from the Masters section of Camartage's library and stuff he found in the magic tomes of Hogwarts, the Black Library, and Salazar's private study were all hidden in folded space within Harry's mind. Should the space be unfolded, the library would become a massive maze and the monsters would automatically fill the maze. As for the knowledge of the Darkhold and Book of Vishanti, even Harry had no idea where it was, and he knew better than to try and look for it. The knowledge of what he did to his mind and how he did it was also locked up with those books as well. A moment after the trio entered, the telepath said, "I am Professor Charles Xavier. This is Logan and Aurora Monroe, also known as Wolverine and Storm." Harry recognized the name as the teacher of Ilyana Rasputin and took another look at her. Harry said, "Storm, huh? I'm guessing weather powers. You wouldn't happen to be descended from a long line of Kenyan priestesses with white hair going back thousands of years, would you?" Shocked recognition flashed before her eyes before she asked, "How could you possibly know that?" The curtains moved in the room despite the window being closed as the natural energy passively radiating off the woman reacted to her emotion. Harry looked back at the curtains to make it clear he noticed this and said, "Many aspects of my abilities revolve around what can be considered magic. I've learned more about magic than anyone you'll likely ever meet and have read a staggering number of books on the subject. One such book was written by a powerful sorceress who was once a priestess of a tribe and well known for their white hair priestesses, which had only a single line. You are likely her descendant." The book contained her own experiences with magic, especially weather magic, and everything she learned about it. I remember the book describing how easily passive emotions affected her power when casting, but it also described a practice she used to separate her emotions from her magic. Charles and Aurora were both shocked at this, and Logan asked, "Where is that book? If it can help Aurora, I'll do whatever it takes to get it." Aurora looked sweetly back at Logan and Harry could tell there was something between the two. Harry answered, "The one who owns the book is very reasonable. As her descendant, the book should go to Ms. Monroe anyways, so I should be able to get it. I can request it be shipped here and get it to you within a week." The book Harry referred to was indeed what he claimed, and in fact had been written by someone who was likely this woman's ancestor. She was also a former Sorcerer Supreme, and her book was in the Masters section of Camartage's library. It was one of the better ones on experiences dealing with natural energy and wind and weather magic. It also came with a caveat that it could be reclaimed by the tribe it originated from at any time, though they had likely forgotten about it. Xavier was startled at the easy admission of the existence of magic. he said, if it isn't too much trouble, would you mind displaying some magic? Harry took out his last smoky quartz from the pouch at his side and had it glow for a moment before sliding it into his inventory. He then turned an unused chair into a large pig. The group stared at the pig, who stared back and oinked. A moment later it turned back into a chair since Harry didn't use much magic on the spell. Xavier recovered from his shock the quickest and said, "Thank you, Harry, that was most enlightening. If you do know the location of such a book that can help Aurora, it would mean a great deal to us for her to obtain it. Now, although you've heard it before, I'd like to make you an offer as well. I was hoping you could join my institute. It is a boarding school for young mutants such as yourself. Exactly how much about me do you know? You were in my head after all." "Yes, but other than surface thoughts, there wasn't a single stray memory or idea out of place. I can easily admit yours the most organized mind I have ever seen. As the information wasn't needed to view your conversation with Mystique, I didn't access it, so I know next to nothing about you that you yourself have told us or told Mystique." Harry knew that of course, as his mind's defenses hadn't activated, meaning Charles hadn't taken a book off the shelf and tried to read it. He said, "All right then, I'll give you the basics. I was born in the UK and I turned 15 on July 31st. My mutation awoke a week before my 10th birthday when an accident happened which killed my relatives, and I wouldn't be alive if it hadn't awoken at the time. I spent the next several months and years traveling and learning much about my power. I am very smart and paid some people to make it look like I've been in school all this time, though I can test out if needed whenever I want to. I moved to New York today and got my US citizenship properly. I'm also rich, but that's another story." Xavier said, "I'm sorry about your relatives. So you've been alone this whole time?" Harry blankly said, "Don't be sorry about them." He got out a quartz crystal from his pocket, though it was from his inventory. He used up the 3 he put in his pouch, but they didn't know that, so it didn't matter. He made it glow for a moment before setting back into his inventory. He then took the book from his mind that had his memories of growing up with the Dursleys and copied it before sending the highlights to Xavier. Unlike Jean, the experienced telepath could have blocked the incoming transmission, but he did not. A moment later he wished he did. Charles went over the details, however, as it was something a teacher like himself needed in order to help his student. What he stood out the most was their hatred of him for what he was, their obvious lies about his parents, and the fact that they only called him freak or boy. Charles said, "Harry, I believe your mother might have been a mutant." Harry pretended to be shocked while inwardly snickering. There was no good way to fake memories even for magic users, so he could only show him real ones. He already guessed that the professor would make that conclusion, and it was logical considering the facts he knew and his prior experience. He said thoughtfully, "Maybe. Well, in answer to your other question, for the last 3 years I've had a teacher who was basically a mystic monk. I learned many things, including how to fight properly, and it was only a few months ago I was told there was nothing more I could learn without leaving on my own. And you decided to move to New York? Well, I do hope I can help you achieve your goals. If you are not against such an idea, I'd like to invite you over to the Institute tomorrow and give you a tour. For many mutants, the Institute is their only home, but although that does not seem to be the case for you, I still think you can find yourself a home there with others such as yourself." Harry smiled and said, "Your pitch certainly sounds nicer than Mystique's did. All right, you have a deal. I'll show up tomorrow, and if I like what I see, I'll stay." Goose meowed from the bed. Harry said, Is there anyone allergic to cats there? If Goose can't come with me, that's kind of a deal breaker." Logan chuckled, "No, we've got stranger things than cats at the mansion." Harry wondered about that. Something to look forward to. The trio said their goodbyes and left the hotel. Harry figured that was a pretty good display of magic along with Shinix, so all he had to do was accept the invite. He wondered what he would get for a quest reward this time.